Oh, what's this about? I talked about the relatively well-known show Hell of a Boss last video, but now I'm talking about something super niche. Yeah, the last video was all a ploy to get you to pay attention to me, so now I can give this show a piece of my mind. But you probably have no clue what the show is, and I honestly would not blame you. Basically, this video is going to detail every single episode of this show. All 3 seasons, totaling 52 episodes, which is roughly 20 hours of content. That's more than the 8 episodes I did for Hell of a Boss. Yeah, I'm a bit crazy about this show. But not in the obsessive loving way, just the I can't stop thinking about the show, and if I don't review it in a video at some point, I don't know how I'll stop thinking about it kind of crazy. So here I am. I'm gonna review Turbo Fast, the spin-off show of the DreamWorks movie Turbo. And I'm not gonna be a baby and make a 10-minute long video about it. No. I'm going all in with this. But since many of you are also likely unfamiliar with Turbo, I'll give a somewhat brief summary of the movie. The movie Turbo stars 2 snail brothers, Theo and Chet. The 2 of them live in a tomato patch near some human's house. Chet appreciates order and likes to keep his brother grounded, while Theo is off dreaming about becoming a professional racer, like his idol Guy Gagné. However, the main difference between Guy and Theo is that Guy is a human who races in a car, and Theo is a snail. Enough said. One day, Theo decides to go check out a highway to watch cars, but accidentally ends up getting swept inside a car and ingesting some weird racing fuel thing. This fuel turns Theo into a snail car, basically, allowing him to move super fast, use his eyes like headlights, and all kinds of other goofy things that cars can do. Of course, with this new ability, Theo can actually go through with his dreams of becoming a racer, but Chet worries that these new abilities are dangerous. Indeed, they cause catastrophe that causes both Theo and Chet to be kicked out of the tomato patch, leading them to be swiped up by crows and ending up at a small shopping mall, where they're kidnapped by a human named Tito. Tito has several other snails that also dream of racing. However, they don't have the abilities that Theo has. This introduction with the others basically grants him the titular and improvised name Turbo. Turbo and the group of snails decide to help each other by teaching them their techniques. Turbo, seeing an opportunity to participate in an actual race, decides to convince Tito to enter him. Both Chet and Tito's brother, Angelo, are doubtful of Turbo's abilities, reasonably, but manage to get past them and enter Turbo into the race anyway. Turbo and Guy happen to be participating in the same race, and so they get to compete to see if a snail can beat the almighty champion. Spoiler alert, the snail wins, thanks to his brother's encouraging words just as Turbo's about to give up at the end. A rather infuriating scene, if I may add. In the end, Tito wins back the money that he spent on the race and they all live happily ever after. Or something like that. Okay, maybe not the briefest summary, but you may get the general idea of the film. It's intended to teach you that you can accomplish your dreams no matter how crazy they may be. No matter who you are and where you come from, and no matter who tries to stop you. Hey wait, this isn't awful like Ratatouille, isn't it? Yeah, I suppose maybe DreamWorks was trying to emulate Pixar, just as they were emulating Disney in their prior movies. Unfortunately, they kind of missed the point of what made Ratatouille good. See, in Ratatouille, sorry perhaps if I'm butchering the pronunciation, the main character Remy simply used Linguini as a puppet for his cooking talent until the very end, where he proved with teamwork that rats were capable of cooking just as humans could in restaurants. Turbo unfortunately made the Mulan live-action remake mistake of giving its main character superpowers, and hence somewhat making the message of empowerment moot. Yes, Turbo does get help from other snails so that he can get better at racing, and inevitably motivate him to finish the dang race, but Turbo had to get his superpowers to make any of that possible. He had to get weird car abilities. Unfortunately, when you have a metaphor as strong as a snail wanting to race, you're better off going the route that Monsters University did. In that movie, Mike realizes that he will never be scary, but that's okay. He can help monsters who are scary do better, rather than doing the scaring himself. But no, DreamWorks really didn't know how to emulate Pixar correctly. We ended up with a snail being able to race, but at the cost of empowerment. Without those car abilities, we wouldn't have a movie, so unfortunately the message of the movie falls a bit flat. But weirdly, I kind of like this movie. I hear a lot of people say this movie is one of DreamWorks' worst movies, and yeah, maybe it is among their least good movies. But I think using worst is a bit of a demeaning word for this movie. The movie is inoffensive, it's made for kids, and it's planting the idea in the child's head that they can achieve their dreams if they just try. Though they might be better off watching Ratatouille or Monsters University. Not just for their messages, but also because those movies are frankly a lot more entertaining than Turbo. Turbo is more for the 8+ year olds, I would say. But if I've said so much bad about it, why do I like it? Well, it may in part be because I'm a bit of a snail fanatic, but also I think there's something unique about this movie, in that it has such an interesting world. Snails that can talk? That's brilliant! But perhaps it doesn't just stay at snails, and perhaps knowing these bug creatures have awareness makes the way humans interact with them a little different. Unfortunately, I'm a bit of a sucker for those kinds of stories, changing the way humans interact with other creatures. There's potential for world building here, and believe it or not, Titmouse Inc., goofy name, decided to take advantage of that, and so the Netflix exclusive series was born, Turbo Fast. It's a spin-off series meant to take place a few months after the original film, so it's pretty much a follow-up to the movie. If you cared enough about Turbo, you'll get to see what kind of shenanigans the crew got up to after the Indy 500. And oh man, oh man, oh man, it is weird. Strap in, gang, we're going season by season, episode by episode. Let's get started. Episode 1 is pretty much the pilot, if you will, of the series. It's the reintroduction of all the characters. It also introduces the main setting, Starlight City, which is a miniature city for all the snails that Tito managed to collect. Notably, the celebrities of the city are, of course, Turbo, then Whiplash, Skidmark, Smooth Move, Burn, White Shadow, and kind of Chet, but not really. These are all the characters from the movie. I just didn't bother to mention most of their names until now. Anyway, in summary, the Snail Gang introduces Turbo to a new track that they developed that takes advantage of several strategies that Turbo is not very familiar with. In the first phase, Turbo messes up the entire way, and as he approaches the finish, a new character appears. His name is Hardcase, and he's a tiger beetle, meaning he's very, very fast. Of course, this makes the two worthy competitors. Hardcase is seemingly jealous about Turbo getting all the attention for being a fast bug capable of winning the Indy 500. Unfortunately, this doesn't really get developed anymore in the show, but I suppose it's a basic enough motivation that doesn't need a whole lot of development. Anyway, Hardcase threatens Turbo that he'll destroy and take over Starlight City if Turbo loses the race. Spoiler alert again, Turbo wins the race. What I think makes this first episode immediately better than the movie is that it better understands the message the film meant to communicate. Turbo is fast, yes, but this episode better focuses on the contributions of his friends to help him learn the track and win against Hardcase. In the end, he uses a combination of everything he's learned to overcome an unexpected obstacle that was caused by Hardcase. It's a simple episode, but it already feels like it better understands what the film could have been. As for the episode's animation, you can probably tell that it's really freaking nice. The lighting is insanely pretty and the animation itself is very fluid and complex. It really captures the energy of the races. The art style I'm kind of mixed on. It's simple, hence allowing for more complex animation, but I can't say it's the most pleasant art style I've ever seen for a show. That's not to say it's bad, it's just decent. It's certainly unique too. Lastly, the characters are properly introduced in this episode. In the movie, they weren't too established and were mostly cruxes for Turbo to succeed. In the show, we have a bit more of an opportunity to develop these characters. Turbo is the overly cocky and unwise character who is pretty much just a teenager, thinking he's better than he actually is, but has a lot of life experience ahead to slap him into shape. Or Whiplash can do that for him. Speaking of, Whiplash is the experienced and stone-cold trainer type for Turbo. He's harsh, but he has good intentions, and for now it seems like his softer side is buried deep within him. Skidmark is absolutely bonkers, who kind of acts like the typical fourth wall breaking character you expect from a group such as this. I think I'd have to call him my favorite character, maybe because I see a bit of myself in him. Smooth Move is the super chillax character who thinks of witty solutions to the dangers his friends are put in. In this episode, he scares Hardcase and his army of tiger beetles away using a previously established fact that tiger beetles are prey to frogs. Burn is the sassy and sarcastic character who is rightfully confident, but is also a bit obnoxious. I think it was established in the movie that Burn had a crush on Chet, and I guess that's being fully established here since they act like a couple. White Shadow is the dumb character. Yeah, not much more to say about that. At least he's not overbearingly and jerkishly stupid. He's just less witty compared to the others. Lastly, Chet is basically the same as he was in the movie. He's paranoid and overly cautious, especially for his brother's safety. Clearly, each character has their basic framework set in the very first episode, and I think that's really neat. I'm excited to see how they develop in the future. Oh right, last and shortest point, I think the pacing is a bit fast. I guess you have to expect that from an episode that has to quickly introduce a bunch of things for the rest of the series. Thankfully, unlike Hell of a Boss's pilot, it feels more like a proper episode rather than just a pilot. Anyway, that's all I have to say for episode 1. The other episodes should hopefully have shorter reviews compared to episode 1. Final note, most episodes come in bunches of 2, but I'll review them together as if they were one episode. Okay, that's all. Let's move on. For these double features, I'm going to be going in order of when they appear. So first I'm going to review Dung Ball Derby. Dungball Derby highlights White Shadow and his obsession with a sports team in the titular Dungball Derby. The game is basically like soccer, or football if you're not American, except the heavy rollers are always meant to win against the stinkers, the two teams. Initially, it seems like White Shadow doesn't understand this, so he participates against the rollers to try to defeat them. Later, the rest of the fast crew replace the other teammates and work alongside White Shadow to help him win, but he ends up missing the goal and allows the rollers to win. It's revealed by the end that White Shadow was actually fully aware of the rollers' consistent victories and he was just playing his part. Honestly, I find this episode a bit boring because I really do not care for sports, but this episode had a pretty nice theme. I like seeing how much Fast wanted to help White Shadow understand what the game was really about, which builds their relationship with him. It's even better when White Shadow's character is subverted and he isn't actually a complete idiot, understanding the game after all and proving he is well and truly a real Dungball Derby fan. Generally, I just like White Shadow's characterization in this episode. He's clearly childish in nature, but clearly has the maturity of someone who isn't ignorant to the world around him. I'm rather glad White Shadow was expanded first since his character was very underdeveloped in the first episode. Final notes, the animation is noticeably a bit worse compared to the first episode. I understand the first episode was so fancy because I had to attract audiences, so I'm not too sad over it, but I still think the animation is really nice and it gives a good sense of action in the competition section. Also, the pacing was surprisingly good in this episode. I suppose since it's such a simple concept for an episode, I think my only complaint is that we don't get to see much out of the other characters in this episode, especially Chet. But that's not really the end of the world. We can have some episodes that develop individual characters. Anyway, next up is Ace of Race. This episode introduces two new antagonists, Ace Gecko and Breakneck. Ace Gecko is a con man who tries to swindle snails out of their tomatoes. What does Ace want with the tomatoes? We don't really know. In this episode, he manages to convince Chet and later Turbo to compete in challenges that are cheated to allow Ace to benefit. He does this with the help of Breakneck, who, for the moment, we don't know much about. Apparently, Whiplash knows about him, though. The conflict of the episode involves Ace setting up a simple race with Turbo that has resulted in many people betting for Ace, meaning if Ace loses, all of the snails will lose their tomatoes, and Ace will benefit. Turbo finds this out through White Shadow, and manages to force Ace to win the race through Whiplash's help and Chet's attempts at help. This episode manages to develop 3 characters while also introducing 2 new ones, and all while having relatively nice pacing. I'm really quite impressed with this show so far. Whiplash is clearly very witty, having to fight through Turbo's seeming lack of intelligence during competitions. He's pretty much like a wise old trainer for Turbo, which gives them a nice dynamic. Turbo continues his consistency of being perhaps the least witty in Fast, which makes his relationship with the rest of Fast invaluable, as opposed to the film, where they were there to help him once and that was really it. Lastly, Chet is further established as extremely paranoid, and like his brother, not very good at thinking ahead. My main flaw with his character is that he seems almost too dependent on the other characters for him to have characterization. He's not really his own snail yet, besides his intense paranoia. As for other notes, I want to talk about the writing of episodes in general. The episodes are only around 11 minutes long, meaning they have to make simple stories. This works greatly to the benefit of the show because it allows slow introductions of character traits and world building. It's especially better if you've watched the entire series through, like I have. Nothing really feels like it's missing in these episodes. All questions that need answering are answered, besides the intentional openings for future episodes. So the episodes themselves are written well, but most of the issues come in the humor. The humor is very hit or miss. Some jokes might get a chuckle out of me, others will leave me dead inside. Unfortunately, I would say it's the weakest part of the show, and it doesn't really get much better as it goes. But I can disregard the humor if the show has good writing otherwise. And it does, so I disregard it. Let's move on then. Bumper Dome develops Chet's character. Yay! This show is clearly listening to me. This episode is about Chet nearly surviving a chimichanga falling and crushing him, giving him an adrenaline rush, which he wants more of. Skidmore gifts Chet a shell which allows him to hover, and this leads to a meeting Baron von Schwarzenegger. He's the announcer for a competition named Bumper Dome, which encourages bugs to compete in a life-or-death race to victory. Only one person can survive it, but Chet is ignorant to this for a long time in the competition. When he does find out, he starts freaking out and doesn't want to participate anymore. The rest of Fast finds out he's competing and helps Chet survive with his own technique introduced at the beginning of the episode. Fortunately, the other competitors didn't actually die, apparently, because spoiler alert, you'll be seeing Gigundus again. He's the guy on screen right now. I'm sure you care. Now this episode is a bit weird to me. The conflict is certainly interesting. Chet is very safety obsessed, and is definitely the least interested in danger. However, an adrenaline rush brings him to participate in what he assumes to be a race. When it's revealed the race is actually a life or death game, Chet is freaked out, which is realistic. But this is probably because it's a long-lasting danger that gives him very high chances of dying. But I weirdly can't decide whether this conflicts with him nearly being crushed by food, something that could have very well killed him, or not. What's even weirder is that if you're familiar with the movie, Chet got scooped up by crows and very much did not enjoy the experience. But maybe he was afraid of his different surroundings as opposed to the crows nearly killing him, which probably canceled out his joy from an adrenaline rush. I don't know. I really don't have a point in all of this. I suppose if I'm this confused, then that means the episode handled Chet's character relatively well, and I think this new danger-seeking side of him is pretty neat, and I hope it continues to show up in future episodes. Anyway, with all that blabbering done, I'll talk about the rest. The other characters aren't developed really at all in this episode. We just see that Burn is really concerned for Chet's safety, and Turbo is clearly capable of being smart while his brother is in danger. And that's about it, really. Small developments here and there. Besides the new major addition of a helicopter blade allowing Chet to be able to fly from now on. This will undeniably come into play in future episodes. Speaking of, let's move on now. Roaches is about Tito's restaurant being invaded by roaches, and the fast crew have to defend it. Yeah, this is a super simple episode. There's not really any new character development in this episode, and the only new characters introduced are this trio of roaches that surf the sewer system. What's funniest to me is that these roaches really hate spicy food, but they decided to pursue a Mexican-themed restaurant. You might as well go to an ice cream place looking for food that isn't cold. This is acknowledged in the episode, at least, and it's not really a fundamental problem with the episode or anything, since some Mexican food can be unspicy. Seemingly this episode is really here for the sake of entertainment, since we mostly had development episodes at this point. I will say this episode is quite entertaining, seeing how the fast crew think of ways to keep the roaches out like some kind of snailified Home Alone. We also get a couple of hints as to what will inevitably defeat the roaches in the end, which most likely goes over your head on first viewing, which I really like. It's presented very naturally. The food is very spicy based on Chet's reaction right at the beginning, and the roach leader, Brody, is clearly not fond of spicy food. And since they're surrounded by spicy food, it's easy to assume the roaches could be defeated by that weakness. Nice simple episode with logical through lines. Very cool. That's all I've got. African Queen is another action-based episode like the last one. Unfortunately, I think this one is a bit lamer in comparison. Basically, Fast gets recruited by a kingdom of banana slugs to help gather a moss that will cure the slugs of an illness. They are chased by meerkats, which they fight off using diamonds that Smooth Move collected because, well, he likes diamonds. Meanwhile, Chet gets obsessed with bananas. The through lines of this episode aren't as clever as the last, as at the last minute the crew decide to use the diamonds to annihilate the meerkats, rather than it being a clear setup and payoff, though there was still something set up, so I can't be too mad at this episode. The plot, with Chet and Burn staying behind to deal with banana-related conflicts, felt like a way to sideline the two, which feels like a necessity since Burn could easily fight off the meerkats with her fire exhaust, or Chet could have flown the rest of the crew to safety. Though they give a good enough reason as to why they can't come. Chet doesn't want to go out on an adventure, despite him being into quick adrenaline rushes just an episode ago, and Burn wants to keep watch on Chet so nothing happens to him with the banana slugs. And they sure do lean into that, despite the audience who is probably watching the show. Besides the plot, we get a bit of development with Smooth Move. He seems to be a materialistic snail who digs fame and fortune. Numerous times he escapes into his imagination, where he is beloved by female snails because of his riches. Certainly a direction I could have expected from a character such as Smooth Move, though besides that, he's still a pretty underdeveloped character, which is unfortunate. Besides all of that though, this episode has noticeably lower animation quality in certain scenes. Thankfully it's not in any action scenes, but I still did notice. Hopefully that's just a one-off thing. Oh, and I guess the animals besides bugs are also personified. That's pretty goofy. Anyway, Mega Snails is not a very great episode, unfortunately. This is an episode that once again focuses on White Shadow. I think we should perhaps focus on other characters again for a while, but maybe this episode develops White Shadow in a productive way. Oh, no, not really. This episode sees White Shadow stuffing himself with a bunch of vending machine food, leading to him becoming oversized. White Shadow becomes somewhat of a celebrity, and he catches the attention of a trio of oversized snails that challenge him to a fight. Turbo and Smooth decide to help White Shadow become fit, but he ends up turning back to normal size. Despite that, he's optimistic he will win the battle, and indeed, he does win. This episode does not develop White Shadow very much. In fact, it backtracks him, if anything. Most of the episode has White Shadow being rather stupid, and like most dumb characters, White Shadow is also obsessed with food. I hate that we're going in this direction with this character. The only saving grace is at the end, when he thinks of when he shrunk back to normal size due to him exerting himself, which helps him think of a strategy to win. This through line was extremely subtle, and almost didn't feel like the most logical setup to the payoff. White Shadow exerted himself and became strong, but it's not like he overexerted himself and got worn out. It's not really a direct correlation unlike the previous episodes. Again, not the most terrible writing, it's just less good compared to the other episodes. Yes, I'm really trying my hardest to defend the show in any way I can, despite my objective observations. The humor in this episode is pretty lame, since they're predictable jokes and jokes that revolve around White Shadow's newfound dumbness and food obsession. Pretty lame episode. At least the fight at the end was entertaining enough. Kind of. Well, that's a really random reference to have in the title. Ants Revolution, as in Dance Revolution. This episode has nothing to do with dancing, but whatever, I guess a show that uses insect puns a lot can get away with that one. Anyway, this episode is about a colony of fire ants attempting to take over Starlight City, but Burn is convinced to challenge the queen ant to a race to see whether they will lose Starlight City to the ants. It's rather similar to the first episode in a way, with the tiger beetles attempting to take over Starlight City as well. Generally, a pattern is starting to emerge at this point in the show. New character shows up, the fast crew have to race in some way to win, some moral is learned about teamwork at the end, and frankly they're keeping it pretty fresh so far. This episode is Burn-centric, and really we just get the idea that she's very confident and sassy, but we also see that her relationship with Chet is very genuine, as Chet goes out of his way to help Burn despite her insisting she doesn't need his help, and him accepting that. And then he saves her life during the race despite having to throw himself over a pit of salt amidst an ant colony. It's a very nice portrayal of a relationship, and me likey. Last notes, the humor is pretty weak in this episode. I can't really think of many jokes in this episode, and those that were there didn't really get me. The animation is still pretty dang good, despite the setbacks in the last episode. Firstly, we don't really get much out of the other characters, hence why I didn't really mention them. Whiplash clearly knows how to handle the fire ants, but the rest of the crew just sits around and lets things happen, besides helping to fight the ants at the very beginning. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. Clamsquatch is... hey, I've heard this name before. I guess they're bringing back this random joke for an actual episode, kind of. This episode is about the fast crew participating in a mud bug race around a swamp. Specifically, the crew's main competition is against a crawfish named Cleach, while avoiding a particular area of the swamp which is supposedly home to a clamsquatch. Obviously, Skidmark of anyone is interested in finding out about this clamsquatch, while the rest think about participating in the race. Skidmark decides to go out during the night to try to find this clamsquatch, which leads to him getting captured by Cleach. The rest of the fast crew realize he's missing the next morning, and go looking for him, getting ditched by Cleach in the middle of the swamp, and eventually finding their way to the finish line by following White Shadow's nose to the ochre stand at the end. What's nice about this episode is it's not one of those stupid trope episodes, where the characters don't believe that the clamsquatch is real and think Skidmark is crazy. Rather, they are willing to believe the clamsquatch is real almost immediately, although it turns out that Cleach set up an act of the clamsquatch entering the town and taking Skidmark. Apparently the clamsquatch is actually real and it eats Cleach at the end, and while the rest of the crew probably won't believe the clamsquatch exists next time it's brought up, at least now Skidmark has undeniable proof it exists. That being, trust him, bro. This again follows the formula I brought up just earlier. This time Cleach attempts to sabotage the race by ditching the fast crew in the middle of nowhere, but the crew managed to find their way out. Of course, this was just White Shadow smelling okra, but it was set up earlier in the episode and it paid off in a pretty nice way. I suppose at this point it's the only original climax these writers could think of, because they've pretty much done the clever ones already. Still, it's pretty okay in my book. At least it was better than African Queen's climax. Moving on. Turbo Stinks, their words, not mine, is about the new release of Turbo-themed cologne that attracts birds because of one of its ingredients, which means it's up to Turbo to remove the cologne from the city and keep the city safe from birds. This episode is very simple, but I think that kind of works against it. There wasn't much in this episode besides a handful of jokes, and the entire conflict being centered on the minor setup, rather than the setup existing alongside the conflict in its own bubble. I suppose, to put it in simpler terms, the cologne causes the conflict, and then solves the conflict, instead of the cologne being the solution to the conflict, while the conflict was caused by some other means, which better follows the formula. Try to work that out in your head. And unfortunately their usual formula was more successful than this episode. It had some nice action here and there, but unfortunately the animation has once again decreased in quality, and so I couldn't find much value in this episode. There wasn't much character development either. Skidmark is crazy, White Shadow is dumb, Whiplash fears nothing, and Turbo put himself in danger again. Yeah, I don't really have much to say. A bunch of birds die and that's kind of funny. Not really. Anyway. Snail in Jail is about a fake letter about a sick snail luring the Fast crew to be captured by an iguana named Rudy Iguana. Most of the Fast crew becomes useless in a cage, while Turbo races Rudy. Chet, on the other hand, gets kept in a cage with a frog named Gulpy, who can't control his tongue, and so Chet must perform therapy on him in order to work with Gulpy to escape their prison, rescuing the rest of the Fast crew and eventually saving Turbo. Meanwhile, Rudy is facing serious mother issues as he is neglected and shamed by her. All the while, the rest of the crew are oddly unsympathetic towards Rudy while this is happening. Again, a pretty usual episode. The payoff is rather predictable, but Rudy's plan made some sense, so I can forgive it. His motivation is, so far, a lot clearer than Hard Case's, who also raced Turbo to prove he is faster than him. Rudy wants to prove to his mother that he is worth her attention, but clearly he's incapable of doing that. Perhaps we'll see him reappear in the future, with this kind of arc setup. None of the characters besides Chet really get any kind of development. White Shadow's new character trait is definitely his obsession with food, which really came out of nowhere. Whiplash knows to stay out of the Fast crew's dangerous experiments to escape, which is pretty normal for him. Chet manages to prove he can get past his fears and help those who are capable of being redeemed. Gulpy is able to control his tongue and help Chet and the others escape. Rudy, on the other hand, seemingly cannot get any kind of forgiveness at the moment though, despite him also seeming to be on the path of redemption. I don't know, I'm a bit hung on this, if you can tell. It was such an abrupt ending. I guess that's what happens when each mini episode is only 11 minutes in length. So yeah, that's all I've got to say here. It's funny how I can watch the first second of these episodes and immediately be able to guess what the plot is. It's because I've seen this show before, not because I have some kind of superhuman ability. I just thought it was worth mentioning. I don't know if that's good or bad on the show's part. Probably good. The Tale of Two Turbos, that's a lot of T's, properly introduces a character who appeared in the background a few times named Deuce, who pretends to be Turbo and causes mischief around the city. Eventually the two end up in the tomato farm where a gang of spiders are hanging out. Apparently Deuce is meant to be Turbo's #1 fan, which was admittedly inevitable to be introduced at some point. Turbo fights off the spiders and Deuce kinda helps by crushing the spiders. At the end, Deuce apologizes for everything he did and all is forgiven. This episode doesn't follow the normal format, which makes it more of a unique episode. Deuce isn't really an antagonist, and hence he is worthy of forgiveness by the end. Unfortunately, I find him to be a bit annoying, and even more unfortunate, he will be reappearing in the series later on. That's not a bad thing. I think they made his character work well. He's just not a character I really care about that much. We learn a bit more about how Turbo handles his fans, and how much he's expected to do around Starlight City for other snails, which is a bit of a subtle look into how the rest of the Fast crew are mostly excluded from Turbo's popularity, which kinda makes sense. Will this be explored in the future? Maybe, I forgot. Otherwise, the other characters aren't really explored at all. The spiders aren't that important in this episode. This was really to introduce Deuce and give insight to Turbo's daily life. So yeah, a bit of a developmental episode again. On the other hand, the escargot affair is about the Fast crew being invited to a fancy dinner, but the intention of the chef is to serve Turbo as food rather than have him as a guest. Turbo, along with several other animals and the Fast crew, have to escape while fighting off the diners. Another action-based episode that focuses on Turbo, basically. The Fast crew work together a lot better than in some other episodes, feeling more dynamic and less like a clump. We also indeed get confirmation that other animals are personified just as bugs are, which is pretty weird. I presume it's just animals that communicate between each other and humans don't get in on that. That's unlucky. There's a lot of jokes in this episode. None of them hit particularly well. Cheeto was probably the highlight in the humor department, but unfortunately we still hardly see him. I don't really mind his personality so far though. The rest of the crew don't really get development, and nor does Turbo really. He seems to be getting more witty though, so good for him. Yeah, I'm kind of running out of things to say. The animation was a bit of an improvement in this episode. The voice acting, I failed to mention, is pretty good. I especially get a kick out of Whiplash's performance. I think the only character who is really boring in that way is Turbo, because he doesn't really have any identifiable personality trait in his voice besides confident. You get what I mean, right? Anyway, that's enough filler. Let's press on. Are we here already? Two antagonists are returning for this episode. You can probably tell who based on the titles, especially the latter's title. I hope these episodes don't flop, as return episodes tend to. Surf and Turf features the return of Brody and his roach gang. Whiplash lets the Fast crew go to the beach after a bit of training, and they are challenged to a surf when they are noticed by the roaches. They compete in a sewer surfing competition. Meanwhile, Whiplash is out of his element and hypnotized by the calming aura of the beach. Eventually they snap him out of his trance and manage to win the surfing competition. Seemingly Brody and the Fast crew are on good terms, which I didn't really expect. It's refreshing though. This episode kind of delayers its characters for the sake of conflict. Whiplash, notably, goes from a completely unforgiving and stressful snail to being totally chill and forgiving. To start with, I never saw Whiplash as that harsh of a trainer in the series. He was just able to provide advice and offer a solution whenever a problem arose. He always let the fast crew walk into their own problems, and if the crew doesn't want to train endlessly, he would probably let them, and then the consequences would come to them. It's also weird considering they're gonna race against inchworms, so really this is just Whiplash being stupid, which is something I never thought I'd say. On the other side of the coin, chillaxed Whiplash is born from a bit of a trope, where a harsh and demanding character is able to relax for the first time and forgets how to be their usual self. It's fine enough for conflict, but if Whiplash's character makes no sense just for the sake of this episode, the conflict is redundant. Just make it so Whiplash stays behind and trains while the rest of them go to the beach without him, having to surf against the roaches without his help. Or he could even come in at the last second, realizing they're probably gonna need some last minute help, and give them the help they need. That feels a bit more in character. This doesn't. Anyway, besides the assassination of Whiplash, what about the other characters? Well, I would say mainly the issues with Skidmark, who is easily convinced that the sewage water has mind-controlling chips or whatever. I know he's the conspiracy guy, but wouldn't he have to think about it for a second? Maybe he would even have proof against it. I don't know, I saw Skidmark as another character in the smarter end, but unfortunately this episode disagrees with me. The rest of the characters just show their usual personality traits, and that just about does it. Pretty lame in terms of character writing. Besides that, I think the humor surprisingly hits a lot better in this episode. I laughed more often than in past episodes. I would say that's an accomplishment in and of itself. The episode itself is entertaining enough, and the animation is pretty good. Yeah, most of what I had to say was around character development. It's going in a sour direction already. I'm hoping that'll change. Hard Case returns, surprise surprise, features the return of Hard Case from the first episode. With Turbo winning his 37th race in a row, the Fast Crew decide to throw him a parade for this arbitrary number. Hard Case apparently has the Fast Crew's number and calls them to threaten his revenge. The Fast Crew then becomes very paranoid about trying to protect Turbo, which causes them to trap him in a jar, which he should definitely suffocate in, but that's fine. The crew get distracted, and Hard Case is able to hijack the vehicle Turbo is on, trying to lead him to death, but continually being convinced against it. Eventually the Fast Crew find Turbo, and Whiplash comes to save him, ending in Hard Case getting stuck in tar, and somehow surviving because he will appear again later. Yeah, as I expected, this episode isn't very good either. I'll start with the good stuff first. Hard Case is characterized a little more. He's shown to be awkward and not very strategic, which I don't think is the most awful direction for his character, but considering he was introduced in the first episode as being a very real threat, it's a bit of a disappointment. But I'm meant to be positive, so I'll say this change isn't all bad. It makes him more of a unique villain. He also makes a Half-Life 2 reference, and if you're a long-time subscriber, you'll know how much I appreciated that. Now for the bad. The humor falls flat very often, especially the jokes around Hard Case being awkward. I've seen it a bunch of times, it's not funny, moving on. Hard Case's plan was clearly based on improv, but what exactly was his plan to get a hold of Turbo? The only reason he manages to capture Turbo is because the Fast Crew got distracted by a cane beetle holding a shaker of sugar. If they hadn't been complete morons and left Turbo alone, what would Hard Case have done? Fight them? Yeah, right. If the first episode is anything to go off of, he would have failed big time, because for some reason he doesn't have the rest of his tiger beetle friends with him. I don't know why the characters have to be stupid all of a sudden. Speaking of, Whiplash continues to be stupid, and it hurts me big time. Not only does he allow a parade, not only does he keep chasing random snails despite being threatened by a beetle, and not only does he abandon Turbo, but he also thinks that slapping himself onto a car going downhill will stop it. Yeah, okay, not even White Shadow would be that dumb. And for some reason he thinks this masterful maneuver will work, when all it took was breaking the jar open. Whiplash would have been the one to think of breaking the jar, and Turbo would have thought of the crazy stunt, not both of them. Character assassination this early on is really demoralizing. I really hope something changes soon. Also, they renamed Starlight City to Turbo Town, but I'm just gonna ignore that happened and continue to call it Starlight City. Sorry if that annoys you. Hey, a double-length episode. And thankfully that means this episode is an improvement over the last episode. Turbo Drift has Turbo and the Fast Crew going to Tokyo to advertise a new sauce, which has to have its ingredients changed because of obligatory Japan jokes. A fellow sauce creator named Mr. Saltfish challenges Tito to race Turbo with his cricket Hayaku. Turbo and Hayaku wander the city, and it's clear Turbo has a bit of a thing for Hayaku, and she takes advantage of that by sending Turbo, to paraphrase from the show, on a wild goose chase with a red herring, but literally, to learn how to drift. On the way back, Turbo discovers the secret of drifting by coating himself in fish guts. He manages to return in time for the race and ends up winning thanks to White Shadow thinking to coat Turbo in Tito's sauce, which luckily has fish in its ingredients. Hayaku ends up going too fast and flies into the void forever. I'm joking, she'll also return later. So yeah, not among my favorite episodes, but it's still in clear improvement. The animation has improved once again, and I never thought to mention, but the backgrounds are super duper pretty in general, but especially in this episode. The animation frankly impresses me often, but that might be because I'm not a professional animator, I don't know. The character development in this episode is another improvement. The characters just feel more like their normal selves here. Turbo is foolish and trusts Hayaku just because he has a crush on her, and she seems to feed into that. He eventually learns how to drift, which is payoff number 1, and then manages to win through the sauce ingredients, which is the second payoff. Again, thanks to his friends and his last-minute wisdom, he manages to succeed, just like it should be. Whiplash doesn't feel stupid in this episode, which is a huge relief. He realizes something is up with Hayaku and immediately lets Turbo go off and learn that the hard way, that she was fooling him. Chet is afraid of everything but manages to find his way in and out of a shopping mall, for the most part on his own. This all feels very in character and I like it. Though I really must wonder why Chet keeps coming with the fast crew on vacations if he insists he's too afraid to go anywhere or do anything, and he could be keeping watch on Starlight City. Maybe some unspecified reason relating to wanting to keep the fast crew safe. Who knows, really? Ready, Set, Glow is a Skidmark and Turbo-centric episode, where the two decide to check out a cave inhabited by mysterious glowworms. The central glowworm, Lumino, is holding a zip race with several other bugs. Lumino held the race for the purpose of working alongside an albino spider to capture other bugs so Lumino could save his family. Turbo and Skidmark work with Lumino to help save all the bugs in Lumino's family, forming the notorious Turd Mark to eventually get the albino spider eaten by a bat. Another action-heavy episode that doesn't really have any character development nor important theming behind it. Skidmark is his usual conspiratorial self, who clearly still has his wits behind him despite that. Turbo makes many obnoxious puns and I want to punch him in the eye sockets, but I guess that's what makes him charming. Somewhat. Really all I have to say about this episode is that it has really fluid and pretty animation, and I couldn't help but marvel at it throughout the episode. The race itself was entertaining, and the action afterwards was intense. Not much to get out of this episode besides that. I'll move right along. Breakneck's Back is yet another antagonist return episode. This time, it's the mysterious snail from episode 2 that Whiplash recognized. And here we are to learn more about their history. Well, kind of. Basically, Starlight City is holding a tomato festival because snails love tomatoes. Whiplash is initially unwilling to participate, but upon seeing Breakneck, he changes his mind and decides to join just to beat him. The competitions end in a tie, only left up to a tomato throw. Breakneck cheats, and so he loses the competition, making Whiplash the winner. But because the prize is a weird golden shell, that means Breakneck was able to take Whiplash's shell. He tries to run away with it, but is logically stopped by the fast crew and locked in prison. Midway through the mini-episode, Whiplash explains that Breakneck was Whiplash's old mentor, but an incident happened between them that is not explained in this episode. We'll probably find out in the future. We won't. The episode's theme is clearly yet another story of teamwork, and how even if you can be outwitted by your mentor, despite being the wittiest in the team already, your friends will come to help you. Classic Turbo Fast story. It's done well, and I found the setup and payoff to be satisfying. The only thing I'm really confused about is what Breakneck was planning to do if either 1, he wasn't caught by Whiplash joining the games, or 2, he wasn't caught cheating. He probably expected to be caught cheating, but Breakneck joining the games could have easily been missed. I guess then he would have just taken the tomato cup, even though Breakneck expresses that his real intention was to get Whiplash's shell. Why? It's not explained. The tomatoes, on the other hand, make a little more sense given what we know about him. I guess there are questions that will be answered later on. If not, I unfortunately have to deduct points from this show for this. Anyway, besides all that, the animation is very nice. The only downside is this episode uses an anime-style dark filter over the action to prevent seizures or whatever. I don't have epilepsy, so I absolutely hate when these filters are used on shows. It makes it look a lot uglier. But I get it, they don't want people having seizures, fine, whatever, don't put a warning or anything. Humor is fine, hit or miss as usual, yeah, I've got nothing more to add. Cruise Control takes place on a cruise ship, of which the fast crew and Tito have been invited to. They're meant to entertain the crew since they're fast snails and all, while the rest of the fast crew go off to enjoy activities. Turbo is approached by a rat named Captain Dirtbeard. He and his crew want to reach Turbo to claim ownership of the ship. Dirtbeard leaves out that his crew can help him sabotage Turbo, and later the fast crew both intentionally and unintentionally help Turbo win. Eventually Turbo does win, and Dirtbeard's crew go back on him to leave him alone in the ocean. Don't worry, he returns later. Sorry if you cared about spoilers, but I'm gonna keep saying that for each antagonist that reappears. This episode was pretty cool in that the crew didn't necessarily intend to help Turbo in some instances, like Chet and Burn distracting the crab and Skidmark distracting the octopus. But of course, snails like Whiplash went out of their way to help Turbo. It made for some nice creative action. and the entire race was a joy to watch. It also felt like a nice, tight, intense race despite Dirtbeard being a lot slower than Turbo. So yeah, nice action, nice direction. The animation is okay, the highlights are obviously in the action, but at some points, especially with the human animation, it felt like it decreased in quality a bit. The setting is creative and drawn nicely. The humor is a little better in this episode too. I laughed at quite a few points, which is quite unusual while watching this show. No offense to the writers, I just don't like your style of humor that much. Anyway, that's all I have to say. RC Turbo is about a charity race that Turbo is nervous about, and so Skidmark graciously helps by making Turbo unconscious. As it's just before the race is starting, and this unnamed man decides to offer a large donation to the charity if Turbo wins, Turbo needs to race. They fail to wake him up, so Skidmark proposes using an RC-type mechanism in Turbo's shell so that they can control him while he's asleep. Miraculously, this works for most of the race, until Skidmark finds a way to help Turbo wake up. Like the classic Disney fairy tales, Turbo needs true love's kiss to wake him up. But since he doesn't have a girlfriend, his brother Chet works as a surrogate. He ends up waking Turbo up, and Turbo manages to finish the race in first place. This is another pretty weird presentation of the teamwork moral, but in essence, Turbo's friends individually try to help him through the race. Whiplash is level-headed and sensible, Chet is concerned about safety, Smooth Move tries and fails to work to music, Burn wants to go fast, and White Shadow just messes around with the controls. So yeah, pretty representative of their personalities, I would say. There's not really any major character development here. There's not much humor in this episode, nor is it very good. The race itself is moderately entertaining, though weirdly it felt like there was a lot of missed potential behind it. Like as if the writers were holding back a bit. Maybe because the animation budget is running a bit dry. Kinda lame, but it wasn't bad. I guess my main criticism is confusion as to why Whiplash insisted on leading the RC controls, despite not being very experienced, rather than handing it off to another snail. I'm not really sure, it felt a little out of character for him. Yep, that's all I've got. Oh yay! So Beat a Fajita is actually one of my favorite episodes in the show, but I have got to get through Curse of the Cicadas first, so I will do that. This episode is about the fast crew discovering a mysterious cave that leads to a hidden treasure trove infested by sleeping cicadas. Skidmark warns that he's getting bad feelings from the cave, but no one is willing to listen to him, and they all leave. The cicadas wake up the next morning, and the fast crew talk to them. Realizing they're hungry from sleeping, Turbo offers them tomatoes, but the cicadas end up infesting the tomato farm. With no other solution, Smooth Move introduces a videotape he recovered from the treasure trove, which plays a catchy song that hypnotizes those who listen to it. They use the song on the cicadas and manage to bring them back into their cave and trap them. This is a rather odd episode, and really, it is a representation of what the later episodes will be like. Rather than being racing related at all, besides the small introduction, this is just kind of a normal episode of television, but with snails and cicadas. The climax still had an established setup and payoff, but it was a little less subtle in this episode. The Muchacabra, the name of the song, is clearly a mysterious and bizarre tape, and hence it would logically come up later as a solution to the climax in some way. Though that's not really a complaint. Now I can feel smart about figuring it out, as if I haven't seen the show before. The character development staggers a bit in this episode. Remember how in episode 5 I praised the characters for listening to Skidmark and not thinking he's crazy about the clam squatch? Well, the characters don't trust Skidmark having weird feelings about the cave. This has far more evidence about being inhabited by weird creatures, and yet no one is willing to believe Skidmark. Not even Whiplash, who, yes, thinks Skidmark is a psycho, but would surely be aware of the danger that could be hidden around any corner, especially with a bunch of weird insect tusks on the walls. He knows about pirate rules from the last episode, but not cicadas or even just insects who live underground. Man, ignorance comes in all kinds of forms. Anyway, kinda lame that Skidmark is becoming the crazy character that no one listens to, but maybe the writers can find a way to make it work. Or maybe they'll backtrack on it. I'd rather they do that. I'm rather impatient to move on to the next mini-episode, so let's go do that right now. Beat a Fajita is about the appearance of a Dos Bros Tacos competitor named Ches Fajita, run by Dean Cuisine, who is clearly unacquainted with Spanish culture. He challenges the fast crew to a race using his own group of snails who happen to be nearly exact copies of the fast crew. Dean offers Tito a gift card if he wins, and if Tito loses, then his restaurant will be destroyed. With his reputation threatened by some probably unintentional foreshadowing for a later episode, Tito agrees to the bet. The fast crew go spy on the other team, called Fajita, not Fajita, and realize their intention was to match up with their direct counterpart. To mess with them, the fast crew mismatches each pair and they end up winning the race. And Dean accidentally destroys his own food truck, and Tito has no sympathy for him, and it's really funny. So yeah, basically the lesson here is be original. Notably when Fusion, aka Fake Turbo, tries to destroy Turbo's shell, thinking the fast mechanics are in the racing shell, he He learns that Turbo is actually just fast without the shell. Fusion, on the other hand, requires his racing shell like all the other snails. And so Turbo being the real deal leads to his victory, and Dean being an idiot leads to his restaurant's failure. Did I mention they made a reference to the film in this episode? Yeah, they referenced the film. This episode is really good. It's really well paced, pretty funny, and has nice animation, and it introduces an exciting new cartoony antagonist, and generally has consistent characters, and is overall just a fun time. Yeah, I don't really have any complaints here. They don't punch you in the face with the fact that Dean isn't very well versed in Spanish culture, they just make vague hints at it. Now I can actually feel smart that I picked up on that. Well, this is a nice little surprise and a generally hit or miss show so far, but alas, we must push on to the next episode. Oh, okay, so this is also a pretty good episode. Starting with Carmageddon, this episode is about a very long adventure that Turbo must go on. It goes like this. The freeway is closing for an hour, so Turbo wants adjustments made on his shell, but when he asks Skidmark for help, he realizes that he needs to be on a talk show with the recurring announcer Mel Shellman. Turbo thinks he won't have time, so he asks Skidmark to fill in for him. Skidmark says he'll do it if Turbo can get him a satellite dish. Turbo realizes he needs Chet's helicopter, so now he has to do a favor for him. Chet wants Turbo to help Burn gather gum, but Turbo offers Burn an opportunity to try new gum, and Burn is excited. Turbo runs to find gum, and bumps into Smooth, who says he can help Turbo get gum if he can pay off his gum guy. Turbo needs to find a mysterious object, and gets help from both Whiplash and White Shadow. They go on the task and get the object, which Turbo gives Smooth's gum guy. The gum guy gives Turbo gum, which he gives to Burn. Chet then gives his shell to Turbo, and he helps Skidmark grab the satellite dish. Finally, Skidmark leaves for the talk show. With only 3 minutes to spare on the highway, Turbo is distraught. Whiplash comes along to tell Turbo that the freeway is actually closed for 13 hours rather than just 1 hour, and the two race on the freeway. Yeah, pretty plot-heavy. Unfortunately, this review is mostly episode summary. I don't have much to say besides that this episode is quite entertaining. A lot is happening constantly, but I never feel like I'm missing something. And the Fast Crew are all willing to help Turbo, especially Whiplash and White Shadow, who are willing to do it just to be nice. Chet and Skidmark's excuses both seem logical, and Smooth's is very bizarre, but also seems reasonable enough. It's intentionally bizarre, so not the fault of the show. The animation is nice, especially when you notice the atmosphere changing as the time passes. The humor is meta at times, but pretty good. There's not any major character development here besides the introduction of Smooth's guys. Yes, they will reappear in the future. I know it sounds stupid. Next episode. Chet Gets Burned is the tragic breaking up of Chet and Burn episode. Chet was supposed to throw Burn a birthday party, but somehow each time he got hints he forgot, which feels a bit out of character, but fine. Maybe this episode can make up for it in other ways. Turbo suggests trying to make Burn jealous, now that she's immediately pursuing Skidmark as her new boyfriend. Turbo pretends to be Chet's new girlfriend, but Burn is not buying it at any point. Yay, another trope subversion, you love to see it. Turbo and Burn try to outdo each other in scale, but Chet admits all he wanted was to get back with Burn. Turbo arranges them both on a Ferris wheel, and Burn causes it to go loose and start rolling away. Chet apologizes for forgetting Burn's birthday, and Burn forgives him, with both of them riding off into the moonlight back together again. So thankfully, besides the beginning, Chet is pretty in character for this episode. Quite frankly, rather than forgetting Burn's birthday, he could have just made a really lame one, and that feel a little more in character. But really, what'd be most in character is if he just made a party that Burn liked from the start. So this episode's conflict is kind of redundant. But otherwise, Chet is not at all trying to play into making Burn jealous, and is very uncomfortable with pretending to date his brother in drag. Burn is also pretty in character, and we learn that she's clearly very forgiving of Chet, which is sweet. She even tries to give Chet an excuse for her to forgive him, all the while Turbo is just trying to help out his brother in ways he think will work. Obviously they don't, but that's just how Turbo is. Skidmark is completely unfamiliar with dating, and it feels right for his character. The other three are just watching the whole time, amused and only stepping in to try and help Burn and Chet at the end. So yeah, overall good character writing. The plot itself is a bit boring at times, but generally has good pacing. It has a nice theme of apologizing being more valuable than trying to outdo and impress your significant other. As someone who is in a relationship myself, I would definitely not recommend doing the latter, especially if your partner is sensitive and smart, like Burn is. Humor is okay, but it's pretty predictable. It's basically Turbo failing to come on to Chet because they're brothers, and montages of Burn and Turbo trying to one-up each other, but it can be kind of funny at times. That's all I really have to say, so let's proceed. Gypsy Moth Prophecies is about a gypsy telling the Fast Crew's fortune. All of them are pretty vague and end up coming true in rather unexpected, but technically true ways. Whiplash ends up getting a lousy fortune, where he's told he'll be eaten after a race. Well, like the other fortunes, it technically happens. A cheese replica of Whiplash is eaten by White Shadow. The actual non-cheese Whiplash manages to avoid getting eaten by several animals, all the while. Besides teamwork, the moral of this episode confuses me a little. See, if this episode were not in the show Turbo Fast, the moral would be that fate does not decide what happens to you, like some kind of Back to the Future light. But then the prophecy is fulfilled at the end, even if it is non-literal. So what do I do with this? Well, I guess the main takeaway is that your fate will take you in unexpected directions, and the best you can do is avoid the worst version of it. I don't know. Maybe I'm taking this last minute joke too literally. I am good at taking jokes literally though. It's why my friends find me annoying. Anyway, the animation is generally okay for this episode. It's not spectacular, and by the standards of Turbo Fast, it's not bad either. Fortunately, this episode also darkens the screen. It does it just before the gypsy moth gets zapped at the end, so that kind of ruined that joke. They could have just put the dark filter quickly as it was happening, but instead it happens more gradually. Oh well, anything to prevent seizures. Besides a warning. Character development is a bit lackluster here, as it has been lately. Whiplash has been established to be skeptical of the supernatural in the past, and reasonably, he would be the one thinking everything happening is just a massive coincidence. Really, I wouldn't expect any other character to think like that, so I think it works here. Especially considering the prophecies came true from a stranger rather than one of his friends, who he probably should be more willing to trust. Regardless, that's all we really get from this episode. I guess Whiplash is also willing to put himself in unnecessary danger to prove a point. Again, it feels fitting for his character, so I don't mind it. Let's move on. Schizobrania is another weird episode, probably because it's another Skidmark central episode. Skidmark is on a quest to find a giant moth larva underground, but instead finds and severs the main power line to the city. The Fast crew get rather rude towards Skidmark, and talk about him behind his back, saying they wish he had a different personality. Skidmark takes this opportunity to do a weird social experiment, where he puts on a helmet and switches personalities throughout the episode. The Fast crew like the first personality, but when he reveals he doesn't care for racing, the Fast crew wish for the old Skidmark back. Instead, he continues to switch personalities, until finally being stopped after several things go wrong. They realize that Skid has actually been faking his personality changes the whole time, and are grateful to have the normal him back. And all is forgiven by the end. So another weirdly muddled message. Most of the episode was fine, but the beginning was odd. Firstly, Skidmark is a complete idiot at the start, thinking the main power core to the city is a giant larva. Even when he sees it's a plug, Skidmark still thinks it's a giant worm. Obviously it's a plug, come on now. He should know what a plug is if the others do, especially considering he's a scientist or whatever. Then the Fast crew are quite mean to him behind his back. Burn makes sense, since she lost her entire gum collection because of what Skidmark did, and because she's been shown to be emotionally sensitive, but the others don't really have any excuse. Turbo tries to be the most reasonable though, which feels more like a Whiplash role. I guess Whiplash is just very sick of Skidmark at this point, until he realizes Skidmark's first fake personality is no good. Speaking of the first fake personality, what would have happened if Skid had never pretended to be apathetic towards racing? They clearly far preferred Skid's new personality, until he said he didn't understand nor care about racing. I suppose eventually they would have realized his logical views would have been obnoxious, but that isn't very well communicated. As far as I can tell, the first fake personality of Skidmark would have been preferred by the Fast crew if you subtract the racing part. Yeah, I know they need to pace an 11-minute episode differently compared to a full episode, and hence a lot needs to be shaved down. But I think they could have either tackled that full force or not at all. Now I just feel bad for Skidmark. Anyway, although this episode preferred to include a musical number rather than a proper look at Skidmark's fake personality, it actually gave me a greater appreciation for the voice actors, especially Skidmark's VA. Like, dang. He really plays the character well. I commented already on Whiplash's VA having good delivery, but I didn't really give all the VAs enough credit. They all do really well playing their characters. I think the most underwhelming performance is Smooth Move, but that's probably because he's very chillaxed and calm compared to the rest of the cast. Also, Deuce is annoying. Did I say that already? I think Deuce is annoying, and that includes his voice. No offense to the VA, you just play the character too well. I'm rambling a bit, so I'll wrap up now. The humor is a bit better in this episode. There were some bits that got me laughing, and they all felt cleverly written. Good job, show. You're making me laugh more often. The animation is fine, minus the screen darkening and the dial on the helmet reappearing despite having been destroyed previously. Those are my major notes. Let's move on to the next episode, shall we? Okay, the second mini-episode is a bit of a pain if I remember correctly, but at least we get no can-do before it. This episode is about Chet feeling no respect from the city folk, and so he takes the opportunity to take control of a can of tomato juice that was thrown into the tomato patch. He manages to open the can and becomes seemingly obsessed with the juice, along with several other snails. A religious-like cult forms, with Chet at the center, all intent to protect and listen to the juice as if it's their god. Skidmark, Whiplash, and White Shadow also consume the juice and fall under the cult spell, and so Turbo, Smooth, and Burn all work together to get rid of the can, succeeding in freeing those under its spell. Is there a very obvious religious metaphor hiding in here? You bet there is. The snails refer to each other as brothers, and in their chant they include "love the can because the can loves you," which is similar to God's mutual love with his earth clones. The can also converts Whiplash into a calmer snail, and Skidmark becomes less crazy and more sensible. Chet also gets his much desired respect. White Shadow just kind of becomes insane. The point is, it changed the snails to make them more respectable, while basically forming a hive mind. The rest of the Fast crew don't enjoy these new personalities, and hence see it worthy to destroy the can. Now, I am an atheist, don't get me wrong. I am happy to criticize religion as much as the next guy, but this episode kinda does a bad job at that. It's clearly trying to represent the tomato religion in a bad way, hence why the Fast crew need to stop it, but it doesn't really show the tomato religion in that bad of a light. The snails are in a hive mind, and are unlike themselves to worship the can. But they're not bad people. They're just aggressive, while the Fast crew attempt to destroy the can, just as religious people are often aggressive when you try to disprove their religion. But it's not like there's any kind of manipulation going on besides worshipping the can. Religious manipulation can go rather deep, far deeper than what is represented here. This is very surface level, and unfortunately it's likely not very deterring for those seeking religion. My main point is, this episode didn't do a great job at showing why religion is bad. It just appeals to those who understand the metaphor and are already atheists, like me. Frankly, I'm amazed this episode wasn't banned in 15 countries for being too woke. Last note regarding the themes. Turbo comes on to Chet's weird behavior, but he kind of jumps to the conflict a little quickly. It makes sense he would recognize changes in his brother, but he acts like Chet has completely changed when he so much as refers to the tomato can as she. Yes, it's weird, but Chet is simply obsessed with tomatoes. I don't think it's a big enough change to signify a line like, "I miss the old Chet." After he forms his cult, sure, I can understand that. But the line comes a bit early. It's a minor complaint, but I need content, so I included it here. Oh yeah, why did someone throw out a decades-old can full of tomato juice from a highway? Like, where did they get the can? Why were they on the highway, and why did they just throw it away into a tomato patch? Yeah, these questions aren't necessary for the episode, it's just really goofy. I don't even know where you find an ancient can of tomato juice. Anyway, I have no further notes here. Humor is mid, animation is pretty nice, but there's not really much character development here. It's an open and close arc of Chet wanting respect, but realizing silent respect is what he really desires. Really, I just thought he did all those safety things out of the goodness of his heart and not for respect, but clearly the writers want to introduce a more realistic motivation. Fine, I can accept that. Let's move on to the next episode before I find something else to complain about. Oh, right. So Adopt-a-Toad is about the Fast crew being emotionally manipulated by an Adopt-a-Toad Foundation ad. Turbo assumes it's just a charity, but it is in fact an adoption service, and the Fast crew end up having to take care of a toad. His name is Marty, and he's very annoying, and I hate him. Marty causes many issues around the Fast crew place, and Turbo seems to be the only one who is willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But even despite that, Turbo eventually snaps when Marty throws a party, and he decides to go and get Marty's mom to give Marty a talking to. Who knows what happens after that? I guess Marty and his mom leave to go somewhere else. This episode's message didn't really go in the direction I expected. I figured it would be Turbo helping Marty turn over a new leaf, but this is Turbo Fast, so I should have expected differently. Marty actually manages to drive Turbo crazy, and Marty ends up being stuck with his mom again. The message is okay, being that you shouldn't be a pushover, but I think the message takes a wrong turn at the end. Yes, I agree, you shouldn't be a pushover and you need to set boundaries with people, but Marty is an endangered species who seemingly had a rough life. Rather than punish him and give the audience the immediate satisfaction of seeing Marty get a taste of his own medicine, it should have leaned into the message of Turbo finding a way to set boundaries with Marty. Turbo seems like a bit of a coward by hiding behind Marty's mom, rather than setting boundaries himself, and putting himself in a stronger position than Marty. Turbo really learned nothing at the end of the day. He just learned that his limits can indeed be pushed, and that if he needs to put someone down, he can rely on others. That's not really a great message. Better yet, the Fast crew do little to nothing to help Turbo in the entire episode. When Turbo offers to take care of Marty by himself, the Fast crew immediately dip out. Not even Whiplash or White Shadow, the latter of whom got along with Marty earlier, are willing to help Turbo. The writers really just wanted to push that immediate satisfaction on the audience. And yeah, it felt nice to see Marty getting punished for what he did, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not very good writing. It's like avoiding writing for your video scripts for 3 months because it feels immediately better to avoid doing so, rather than having that long-term satisfaction from finishing it. Yes, that is very blatant projection. Anyway, it's not a good lesson to teach. Fortunately, the theming of the show seems to be slipping up too. On that note, the animation is pretty mid in this episode too. The mouthing is consistently inconsistent, and the animation is sometimes lazy. There's not really anything to say about the look of the episode besides that. The humor sucks because most of the jokes are predictable. There's not really much character development outside of Turbo. Yeah, pretty sucky episode. I guess my memory served me right. Let's hopefully move on to something better. Buster Move is a Smooth-centric episode that introduces his elusive brother named Buster. Buster is obsessed with all kinds of weird trends, and right now it's Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. Buster really wants to be involved with Smooth's show, but ends up embarrassing him with his wizard role-playing. Buster leaves and returns to his home in a toy store, where he is subservient to a giant lizard dragon thing named Barth, along with his fellow role-players. Smooth feels bad and comes to the toy store to apologize to Buster, realizing Barth needs to be taken down to help Buster out. Smooth gets Skidmark's help to try and create a plan to get rid of Barth, to allow Buster and his friends to claim their castle back. They do this by fighting Barth, and eventually Smooth steps in to pretend to be in trouble, which empowers Buster to successfully defeat Barth and banish him to the pet store. At the end, Smooth is willing to accept Buster for who he is and allows him to participate in the shows. A bit weird, but still fits into the general theme of teamwork. Buster is wishing to get Smooth's approval throughout the episode, and Smooth is willing to help Buster fulfill his crazy roleplay adventure. Turbo and Chet explain that, rather than relating to your sibling, you can just learn to understand them. Now, I'm an only child, so I can't really relate to this, but I can say as someone with friends that it's important to sympathize with the differences you have with others, rather than try to find people you 100% relate with. So it's a good lesson to have. And in the end, Smooth and Buster realize they have more in common than they thought, and Smooth was just a bit ignorant to Buster's interests. It's a really important lesson I don't often see in fiction, and hence I give this episode official maniCARNY branded approval for its nice morals, and for representing geeks in a way that doesn't make them look annoying. We can be normal in our own silly ways. The animation is quite nice, and I really like the choice of setting in this episode. I think it has a bit of missed potential, like you hardly see any of the other toys in the store being used to help them fight, but I suppose Buster and his lackeys wanted to stay on theme, being a futuristic medieval theme. Pretty sick. The humor is pretty lame, and the other characters, even Skidmark to some degree, are pretty much entirely excluded from this episode. But I like what we get from Smooth in this episode, so all is forgiven. Let's see what's next. Gills is, I guess, meant to parody the movie Jaws. The Fast crew are visiting a mansion to have a pool party for the 4th of July, and Skidmark, meanwhile, is busy trying to find a wolf. Eventually, Skidmark starts noticing signs that a monster is lurking in the pool, but no one is willing to believe him. Even with clues as blatant as teeth marks on a shell — goldfish don't have teeth, but fine, whatever — and the fact that Shellsworth's owner's daughter has a goldfish that may have escaped into the water. Whiplash, having claimed that he won't listen to Skidmark's crazy theories, ends up getting eaten by the goldfish. Turbo and Skidmark go onto a boat to try and lure the fish and free Whiplash and whoever else was eaten, which we know to be a snail couple. Skidmark and Turbo succeed, and White Shadow forces the fish to barf up what it ate, freeing the snails inside. And Whiplash claims he will start believing in Skidmark again. About dang time. Another open and close arc by the looks of it. Whiplash is well and truly sick of Skidmark. I guess this is just a new trait of Whiplash's character that I have to accept now. And he ignores all the warning signs that there may indeed be a fish lurking in the waters. Frankly, he looks like a bit of a massive idiot, but I guess it fits somewhat well within his personality. He takes unnecessary risks to prove a point. Unfortunately, he had to ignore evidence for that. Like actual evidence, not just a prophecy from a moth. So it almost worked, but in the end it set up a somewhat nice moral to trust your friends even if they consistently cry wolf, because they're just trying to keep you safe. Especially if there's evidence. The message only fails for me personally because this is a very specific moral and it doesn't really apply to me because I don't really have a friend like Skidmark. I am the Skidmark, but yeah, not too relatable. But a good enough lesson, assuming your friends do indeed have your best interests in mind. As for other comments, the animation is pretty good, the action was exciting, and the humor kinda sucked. Pretty much the usual comments. Man, I'm only halfway through the season. Hopefully my reviews can get a bit shorter later on. Terror of Ticula starts with Turbo and Whiplash trying to escape a trio of flying squirrels, which had apparently claimed they were Turbo's biggest fans, just to sacrifice them to their acorn shrine or whatever. Whiplash is upset at Turbo because he thinks Turbo's gullibleness is getting them into too much danger. The two get trapped in a thunderstorm while in the middle of nowhere, being approached by a flea who invites them to a dinner party. Count Ticula, who the flea works for, is supposedly another of Turbo's fans, and logically Whiplash is skeptical. Still, the two go to the dinner party. At Ticula's place, several rather obvious hints that he is up to no good appear countless times, no pun intended, which freaks Whiplash out, but Turbo meanwhile just wants to be cordial. Whiplash leaves and, feeling he has enough evidence, goes to approach Count Ticula regarding everything he's seen. Ticula manages to excuse everything, and admits that he invited Turbo to help motivate his son to get out of his edgy teen phase. Turbo tries, but fails, and Edvard, the name of Ticula's son's friends, or mosquitoes, try to attack Turbo but are stopped by Whiplash, so in the end both Turbo and Whiplash were right. somewhat. This episode has simple themes, but I'm not sure how I feel about them. Trust is a complex topic, and not even Disney could tackle it well. In this episode, it's established Turbo is quick to trust people, that being the case with those who are actually malicious and want to kill him, and the case with Ticula who has genuine intentions. So what's off about this message, I feel, is that Turbo was quick to trust Ticula, but it ended up being okay. It's not like Turbo learned anything, he just won the coin toss this time. He should have learned to take careful consideration, rather than still just jumping into the most suspicious territory and assuming everything was okay. It can be, but oftentimes it isn't. Sometimes people who act really suspicious do want to hurt you, and you need to be careful with who you approach and talk to. And Turbo had very few clues that everything was safe. Though that brings me to the second theme, which is not to judge a book by its cover. A classic lesson, and one done well in this episode. As I described, Ticula gave off bad vibes, but was fully well-intentioned in the end. It just goes to show you can trust people no matter how bad they look. Just, like I said, look for hints before you go meeting with strangers who claim to be your fans. I'm serious. Terrible things happen to people who don't think before doing things like this. On a lighter topic, I think Ticula is a nice character, and yes, he does reappear in a future episode. Unfortunately, so does Edvard. I don't really like him as much. Maybe because I'm an adult now. The humor was okay and the animation was nice. Yeah, I'm repeating myself at this point. Let's proceed. It's Just a Prank Bro, the episode, is about the Fast Crew starting a prank war on each other, where they do a number of innocent pranks to mess with one another. Chet is very disturbed by these happenings due to trauma from his past with Turbo, who also did pranks on him, and also because he's paranoid like usual. Chet brings them all to a trust fest where he gets the Fast Crew to trust each other and stop pranking, but the crew keep pranking each other anyway, which irritates Chet. I hate how much I relate to Chet in this episode, especially considering how he's supposedly meant to be the bad guy here. Anyway, after enough frustrations, Chet decides to try and pull a prank on the Fast Crew, which they realize immediately and decide to go along with. Chet sets up a can to put the Fast Crew in and push them, but he notices a safety hazard inside and goes to fix it, which leads to him falling in the can. He supposedly dies, which the Fast Crew are distraught about, until Chet reveals it was actually part of a more elaborate prank. The Fast Crew declared that was too far, and supposedly stopped pranking each other after this. This episode is entertaining, but I think it's yet another episode with a muddled message. With this show trying to subvert tropes, it ends up with messed up morals. This episode seemingly leads into not taking pranks too far, but then also tries to encourage not being a killjoy, but then it goes back into not taking pranks too far. But the escalation of the intensity of the Fast Crew pranks wasn't portrayed too well. They started out simple, but then they got to the complexity of Skidmark making a crazy machine to give Turbo a stock shot, and White Shadow also threw the entire Fast Crew into a river. But it's not like anyone got hurt, necessarily. They still seemed to enjoy the pranks and were willing to go along with them still. Yeah, there are people who are willing to go through with these crazy ideas just to have fun or test their limits, but if this episode is trying to discourage that, maybe it should have doubled down on the Fast Crew doing intense pranks on each other, getting to the point where they start seriously hurting each other and start disliking it. Then when Chet pretends to die, that's the final straw, and the Fast Crew unambiguously give up pranking. At the end of this episode, it just seems like the Fast Crew were upset at Chet for taking it too far, with no real consequences to speak of. I don't know, this episode is quite weird. These muddled morals are messing with my mind. Yes, the alliteration was intentional. What messes with me the most is Chet being the bad guy here. The Fast Crew seemingly learn when they think Chet is dead that pranking can go too far. When they find out he's alive, they just get mad at Chet, and it's unknown if they ever swallowed that moral. They're mad at Chet for taking it too far, and yeah, he did take it too far, but he was just trying to get a lesson across, especially considering the Fast Crew have been attacking each other constantly. I think he made a very real statement with that prank, and I guess the Fast Crew ignoring Chet and instead pranking each other is meant to be seen as cool. At least that's how the show makes it seem, which muddles the message more. Is it okay to prank or not? If they were going for yet another episode about setting limits, they didn't portray that well either. Rather disappointing, since I found the action of this episode to be enjoyable, and the pacing quite good otherwise. Now I feel bad for Chet too. At least we learn more about him and Turbo's past, which I always like to see. And also we learn he's willing to lighten up and mess with his friends, if it means teaching a lesson at the end of it, even if his friends don't seem to understand it. Unless he dies, that is. Overall, an okay episode. Let's proceed. Overshadowed starts with White Shadow attempting an intense stunt in a daydream, but Turbo ends up accomplishing it by accident in reality, which leaves White Shadow distraught. He becomes depressed now that his only ambition has just been stolen from him, and he decides to give up racing forever. While on his own personal journey, White Shadow decides to try and help other species unite, which grants him new success. Turbo, feeling bad, tries to get Shadow back into the Fast Crew. Turbo sets up Shadow in a way that tempts him to do his own extreme stunt, which convinces him to return to the Fast Crew, and thus all is well. Well, besides the animals who did not achieve peace because Shadow missed his meeting. This is another weird episode because I just cannot figure out what the moral is meant to be here. I guess encourage your friends not to pursue a greater cause and instead get them to return to their old life because you preferred them like that. Don't accidentally ruin your friends' dreams. Help your friend achieve the dream that you stole from them. Yeah, I don't really know how to look at this episode. None of these lessons feel very applicable nor very positive. I guess I'll just pretend this episode has no moral to it. Besides that, the episode is relatively entertaining, and it's neat to see White Shadow finally show some maturity. I've noticed whenever an episode is White Shadow-centric, they'll give him depth, but otherwise he's just a food-obsessed moron. Very lame, but I guess it kind of makes sense. Rather unfortunate that the only way Turbo was willing to help White Shadow was to be pushed by his other friends. It wasn't really as much because he was being rude, just that he clearly had no idea what he was meant to do. I guess that's kind of in character. Certainly a lot more in character compared to if he was just being rude and didn't want to help. Usual comments, you know them. I should probably stop repeating them unless something changes. Next mini-episode. Beware the Chickapede features the return of Dean Cuisine, sooner than I remembered. But this episode is good, so I forgive it. The episode starts with the Fast Crew watching an action movie, besides Byrne, who is watching a girly movie because she's a girl. Haha. The Fast Crew all relate to the movie in one way or another, because they kind of do their own stunts too, and have basic personality traits. Byrne, on the other hand, watches a movie about a bird whisperer. The Fast Crew decide to set up a Heroes for Hire service, and immediately a centipede comes in asking for help. A centipede named Kip apparently had gone to a chicken farm, only to never be seen again. The crew agrees to help and goes to investigate. They find Dean Cuisine at the farm, where they discover he's running experiments on a bunch of centipedes. He's fusing them with chickens to create chickapeds. Man, this show is getting weird already. After some stunts, the Fast Crew, besides Byrne, get trapped, and now it's up to Byrne to save them. While getting chased by Kip, who is the first chickapede, Byrne learns he is able to get through to Kip like a bird whisperer. The two fight Dean and turn him into a half-chicken man, and the Fast Crew gets saved. Yeah, what on earth was this episode? Weirdly entertaining though, and Dean's plan made a bit of sense, even if suddenly switching from Mexican food to chicken was a bit strange. I suppose the moral here is that everyone's interests can benefit a group, no matter how different they are, or how useless they may seem, which is actually an alright lesson. I frankly have no idea why they brought Dean back though, feels a bit arbitrary. Oh well. There's not much character development here. We already kind of knew that Byrne had a somewhat softer, girlier side to her, while despising Judgment, which is a nice touch of depth for her character. Otherwise, we just see the other characters being manly and epic, besides Chet, but that's just the norm for him. That's really it. Usual comments, blah blah, next episode. Oh right, we're immediately stepping back into weird territory again. Ball as well is about Turbo wanting to get a gift for Chet, with the help of Whiplash. They run into a group of mall racers made up of several species. I feel the need to specifically point out this pair of hermit crab brothers named Clip and Clap. You'll understand why later. Rockwell, the turtle, offers Turbo a model truck if he wins the race against him and the other racers. Unfortunately, Turbo has to use a car to race, so he gets the help of Skidmark to help customize the car. We're also introduced to Skidmark's girlfriend, who is an aquarium scuba diver decoration. Yeah, she returns later. Obviously, Turbo manages to win using Skid's modifications and Turbo's newfound driving skills, and so Turbo gets Chet his gift. But he actually preferred Turbo's original gift, making this episode pointless. I'm joking. This episode was still an entertaining watch. The Mario Kart theme this episode uses is really cool. Maybe I'm too much of a comic book fiend, but I think they could have made it way more stylized, putting more HUD statistics and all that, maybe even using a unique art style here and there. Though maybe I'm asking too much of the animation budget. Still, what we got was really cool. The new characters are pretty lackluster, but they seem like very valid threats on the track. Besides Clip and Clap, quite frankly, where'd they get all those shows anyway? The strategies used in the race also felt clever, and the environment was well utilized. Also, I'm glad they didn't just let Turbo race like normal, and instead forced him to use a car. Far more unique, and therefore cooler. The humor was a bit better in this episode, and the animation felt more advanced too. For some reason, Skidmark can break the fourth wall very blatantly now. I should have expected this to be fair. So yeah, not bad at all. Let's continue. Taco Tank is a very strange episode where Tito is invited to a food truck festival, but he ends up crashing his truck, so he has to purchase a tank to replace it. Tito accidentally knocks himself out, and now the Fast Crew have to stop the runaway tank from destroying the area. Skidmark realizes the tank can be unlocked and they manage to get inside, now trying to find a way to stop it on the highway. The tank accidentally crushes a biker gang's motorcycles, and now they're chasing the tank in a car. The police also get involved and are chasing the tank too. With little road left, Skidmark manages to launch the Fast Crew and Tito out of the tank. Despite the destruction the tank caused, everyone is fond of Tito's burritos, and everything works out in the end. Apparently not even the show understands the moral of this episode, because I really don't think there's one in this episode. It was just all action. And admittedly, it was some very good action. Maybe it's just because it's a bit of a fear I have, but I felt very real dread as the tank rolled out of control, causing destruction in its wake. And quite frankly, I had forgotten all about the fizzy drinks that were introduced earlier, which ended up saving the day. I wouldn't really say that's a good thing, but it's not really a bad thing either. At least it was introduced at all. Some shows are really fond of the Deus Ex Machina trope. Not this one though. Yeah, unfortunately when there aren't any character inconsistencies nor tropes to discuss, I don't really have much to say about these episodes. Action good, animation pretty, you get it. So, fun fact, back before I purchased all of Turbo Fast on YouTube, I, for some reason, had this episode already purchased. I don't know if I had purchased it ages ago because I really liked the episode or something, but for some reason, for a little while, this was the only episode I had on YouTube. But now that I've spent roughly $45 on the whole show, I don't have to be taunted by this one episode. Oh, right, I'm reviewing this episode now. Alright, this shouldn't be too hard. Zoolander starts with the Fast Crew minus Skidmark and White Shadow, who are pretending to be sick, going with Chet on a safety retreat for 3 days. Skidmark and White Shadow plan a weekend of gaming. They beat the game and are unfortunately pestered by Deuce, the fake Turbo from many episodes ago. He's anticipating a race with Turbo, but he's early, so the duo have to occupy him with an experimental racing shell. And of course, Deuce gets into trouble by landing in a zoo. Along the way, Skid and Shadow get attacked by many animals, finally finding Deuce in an epic culmination of their gaming skills. Well, until we find out Deuce is actually friends with a bunch of gorillas. This was a pretty boring episode despite all the action going on. The episode rather blatantly says the lesson, which is not to let your dedication to gaming cause issues for others. Wait, what? Why does this show have a mix of hyper-specific messages alongside actually applicable messages? I guess if you keep it as broad as cause issues for others, then you could mean anything. Like, don't neglect your friends to play Plants vs. Zombies for hours on end because you still haven't beaten all the achievements. Wait, no, that's too real. You get my point. It's a weird moral. There's not much character development in this episode, surprisingly. Apparently White Shadow is into gaming. I guess I could have guessed that based on him being into fail videos and liking cheese duties. Those are some pretty gamer traits. Skidmark and White Shadow don't really care for Deuce's safety, which I don't really mind because I don't like Deuce. And it's pretty in character for them anyway. Byrne is apparently willing to skip on her boyfriend's favorite upcoming event. Seems rather cruel, but joke's got a joke. I get it. Let's move on. Balloonatics is a bit more about Whiplash's backstory, wow. The Fast Crew end up at a food festival, which is taking place at a vineyard. Apparently Whiplash is a local celebrity known as Chubby Snail, and the Fast Crew are slowly finding out about it. While they're asleep, Whiplash sneaks out to see his parents. We find out through conversation that his real name is Whitney, and he decided to dip out on the family tradition of being a vineyard mascot to pursue racing, and his parents are quite unhappy about it. He leaves on bad terms, and has to once again try to get the Fast Crew to avoid his past. Unfortunately, Turbo finds out, and while looking for him, Whiplash accidentally sends his parents up on a hot air balloon. To get the Fast Crew's help, he has to admit his parents are aboard. He manages to save his parents alongside Turbo, and now they accept him. But as he feared, the Fast Crew make fun of him because of his real name being revealed. It's kind of like that episode of Seinfeld. Wait, what? So this episode is also pretty boring. I must wonder why this is the only episode I purchased back in the day. It's neat to learn more about Whiplash's past, but frankly, I'm more interested in the breakneck stuff, not as much about his family issues. His parents don't accept him as a racer, and so logically he will have to show them him racing, and they will learn to accept him in the end. Open and close. And yes, that's what happens here. It's basic, predictable, and I don't really care that much about it. Unfortunately, I don't find his parents to be endearing enough to like them, so dang it. This is just a boring episode. It's conclusive. We learn more about Whiplash's softer side here. He used to be the mascot for the vineyard, but some unknown event caused him to leave the vineyard and presumably meet Breakneck. I am quite curious about this mysterious event that caused him to change his ways and become more hard on the outside. But I think it's a neat use of the contradictory personality, which has potential to be used in interesting ways, besides Surf and Turf. I wasn't fond of that. We don't get much out of the other characters, unfortunately, besides that Turbo's a massive gullible idiot, but that's pretty consistent for him. Next up. The Packet Racket starts with Chet discovering the entire tomato stash in a state of total disarray, before being approached by a pair of rats who offer ketchup packets to the snails. Turbo, White Shadow, and Skidmark are suspicious of the rats and decide to stalk them. Skidmark stays behind to listen using a bug, and Turbo and White Shadow follow the rats. They see the rats are selling other processed vegetables to bugs who have lost their crops, conveniently of the same variation. They finally follow them to a hideout, which is surprisingly led by Captain Dirtbeard. Turbo and White Shadow go undercover to find out more. After a bunch of escapades, Dirtbeard allows Turbo and Shadow to examine their operation. It turns out the rats are destroying their crops and turning them into condiments to scam bugs out of money. Hey, this feels like an Ace Gecko scheme if I've ever seen it. Why is Dirtbeard doing this? Anyway, after being revealed, Whiplash and Smooth go to help Turbo and Shadow before they get destroyed by a salty spork. I don't know why the snails being scared of sporks is a recurring gag, but I guess it is. The snails ruin the rats' operation, taking down Dirtbeard once and for all. No sympathy from the fast crew, of course. These late episodes have been a whole bunch of action, haven't they? Not much to speak of regarding character development. I guess we've gotten as far as we can get with a show that features 7 main characters. Can't possibly develop all 7 of them, can we? Anyway, enough questions. This episode's plot is pretty entertaining. I can't say I expected Dirtbeard to return on initial viewing, but they really lay the hints on thick. Like, you will realize very quickly this is Dirtbeard's scheme. Though, as I mentioned earlier, why on earth is Dirtbeard doing this? Ace Gecko makes sense, since he notoriously likes scamming others just for the fun of it. But Dirtbeard never really had a motivation for money. He just kinda wanted a loyal crew and a nice ship to rule. But I guess we can't bring Ace Gecko in yet, but soon. Very soon. Anyway, Dirtbeard is fine here, he just doesn't make any sense. Whiplash and Smooth kind of had their dynamic established in this episode. They both like to relax. I suppose I should have seen this coming in episode 13, but here's where we really get a better taste of it. Does that mean we have dynamics between all the main characters? Probably not. I'll put it on screen right now. Maybe I'll come back to it near the end of the show if I think of it. Anyway, that's all I've got. Smack Me Down features another antagonist return, that being Baron von Schwarzenegger from episode 3. At the start, the fast crew are trying to roast a bunch of grasshoppers along with Gigundus, but unfortunately Turbo kinda sucks at roasting and ends up insulting Gigundus by making fun of his injured mother unknowingly. Schwarzenegger invites Turbo and Gigundus to a roast battle, and of course Turbo needs some training before it. Turbo leans more into asking for forgiveness from Gigundus, but Burn and Whiplash insist Turbo learn a thing or two. Burn mentions her idol, Smaxon Jackson, helped inspire her, and apparently Turbo takes inspiration from real-life comedians instead, and clowns. We like that. Finally, Turbo gets into the competition, and after a whole load of failed roast attempts, as Gigundus is led by Smaxon Jackson, Turbo ends up getting more success by roasting himself. Technically, he doesn't go against the rules, so he catches up quickly. Finally, Turbo is given the opportunity to once again personally insult Gigundus, but he decides to go against it and helps Gigundus feel better, and Schwarzenegger is defeated as well. This episode has a very nice moral, one done a lot better compared to Pranked. Basically, don't take roasts too far so that you don't hurt others' feelings too badly. And there's no point for competition like this if it only ends in people getting hurt. It's very wholesome and I like it a bunch. And I like that Turbo ends up succeeding because he made fun of himself rather than Gigundus, going to show he doesn't have the heart to hurt others, and he is equally as successful playfully making fun of himself. There's limits, and none of them are pushed by the end of this episode, which leads to a nice ending. Turbo actually learned something here. Just for the moral alone, this episode is pretty dang good. And also some of the roasts are genuinely quite clever. A few of them made me chuckle. Whiplash isn't very involved in this episode, at least not as much as I expected. It was more about Burn and Turbo's dynamic, probably because we've seen a lot of Turbo and Whiplash together lately. I'm not really sure what the point of presenting Whiplash as the main characters in this episode was, though. But whatever, it's just a nitpick. Besides that, usual comments. We're finally getting close to the end of the season. Moving on up is about Smooth being revealed as a secret vandalist, getting the attention of one of the mall's shop owners who is originally from the film, named Kim Lee, which I didn't know until looking it up for this video. She runs a salon and wants Smooth to help paint people's nails, which helps him gain popularity. Smooth is invited to a game show that he ends up winning, sending him on an A-list cruise. Meanwhile, the fast crew need help saving Starlight City from rogue cats, but they need Smooth's help, so they have to go find him. Turbo goes to have a talk with Smooth, but he's unconvinced. Kim Lee manages to steal Smooth's fans, and now he's forced to return back to Starlight City. And now the city is safe from cats. So thankfully, Smooth very clearly explains the moral of this episode, being that friendship is more important than fame, but dang, this episode did a horrible job at portraying that. Not only did Smooth completely neglect his friends until he lost all of his fans and had nothing left to do besides return home, but he also seemingly had a far better time without his friends. Weirdly, this episode almost feels like a copy-paste of Flaming Moe's from The Simpsons. Both Moe and Smooth had to lose everything before they were willing to replace fame with friends, and unfortunately, I think neither works very well. I still like this episode, it's just that the moral kind of fails when you don't see the character go out of their way to help their friends on their own volition. They might as well do the same deed of ignoring their friends when they become famous again, making the lesson they learned moot. And unfortunately that sours my look on Smooth as a character. I already didn't like him that much, but this episode certainly didn't change my opinion. Final elaboration though, I want to make it clear you can have flawed main characters, even if they never properly learn a lesson. But if you're gonna make them dislikable, you need to at least make them charming. Smooth is not that charming, so I don't really care about him. Sorry, I'm done dumping on Smooth. The other characters aren't developed much, as expected. White Shadow is completely brain dead at this point, and Turbo seemingly has little tolerance for Smooth in this episode, which is a bit surprising. Also, Whiplash isn't good at DJing, and Chet doesn't know about social media. That's not really a vital development though. That's all. The Great Shell Robbery is, as it advertises, about the mysterious disappearance of the Fast Cruise shells. Turbo manages to find a hermit crab shell and approaches Rockwell on what the relevancy is. He explains that Clip and Clap, from 3 episodes ago, were planning a heist on Starlight City. Turbo finds them and a few other hermit crabs hiding in a bank with the Fast Crew's racing shells. Skidmark introduces a few sucky shells the Fast Crew can use to break into the terrarium that happens to be inside a bank. The Fast Crew miserably fail to silently break into the bank and are quickly spotted by Clip and Clap, but they miraculously manage to take the shells back anyway. All the while, every character is being a complete idiot. Dang, it's weird. I remember this episode being pretty good, but pretty much everything here sucked. The voice acting was fine, and the backgrounds were nicely drawn, and the humor was surprisingly good, and the pacing was pretty good, but everything else was pretty lame. The animation is extremely messed up in this episode. The movements are very stilted and almost give a blatant feeling of a Flash animation. The lip sync is often delayed or just does not fit what the characters are saying. The characters are even off-model on occasion. It was really super distracting, and made focusing on the story of the first half of this episode really hard. That's probably just a me problem though. Pretty much every character here has to be a moron for this story to exist. Turbo thinks up terrible plans until the very end, which no other character understands despite being very simple. The Fast Crew thinks Turbo's plan is stupid, but somehow their combined plan, with about the same level of stupid, is not actually stupid to them. The Flash doesn't understand how Chet's helicopter is meant to help them escape, and he excuses his stupidity as being too distress. Nuh-uh. Whiplash is the wittiest character in the group, and you're telling me a little bit of stress, compared to the monumental stress he's been in other episodes, is going to defeat him? By Turbo of all people? Seriously? Yeah, sorry, that's complete character assassination. Skidmark is also a bit of a moron too. Like I said earlier, I took Skidmark as being another one of the more intelligent snails on the team, but apparently his experimental shells have greatly decreased in quality, and he seemingly has no reservations about using them. He doesn't think to create new, better shells while they have the time to do so. No, they must use these terrible shells right now, and everyone else, including Whiplash, and including Chet, has hardly any reservations about this plan. They only go through with the plan because Turbo's was too awful to consider, but there's no other possible solution here besides Turbo's plan or Skidmark's plan, and I guess when the hermit crabs are trapped in rope, they are just completely unable to do anything. Guys, you're crabs! Use your claws! Snip snip! You're free! And one of them has Skidmark's shell, which more than likely has a tool that can help them escape. And there's one with Burns' shell too, which could easily burn the rope. Everyone is so stupid. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit heated. No pun intended. When an episode is bad, I will make it very vocal, as I did with my Hell of a Boss video. I have issues with my temper, and no better way to relieve it than to complain about mollusks being stupid. I suppose I should move on before I have another outburst. This is probably the worst episode in the show so far, if that isn't apparent. Not a very enjoyable watch, and added just about nothing but stupidity to the pre-established lore. Let's finally move on. Okay, I remember Chet vs. Dr. Disorder is pretty good. Hopefully this will help me cool my jets a little bit. This episode is an old detective film style episode about Chet being terrorized by a mysterious litter bug who breaks his impulsive rules. Chet has been lacking sleep lately due to his nightmares, which seemingly causes him paranoia. Turbo is willing to help him find clues of this terrorist, dubbed Dr. Disorder, who keeps leaving salami wrappers around the park. Slowly the episode sprinkles hints that Chet is actually Dr. Disorder. Turbo thinks Chet is absolutely insane, and leaves him all on his own to face Dr. Disorder himself. But yeah, Sorry, I spoiled it already. Chet is Dr. Disorder. So this has all been a bunch of dreams, and his sleepwalking is caused by the salami he's been eating. And so, presumably, Chet starts to let loose a little, and becomes less paranoid about his rule keeping. I remember this episode being better than it was, unfortunately. The mystery makes very little sense, as Chet's misbehavior is explained as him letting loose while he's asleep, because it's the only time he can let himself misbehave. But I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Is it that he's so uptight that he subconsciously misbehaves to make up for it? That doesn't make any dang sense. And why is Chet so paranoid in this episode anyway? I get intensive OCD, I've been there before, but this feels rather drastically out of his character. He sought respect by helping snails stay safe, but now he's suddenly going way overboard and inconveniencing others. And for some reason this means he wants to balance it out by misbehaving while sleepwalking. Is he unwillingly being this uptight? I'm so confused by this. Anyway, by the end, Chet concludes that safety is nice and all, but it's okay to bend a rule or two. Try doing that with human law and see how it works out for you, Chet. Or even at school. My schools were so intense that if we so much just talked in the bathroom, our grades would get lowered. Or if we were late to our classes because there's very few navigational guides, we would lose all our freedom and be forced to walk in lines like we're little kids. Okay, enough projecting. Yeah, I don't think that's the greatest moral to teach her. Rather, I think it should be about letting loose and not being so uptight that you cause others to be inconvenienced, but at the same time not hurting others and not being a terrible person. There's a balance this episode doesn't establish very well. To close off, this episode is pretty lame, but I do like the attempt at a mystery. I'm a bit of a mystery fiend, so I was happy to see actual hints being laid down, as blatant as they may have been. They must not have much faith in their audience, huh? Anyway, enough of that. Damselfly in Distress starts with the Fast crew finding an ad for a damselfly who is trapped in a tower, which tempts them to see if they can go save her. Bern and Chet stay behind, again, while the rest of the crew visit a fairy tale themed mini-golf course, where the damselfly is located in a tower guarded by an evil mystery figure. Meanwhile, the Fast crew compete against a frog prince, a singing cricket, and an upper-class racist European beetle. After avoiding several dangerous obstacles, the Fast crew make it to the tower, only to get distracted in a battle of wits. Some weird creature, I honestly have no idea what it is, manages to accidentally riz the damselfly, who has apparently been put here by her mother, and the Fast crew all lose. A bit of a loaded episode, but a pretty action-oriented one too. Basically, the moral here is to not compete against your friends for some arbitrary goal, and instead agree on a compromise together. It's a good lesson, more or less portrayed well in this episode, especially since none of them end up winning because of their shenanigans. So really, I guess it's also a lesson not to dilly-dally on other arbitrary tasks. So it's like the tortoise and the hare story, in a vague way. This episode had some pretty entertaining action, although I feel like the non-snail competitors get knocked out of the race a little too easily. They were just kinda thrown in just cuz. Frankly, I wish one of them had won instead, which would push the moral of not wasting time arbitrarily. But whatever, I'm rambling. The animation is still pretty mid, unfortunately. I don't really have much more to say. I hope the second mini-episode isn't as boring as I remember it being. Dome Sweet Dome features the return of Ace Gecko, who insists he is out of scamming and is now selling domes to mollusks to protect them from the elusive salt rains. If you didn't know, snails can get completely dried out by salt, which kills them. You probably realized that if you watched the other episodes, though. Ace manages to convince Chet to buy an invisible dome, then scams him out of tomatoes. Under the assumption Ace screwed Chet over, the Fast crew get pissed at Chet. Chet goes to Ace to try and get his tomatoes back, but Ace keeps trying to gaslight Chet into believing the salt rains are real. The rest of the Fast crew try to help, but they too keep getting scammed. Chet realizes Ace is using his tail to mess with Turbo Smooth and Bern, so he brutally chops Ace's tail off. With something worth Ace's while, he hands the tomatoes back, but alas, the salt rains are real, and the dome is real too, to Ace's and the Fast crew's surprise. I'm quite fond of this episode. I like Ace, as he has a lot of charm in my opinion, and this episode really just accentuates that. He's clearly very slick and clever, finding individual ways to mess with each snail in believable ways, such as denying a lone compromise with Whiplash and Chet, or besting White Shadow and Skidmark with his new abilities. No one feels dumb when they exist alongside Ace, and I'm very grateful for that. Many other past episodes have had to dumb down the Fast crew just to make the antagonists look worse, but those like Ace Gecko are just actually threatening. What's even better is he's clearly capable of being bested himself, so he's not an unstoppably clever force. Chet stealing Ace's tail, along with the dome actually being real, and making a deal with Whiplash to only take some tomatoes really balances Ace out, hence why he's one of my favorite antagonists in the show. Besides that, really the only development we get is from Chet, who seemingly has not learned his lesson about Ace and is still getting scammed, though is able to best Ace in other ways. As he is Turbo's brother, Turbo being the notoriously gullible snail he is, it feels organic. Chet is obviously smart in his own way compared to Turbo, and although Turbo's plan was still good in the episode, Chet still wins over with his own tactic. They're similar, but they're still different in identifiable ways. It's great. I love it. Besides character writing, the plot feels very well paced, and there are a number of pretty good jokes thrown into. Unfortunately, though, the animation doesn't seem to be improving. I guess that'll be the new animation standard for this show. Rather disappointing. At least it's not as bad as The Great Shell Robbery. Well, for now anyway. My Pet Clam Squatch is about an event Skidmark identifies as a red clam moon, which agitates the clam squatch that Skidmark has been hiding in the large Indy 500 trophy. Apparently Clamson, the name of the clam squatch, is Skidmark's pet, which he wants to protect from a group known as Secret. The name has to be whispered. Apparently the group is made up of dragonflies that want to take Clamson away to perform experiments on him. The Fast crew want to get rid of Clamson too, but agree to help Skidmark hide Clamson from Secret. The only way Clamson can be safe is if Clamson is hidden all the way in Canada. Skidmark has to say a tragic goodbye to him, and the Fast crew have their memories wiped. So, question. More of a rhetorical question, I guess. Am I meant to feel sad? Because the show has the whole Fast crew tearing up while Skidmark is shooing Clamson away, but I didn't feel sad at all, quite frankly. In fact, I chuckled when I saw them crying. Unfortunately, you can't make me feel emotional for a mythical being that we've seen with Skidmark for less than 10 minutes. While it's nice that Clamson got a happy ending, I don't really feel emotional about it. So I guess I find the ending nice in spirit, but the rest of the episode not so much. The action is rather boring, and I don't feel like there are very smooth transitions between major plot events. We start with Skid introducing Clamson, then boom, Secret is after him, then boom, they're being chased, then boom, Clamson is in Canada. There are some pretty major tone shifts, which is definitely 100% the fault of how short the episode is. The pacing has to be lightning fast. This probably should have been a longer episode, which may have given it more emotional value too. But quite frankly, I don't care for these feel-good stories in general, so I'm not too heartbroken over it. The only worthwhile character development here is with Skidmark, of course. Apparently Skid has strong sentimentality and cares a lot for the mythical creatures he seeks out. At least we have given Skidmark some character depth. About dang time. Unfortunately, I still think his character feels a bit lackluster, even with this new development. He's a crazy, sometimes smart conspiracist who cares about the mythical creatures he studies. That's really it. I don't know. I feel like there's a piece missing still. Besides that, usual comments, too much arbitrary screen darkening, truly sickening. Hard Luck and Hard Case is yet again about the return of Hard Case. It starts with Hard Case lazing about before his minions approach him and declare they're quitting because Hard Case has not been bothered to deal with Turbo again. To try to get them to stay, Hard Case plans many ploys to try and defeat Turbo, while the Fast crew are out in the country. Hard Case uses an Amazon knockoff to order a bunch of items using drones, which he plans to use to destroy Turbo, but all of his ploys fail, logically, mainly through faults of his own. They use this episode to reference Roadrunner, which is kinda funny. Hard Case eventually just uses the knockoff Amazon drones, which also fails because apparently Skidmark also has a knockoff Amazon account. Hard Case breaks down and Turbo feels pretty bad, so he agrees to help Hard Case pretend he captured and murdered the Fast crew, and so Hard Case's minions agree to stay. This was a surprisingly wholesome episode. Usually the villains of Turbo Fast don't get any sympathy from the crew, but apparently Turbo was willing to help out Hard Case despite the numerous times he tried to kill him. To be fair, Hard Case has gotten so pathetic that even I started to feel bad for him. I say that like I'm a psychopath. I'm not. Really. When we do see the Fast crew offer their sympathy to the villains, it feels a lot nicer. When Ace and Whiplash made a deal at the end of the last episode, it felt good. When Turbo helped Hard Case here, it felt good. When I see Dirtbeard get abandoned in the water twice, or I see Rudy the Lizard get trashed on by his mother, with no sympathy from the Fast crew, I'm not as fond of it. If my point isn't clear yet, I think the show needs to offer more sympathy to its villains. If it wants to teach children valuable lessons, especially about teamwork, it should encourage the kind of sympathy it gives to villains like Hard Case. That's not to say you should forgive them, it's just that if you want to get someone on your good side, do a solid for them. One step closer to world peace, all thanks to Turbo Fast. Anyway, there's not much character development here either. Hard Case is still a bumbling fool, which I'm not a big fan of, but at least it's possible to get through to him. And at least the show didn't try to make the rest of the crew stupid to make Hard Case a valid threat. He's just not a valid threat, and that's what makes him entertaining. I just hope they start doing something new with him soon. I'm getting tired of the same bit. We shall see. Also, Skidmark breaks the fourth wall again. This is a recurring thing now, I suppose. B's story is about White Shadow experiencing a lot of bad luck while his shell is being repaired. When he gets his shell back, he notices his plush bee, named Mr. Busby, has disappeared. White Shadow explains that the plush is sentimental to him because it's meant to protect him. Chet decides to help by convincing White Shadow that the bee is unnecessary because danger is around every corner. And Skidmark breaks the fourth wall again, which I think is the real thing to fear here. Meanwhile, the Fast Crew tries to help find Mr. Busby, who they finally find in a dumpster. The dumpster ends up being emptied by a dump truck where the Fast Crew are getting crushed. White Shadow and Chet go to help, and White Shadow has to fight back his newfound paranoia to free the crew. And now White Shadow has his bee back. How to look at this episode? I guess the way I see it, this episode is meant to once again be an attempt at balancing behaviors, more specifically, to fear to some degree, but not to be paranoid about every possible thing if it prevents you from helping others. Weird how these episodes always involve Chet. It's like a theme made for him. I think the message is done well enough, much better than in Chet vs. Dr. Disorder. However, this episode kind of pushes Chet back in development, just as the aforementioned episode did. Remember back in episode 4, when Chet went into an ant colony to scout the area and make sure it was safe for Burn, later to swoop in and save Burn from falling into a large pit of salt? This current Chet, if put back into this episode, would have said Burn should cancel the race altogether because it's too dangerous. What is causing Chet's paranoia to grow so drastically? Chet literally has to get thrown out of the action so that White Shadow can save the Fast Crew on their own, which includes both Turbo, his brother, and Burn, his girlfriend. It just feels wrong for his character, and it doesn't feel like this quote-unquote arc is being addressed by the show at all. It's just kinda happening. Oh, sorry, I'm blathering on about Chet. This episode is about White Shadow. He doesn't really get too much development, unfortunately. He's apparently also a bit superstitious like Skidmark, which I feel strengthens their existing dynamic, though this episode doesn't really take advantage of it too much. I think they make one joke and then the rest of the jokes are about everyone making fun of his superstitions, and Chet's paranoia. Very charming guys. At least it's not taken seriously, I guess. The animation looks a bit better in this episode, and the humor seems to be improving. So really, when I said the show is generally hit or miss, I was right on the money. Hopefully this season ends strongly. At long last, the final episode of Season 1. Let's see what we've got here. Turbo starts with some self-aware exposition stating the Fast Crew are going to a race con. Then they make some more self-aware jokes about how weird and annoying fanatics are. While the Fast Crew are signing autographs, Turbo is approached by a guy who claims to work for an orphanage. He wants Turbo to go with him and say hi to the orphans, but it's all a ploy, and Turbo gets kidnapped. Apparently he's a completely insane fanatic who wants to turn Turbo into a figurine to keep forever. The Fast Crew help free Turbo, and they all try to fight the fanatic off. Apparently Chet managed to summon the other fanatics, and one of them helps let the Fast Crew out. The episode ends with the crew visiting a whale attraction alongside the friendly fanatic. Well, I must say this episode was pretty dang funny. I don't know if I've seen many shows that are this self-aware about fan bases. I think it pretty much portrays the average fan base in the perfect way, showing the sadistic weirdos and the good-hearted people alike. I think the most unrealistic part is that Whiplash only has one fan to speak of. If I were at that convention, I'd want signatures from everyone. Not that I'm a fanatic or anything. It'd just be cool. Either way, the portrayal of the creepy fanatic that I didn't bother to look up the name of feels very real. Like, this is a real person translated into a cartoon. The good-hearted fanatic, who I didn't mention, is named Merv. Thankfully doesn't feel unrealistic either. There are definitely fans out there who would be willing to help those they obsess over, and I think those people are the real fans. Clearly the writers did their homework for this episode. I thought I'd have more to say here, but there's not really anything new with any of the characters, besides the usual consistency behind Turbo and his gullibleness around fans. And apparently now Chet knows about social media, mentioning he's aware of fan forums for Turbo. I guess that kinda makes sense since he's his brother and all. The animation was clearly inconsistent at times, but it never got overbearingly bad. The animators are surprisingly good at animating humans given they're creating a show about snails. Surely it is possible to have a broad range. The final episode, The Snail Man, is about a large racing event involving all of Turbo's antagonists that we've met over the season. Like, actually everyone. Even the Queen Ant and Hayaku, and a Guy Gagné from the film? What on earth? Apparently he wants to rematch with Turbo, basically mirroring a bug entering a human race with a human entering a bug race. Pretty poetic. Basically the entire race is an opportunity for all of the antagonists to take revenge on Turbo, all getting thwarted in the process. By the end, it all comes down to Guy and Turbo again, which Turbo wins through his wit, and thus Guy and the other antagonists seeking revenge all lose to Turbo once again. Man, for the longest time, I thought this episode was double length, but no, it's the usual 11 minutes. Maybe I thought because of the, pardon the pun, breakneck pacing. 1 minute we're in the middle of the race, the next we're in a cutaway bit where Chet deals with some characters. 1 second we're dealing with one antagonist, then the next we're dealing with another, and another, and another, and another. We don't get a proper chance to see all of the antagonists participate. They show up for their 2 seconds of fame and then dip out. The most we get to see is, of course, Guy Gagné. He has a fair motivation to want to race Turbo again, but I don't really understand his motivation to be a weird snail man. There's no rules in the race, so he could use a car if he wanted, and he probably would have won, while probably killing many animals in the process. But hey, no rules means no rules. If revenge is so important to Guy, why the heck not go through with that? The race also doesn't feel very tense, with the antagonists appearing and disappearing to the will of the writers, and Turbo getting stopped dead in his tracks but being able to pick himself back up and win makes it feel like there's very few stakes. Though he would have lost had Guy had just put his dang hand down on the finish line, but of course we must always have a frustrating conclusion. Like, come on, you feel Turbo running on your body, and you have no initiative to finish the race? Very unwanted shot, by the way. And apparently Hardcase and Hayaku, and the like, are no longer real competition to Turbo anymore, since they all stayed behind Turbo basically the whole time. Hardcase definitely should have been the winner, come on now. Did you see episode 1? Clearly not. I guess besides all that, this episode was pretty good. I liked seeing all the characters reunite in this weird revenge fest, although it had a lot of missed potential. It had nice animation, especially in this one segment, which threw me all the way back to episode 1 with its style. Very cool in paper, not as cool in practice. And so, we've reached the end of season 1. Before I move on, I'll share my general thoughts on the season as a whole. The episodes were generally a mix of either pretty good or pretty bad episodes, only 1 or 2 outliers overall. I think the season went into a quick decline, but it never really hit egregious bottoms. I found myself struggling to find things to talk about, which is probably a good thing since it means I found very little issue with the episodes. The most mistakes I found were in character inconsistencies, which were very rampant and, well, inconsistent in execution. However, I generally liked the characters as a whole. We got a lot of development from the characters, and none of it really felt forced. Just some of it felt a bit arbitrary or improperly done. The animation had its highs early on, but quickly tanked into pretty mid-territory, occasionally reaching some rather low quality. I didn't find it too distracting though. The morals of the episode were often comprehensive, but occasionally got muddled and difficult to figure out. Some were even a bit harmful. For the most part though, it feels like the show is just doing what it wants when it wants, and so you can't always get a moral out of every episode. Instead, we would get some action-oriented episodes, which more often than not were a thrill to watch. Finally, my overall entertainment value was pretty high. Only a few episodes were boring, but most of them felt tightly written and kept me watching. Some tropes here and there, but nothing that made me roll my eyes. Pretty good start so far. Let's have a look at the other seasons. To quickly elaborate, the last 2 seasons have half the amount of episodes the first season did, and so they each only have 13 episodes. So really I'm just reviewing 2 26-episode seasons. I hope you're ready for this all over again, because I sure ain't. Starting the season with the challenge. This episode is about Burn initiating a challenge wherein the Fast Crew eat a ghost pepper to declare a winner. Chet ends up in the midst of the challenge, and frustrated with the Fast Crew shenanigans, Chet offers his own challenge to the Fast Crew. The challenge is to see who can go the longest without racing. Throughout the episode, snails get eliminated, until it's up to Smoove and White Shadow. White Shadow dupes Smoove and ends up winning to everyone's surprise, and so Shadow is now the new champion. So this is a pretty good introduction to the new season, I would say. The style of humor seems to have rather drastically shifted into being more modern, such as including more internet references and modern lingo and whatnot. Now, I may be a Gen Z kid, but this kind of humor does not really do it for me. It rarely works as humor on its own. It's just kind of our way of speaking. It's like talking in an old English style and that being the whole joke. But there were still some pretty funny jokes here and there that made me audibly blow air out of my nose, so that's good at least. Though they also start leaning more into gross-out humor, which is the absolute bottom of the barrel, in my opinion, so I hope they don't lean too hard into it. I honestly can't remember all that well. Also, this episode feels like another Seinfeld episode. What? The characters are carried over well, too. Everyone still feels in character, even if slightly exaggerated for the sake of jokes. I can forgive that if the jokes are funny. Chet continues down his path of crippling paranoia, not willing to wait until tomorrow to mail a bill that is not time sensitive, even though it makes him lose the challenge. Yeah, not really funny, just frustrating. We get more unsubtle indications that Whiplash has a soft side just bursting to emerge in a future episode. And it will, don't worry. The animation has improved drastically, likely because this is the season premiere, so they want to draw audiences back in. The lighting seems to have changed subtly to have more contrast and gradients in it, which I think looks nice. Not really a big improvement from season 1's look though. Last notice about this episode, we get properly introduced to slugs, which were mostly just mentioned offhandedly by other characters. Apparently they're rich snobs who think snails are filthy creatures. Frankly, I don't know why the slugs are the same size as the snails. In my backyard at least, the slugs I've seen can be 2 or 3 times larger than the snails. But it's a nitpick. Maybe the snails just happen to be as big as the slugs. Possibly because of another feature episode which will include slugs in it. Luckily they're meant to be hateable as portrayed by the show. Glad the writers are loyal snail fans like myself. Let's proceed. Home and Our Own is about Skid and Shadow once again pretending to have a fake disease to, this time, get out of Whiplash's retreat. While the rest of the Fast Crew are gone, Clip and Clap decide to try and break into the Fast Crew's home to steal some of their items. Meanwhile, Skid and Shadow are trying to finish their favorite show, Gossip Snail. Skidmark manages to track them on his security system, and so he and Shadow continually try to stop Clip and Clap as they keep breaking in. Finally, Skid traps the 2 hermit crabs, and they are finally about to learn the ending of Gossip Snail, but one of the hermit crabs spoils it, and White Shadow nearly vaporizes them out of anger. Apparently Gossip Snail is a slug. Yeah, we're immediately talking about slugs again. I guess this season is meant to be some kind of commentary on racism or something. I do remember there being a lot of slugs, in the beginning anyway. Anyway, there's not much to be said about this episode. I think it's neat how they call back to one of their past episodes, but managed to spin it into something different and far more entertaining than the last. Gossip Snail does kinda narrate the episode as a way to indicate the influence TV is having on Skid and Shadow as Clip and Clap break in, similarly to how video games influenced them last time. But the setup was far more pronounced, as the seemingly innocuous bit about spoilers ends up being the proper climax to the episode. And yeah, I think it's totally in character. I just hope we don't see Clip and Clap again, because their shtick is getting old very quickly. Not much in the way of character development, and the animation is still pretty consistent from the last mini-episode, which means it's good. The humor is also still pretty mainstream, which is lame, but there were still some good jokes here and there. Generally, it was a good first episode, just maybe enough homages to existing media. Oh boy, I remember neither of these episodes being particularly good. The Mighty Snail starts with Byrne eating too much sugar, which leads to her causing mass destruction throughout Starlight City. In court, she's sentenced to lead a tetherball team for a couple hundred hours. The team has Deuce, Hubert, and Singe, the latter 2 being new characters based on Chet and Byrne respectively. The team is quite disastrous, and Byrne is unwilling to help due to her trauma around a competition with a slug, ending in her loss. Apparently the same slug, along with a few others, want to compete against Byrne and her team, which motivates her to want to train the team after all. Against all odds, Byrne's team wins as she and her old slug enemy compete one-on-one. And now the snails are racist against the slugs. This episode isn't terrible. I think there was perhaps a bit of uneven pacing in this episode. I expected far more of the episode to be based on the training, but that zipped by. Most of the episode was Byrne gaining motivation, mixed with the actual competition itself. The training felt rather pointless. Perhaps the purpose was just to learn about the characters. Fair enough, I guess. But it still zipped by far too quickly for me to care. The new characters are pretty much just young Chet and young Byrne, so there's not much to say about them. Deuce is annoying and obsessed with Turbo, so the usual stuff. We'll learn more about Byrne's past, and we see Byrne could be afraid to participate in something if she has trauma linked to it, which is a nice, tasty, conflicting personality trait, and I love me some of those. The plot is open and close, as Byrne battles trauma introduced in this episode and manages to push past it by winning. It's a nice, simple lesson that you can push through past failures if you try again in the present. And I guess slugs suck too. Yeah, that's all. Silent but Deadly is about White Shadow learning snail karate, which is actually disguised as chores for his sloth trainer. Meanwhile, Chet and the other Fast Crew are preparing for a parade by creating a float. While nearly destroying the float, White Shadow explains his new addiction to expired cheese duties. While on his own, Shadow runs into Silent but Deadly, who is a mute stink bug that wants to fight Turbo. White Shadow wishes to defend Turbo by fighting Deadly, who was apparently hired by Hardcase. During the parade, White Shadow successfully takes down Deadly, using the horrendous stench of his expired cheese duties. And Hardcase dies, I guess. Another action-heavy episode with nothing much to talk about. The humor is extremely focused on Gross Out and White Shadow being a moron, which are two of the lowest brow jokes this show could muster, though the setup and payoff of this episode is quite neat, but still confused. Initially it seems like White Shadow's useless training will actually come in handy, but the actual thing that stops Deadly is the foul cheese duties that were introduced immediately after his training. I think the show tried to mesh both, but it more so focused on the latter rather than the former. I think the cheese duties should have been the secondary payoff to the karate payoff, as it felt more vital to the episode's plot. I guess they were trying to bait and switch, and I certainly didn't expect it. That doesn't make it good though. White Shadow is dumb, but he's smart sometimes. That seems to be his contradictory traits. Very lame, very broad, and very random. Oh yeah, if you don't know what I mean by contradictory traits, since I've mentioned it a few times now, I mean a character having a base trait, then having another trait that contradicts that original trait to give the character depth. It's a very simple method that I use a lot with my own characters. It sounds bad, but it's actually very useful. Though it's important that they make sense, and that they still have some of their own depth to them. A character being dumb, but sometimes being smart isn't very deep. A character being willing to challenge anything but cowering under trauma is deep. I guess, like I said, a show with 7 main characters needs to draw the line sometimes. It just makes White Shadow's character lame, that's all. So far we don't even have that kind of depth with characters like Smooth or Skidmark, or Turbo really all that much. Huh, I wonder what that's about. Anyway, I'm done rambling for now. You're probably bored by all this writing advice. Guess who returns in Agent Ace? That's right. This episode is about Turbo wishing to have his own personal branded cereal. Ace approaches Turbo claiming he is actually into legit business now, and he offers Turbo an opportunity to have his brand profiled everywhere and turn him into an A-list celebrity. Ace hooks Turbo up with a butterfly celebrity named Bramber, and Ace exploits Chet to help Turbo rise in popularity. Chet reveals to Turbo that journalists are creating fake news about him thanks to what Ace has been feeding them. Chet helps Turbo regain his reputation, and Ace runs off to ruin others' reputations. And Chet admits he has a groveling kink. Very cool. So this episode decides to reintroduce Chet's old contradictory trait from back in early season 1, where he was willing to help others even if it put him in incredible danger. In this episode, Chet puts himself into a collapsing building to get Turbo to save him, hence saving his reputation. Although Chet regrets it at the moment, he still regardless went into a dangerous situation to help his brother. This is a good far cry from episode 25, where he was literally going to let Turbo die because he was afraid of a garbage truck that he was in no danger of messing with. So I'm very glad we're getting this side of Chet again, because I missed it. And Turbo is very gullible. Nothing new here, really. At least he's willing to admit when he's wrong and trusts his brother enough to follow through with his plans, even if he has doubts. The show is writing these two quite well together. There must be some siblings on the writing team. The animation isn't too spectacular in this episode, but that's probably because there's very little action in it. It doesn't look any worse than the last 2 episodes, at least. The humor was very lackluster in this episode, but it is admittedly making me laugh more often than season 1's humor did. So my average humor rating is just gonna be better than season 1 standards now. And with that, we can continue on. Smooth as Ice is another freaking slug episode. So it's hot in Starlight City, and Smooth is aware of a secret ice stash in Sherman Oaks, which is where the slugs live. Smooth sees a lady slug that he likes, so the two decide to put aside their differences as they realize they're both ignorant to each other's cultures. The lady slug named Tiffany admits she has a boyfriend, and Smooth basically just wants to win her over. Smooth pretends to be a slug to hang out with Tiffany, her boyfriend Richie, and his gang. Richie has Smooth prove himself by pranking Starlight City, but Smooth and Tiffany refuse to participate, and he gets outed as a snail. Smooth and Richie decide to compete on the ice slopes. Despite being sabotaged, Smooth wins and declares peace. Okay, before I talk about everything else, I have to mention this bit. What was this bit? I'm serious, what was the joke here? Who is this guy? Why does he sound like Turbo? How does he know Smooth's name? Why is he just here randomly? Huh? What? This slug's existence is an enigma. Was it a more elaborate joke that was cut or something? Why did they leave this in? Who is this guy? There's nothing on the fandom wiki about this. I'm so very confused. Okay, whatever. The random hat slug that appears for like 3 seconds is just a mystery forever. Anyway, Smooth is about the same as usual. He's cool and social and likes women, and yeah, not much character development. Besides the usual loyalty to his friends, and willingness to get beside his slug racism, which was introduced not that long ago. I guess he's the key to ending the mollusk civil war in the finale or something. I'm joking, that never happens. The real finale is a lot more underwhelming. The humor is pretty lame, but the animation is quite nice. The approach of racism in this episode is pretty watered down, probably for the sake of the viewers. You've got the snobs who are wholeheartedly racist, like the rightists, and the perfectly normal people who are willing to get past racism, like the leftists. Quite black and white as far as I see, no pun intended. But again, I guess they were just hesitant to approach racism too aggressively in this kids show, and seemingly the rightist slugs just get past their racism just like that. Alright, cool. That's how it works in reality, for sure. I've got nothing else to comment on. The disappearing act starts with a misunderstanding between Turbo, Burn, and Chet, leading to Chet having to bring both his brother and his girlfriend to a magic show hosted by Count Ticula. Throughout the event, Turbo and Burn keep fighting for Chet's attention, and during a magic trick, Chet mysteriously disappears. Turbo and Burn are concerned and follow clues to go find him. The two start to slowly bond as they realize how insane and annoying Chet is. They find him and he reveals that he planned the whole chase to get Burn and Turbo to get along. Then finally the two ditch Chet at the magic show. I am pretty mixed on this episode's morals. A similar lesson to this one has been done previously by this show, being that you can get past your differences and learn to agree on your similarities. It's a very valuable lesson, but the way this show goes about it seems to be far more in favor of comedy rather than a genuine lesson. The two agree on hating Chet, which feels quite out of character for both of them, and honestly is a little offensive. To start with the former point, Turbo and Burn alike have shown loyalty to Chet, despite how neurotic he may be, because they love him for who he is. But now the two agree that Chet is too annoying to want to be around, so they ditch him at the magic show and neglect his interests entirely. Chet's scheme goes uncongratulated too. What's a bit weird too is Turbo elaborates he still loves, in a familial sense, Chet despite what he thinks of him, but by the end of the episode he seemingly could not care less for him. It's rather sad. And Burn, who has been the one to constantly give Chet attention, suddenly doesn't care for him either. It's a far cry from the beginning of the episode. I guess the writers intended that, wanting to send the message that being obsessive is often bad, which is true. But it went too far in the other direction and just became bad again. On the other note, Turbo and Burn both describe Chet's behaviors in ways that reflect OCD and phobias and whatnot. In short, mental disorders. Now, I have a few disorders of my own, and I typically could not care less if someone insults my disorders, but this feels rather iffy. The writers seemingly intentionally want these statements to come off as natural and productive, but they're pretty dang mean. Many people can't control their mental disorders. I know I sure can't cope well with my own OCD, but to insult him and present it as a worthwhile discussion among growing friends, not sitting right with me, to be real. Regardless, this episode is pretty entertaining otherwise. The setting is a neat idea, if a bit underexploited. That seems to be a common theme with the show. The change from Burn and Turbo hating each other to being best friends wasn't as gradual as I hoped, but it still felt natural, so I can forgive. I like the casual peacefulness between snails and other animals, but snails and slugs, two closely related animals, are dealing with harsh racial issues, despite the lack of peace between animals established in episode 18. No, enough nitpicking. I need to move on now. The Sting of Injustice is a Batman parody, I guess. The Fast crew come across a pair of caterpillars who were supposedly captured by the Stinger, who is a vigilante hornet. Turbo runs into the Stinger, and he's starstruck. The Stinger wants Turbo to become his sidekick, and Turbo happily agrees to take down those who do misdemeanors, or less. But it turns out Turbo does pretty much none of the crime-fighting work. The Fast crew points this out to Turbo, and Turbo breaks down admitting he hates working with the Stinger. They work together to create a fake supervillain to drive him away. He moves out of Starlight City and might come back, but probably not. This episode is pretty good. We get to see Turbo break down again, like in the Marty episode, which continues to add some tasty layers to his character. Why do I keep calling layers tasty? I don't know. It feels like a good adjective. It feels pretty in character for him to be so starstruck over someone who, vaguely like him, does stunts to help others. I'm glad Turbo has a non-human idol. About time. This episode tackles a relatively niche lesson that not all people you admire are cracked up to be who you thought. A very good lesson, and from personal experience, one I should have heeded a little better. The Stinger neglects Turbo and forces upon him a lifestyle that he deeply dislikes, while under the guise of Turbo being his partner in crime. Thankfully, the episode doesn't get much darker than that. It easily could have, but it's likely so that the lesson is more relatable to general audiences, and that's better than not. The humor in this episode stands out especially well. The parody angle tends to fall rather hard with TurboFast, but it worked quite well in this episode. They acknowledge superhero tropes while still making the Stinger charming in his own right. And Turbo playing the supervillain really well is probably a joke on how a movie's villain actor tends to play their role the best out of any other actor. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it's just something I've observed. Also, Turbo's voice actor's acting goes hard in this episode. Just generally a pretty good episode. The only few nitpicks I have are that Chet dared not to recycle a can properly, and seemingly the Stinger does not notice that the very snails in danger are seemingly completely fine, despite him losing to the fake supervillain. I guess they just told him that everyone escaped on their own. And maybe Chet not recycling properly was subtle character development. See, I can explain these nitpicks away. Episode perfect, clearly. Let's move on. Oh, both of these mini episodes I remember being bad. Let's push through this. The treasure of Sierra Marty starts with Chet, Skidmark, and Smooth going to a flea market, discovering an old map and a yo-yo. On the map are symbols of toads, and so to translate the map, the trio consult Marty. They all head to an ancient cove to find the treasure, going through all kinds of toad-themed puzzles. The entire time the snail trio try to think it through with logic, but Marty's lack of care manages to get them through, because he's a toad and that's how toads act. They finally make it, but seemingly the treasure is just a bunch of manure and flies. But apparently it wasn't, but it's too late and the snails are already gone. Not as bad as I expected. I hate Marty, of course, but weirdly I don't think he's that unforgivably awful. He did help the snails get through to the treasure, seemingly not for only his own gain, and he's not ruthlessly mean to the snails either. He's just very obnoxious, which works well as a character trait, but I still hate Marty regardless. Not in a faulty writing way, just in an intentional writing way. I hope the difference is distinguishable. This show is unfortunately leaning a lot more into gross out jokes. It will do this a lot more in the next mini episode, which is why I'm dreading it. One of the jokes is that Marty says he will lose his lunch, implying he's gonna vomit, but then he literally loses a bagged lunch. But when Smooth accidentally eats it, it turns out the lunch was actually barf. Logic-wise, I have no idea how this makes any sense, and comedy-wise, it makes me want to throw up. In a bad way. It's not funny, man, it's just gross. The rest of the jokes are okay though, even if they're a bit repetitive. Marty not caring about solving any of the puzzles is what helps them proceed. Well, most of the time anyway. Character development wise, not much to say. Smooth apparently has a line that can be crossed similarly to Turbo, but I guess it takes a lot less to break him. Though, to be fair, if I swallowed someone else's vomit, I would be extremely frustrated too. But dang, he's rather harsh to Marty. As for Skidmark, he's getting smarter again, mostly, and thankfully he's not obsessing over conspiracy theories the whole time, so I'll take what I can get. Chet fully admits that he's a coward who would ditch his friends, and even does so in the episode. Yeah, I don't like that. So much for teamwork and friendship. It's all about greed, baby. But they don't learn anything in the end. They just get punished by getting no treasure in the end. Rather lame. Last nitpick, I didn't really think of this before, but why do Gulpy and Marty look so different? They're both similar species. Toilet frogs also look similar to Marty, but I guess Gulpy, who I believe is meant to be a frog as well, actually looks like a frog. Very odd. I guess I can't delay this any longer. Big Baby starts with a customer getting distracted by a phone call and accidentally leaving her baby behind at Dos Bros Tacos. Tito tries to get the woman's attention while Turbo, Whiplash, and Burn watch the baby. They fail miserably and the baby ends up on a rampage through Starlight City. After Whiplash calms her down, the mother is caught by Tito and picks up her baby. Thank God they made the vomit green colored, otherwise I think I might have actually gotten sick. Quite an unfunny and boring episode. Irresponsible people taking care of babies has never been a funny trope, and I super duper do not care for this episode. The baby is annoying, but I guess that would be in character for a baby. Burn and Turbo seemingly don't know what they're doing, but Whiplash has a hidden talent for taking care of babies. In all honesty, I expected that more from Turbo as it felt more in his character, given how he has a higher tolerance and empathy compared to the others in the Fast Crew. But yeah, Whiplash is soft side and all. It is a bit weird after the whole joke of him wanting to avoid the baby as much as possible. It's almost like episode 8 of season 1 all over again. Except Whiplash doesn't snap out of it and help with his colder side. Instead, his softer side helps. I guess this is subtle character development. Hopefully. I just wish they made it more of a point, because otherwise it just seems out of character. Am I rambling a bit? Probably. As for the animation, it was noticeably lower quality, probably because a lot of the animators didn't want to work on this stupid concept for an episode. I don't blame them. It feels more stiff and less dynamic, again, like a Flash animation. The action, notably with Tito and White Shadow in the food truck, is way too cartoony and is a bit of a far cry from the relatively realistic action we've gotten, and I don't like it. Let's go back to the usual, please. Final notes, this episode was pretty boring. It was gross, unfunny, and seemed very stagnant. Also, for some reason the show has been cutting out some characters here and there. I don't mind it, I just prefer some kind of setup, like the 2 episodes of Skidmark and White Shadow being home alone. It's unusual for the group to be split up like this. Anyway, that's all I've got. I'm finally free. This episode is a double-length episode, and so I will be trying to spend a little more time reviewing it. Let's go. This episode starts with the Fast Crew watching a rocket launch. They all insist they would have fun in space besides Chet, and the universe hears them and decides to set up a mix-up where the Fast Crew, minus Skidmark, and a group of Russian astronaut snails switch places. The Fast Crew gets sent up in space, while Skidmark stays behind to act like a racist idiot with the Russian snails, as they try to explain the mix-up. While in space, the fast crew meet Tycho, who is a crazy astronaut monkey who I think is voiced by the same guy who voiced Ivor in Minecraft Story Mode, and I like that a bunch. The fast crew find out they're meant to be in space for a year, which freaks them out. White Shadow ends up opening the exit hatch, which throws them all into space. They all get split up into their own groups and find ways to get back to the space station while going space crazy. Tycho manages to capture them and they land back on Earth, happy to be back. The Russian snails end up going into space along with Tycho at the end. What is the deal with space being some climactic epic in fiction? Like, okay, context. Back maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, I forgot, I wrote this series of books called My Adventure, and the second one was about the main character, her friend, and Neil Armstrong going into space. Long story short, they freak out and return to Earth. I also killed Neil Armstrong in the story. I don't know what I was on when I was young. Anyway, my point is, for some reason, this seems to be a theme in fiction, of which I can find 2 examples. I just thought that was a weird coincidence. Maybe I took inspiration from this show. It probably took inspiration from me, actually. Anyway, actual review. The animation looks pretty high quality, which I expected given it's a double-length episode. It can look a bit janky every now and then, but it generally looks above standard. Sometimes the animation loops, which is a little lame, but I suppose cutting a corner that minor is forgivable. There's nothing special to say about the lighting and rendering. The aesthetic is very plain and modern techy, which doesn't offer much in the way of unique environments nor lighting. The place in space in the asteroids looks kinda neat, but isn't particularly breathtaking. The spacesuit designs are also pretty lame. They're just human spacesuits translated into a snail's body shape. Given how neat the racing shell designs are, I expected something similar, but I guess if the rest of the space aesthetic is as plain as it is, then it fits in. At this point in the series, we're getting very little, if any, character development. Turbo seems sensible until he goes crazy in space, which feels fitting. Given he can't race around and control where he's going, he'd probably freak out a bit. And generally, any normal person would be a bit panicked if they knew they might be trapped in space forever. Until they die, I mean. Whiplash is the most level-headed, but reasonably is also a bit freaked out by being in space. I'm glad he's not just stupidly stone-cold fearless the whole time. That would feel a lot more out of character, frankly. He's also not a total idiot, which I've learned to start appreciating from this show. Byrne also seems to go a bit crazy in space as she starts forming flaky alliances with Turbo and Whiplash, seeming selfishly just wanting to survive. Feels very in character. White Shadow is obsessed with food. Yeah, sure, I guess that's in character. I feel like he should have been fascinated with space a little more, though, considering his personality similarities to Skidmark, and the fact that he likes video games. Smooth freaks out when he realizes sound can't travel in space, and we basically get the idea that Smooth can calm down with music, but otherwise is quite unstable. Chet is apparently annoyed when other people freak out, and he wants to be the lone scaredy cat. Snail? A rather funny irony to have Chet be his own hero, being calming himself down in order to calm others down. It's creative, I like it. Also, him freaking out in space while the others are excited is very real. That would be me. Lastly, Skidmark is probably the most offensive character. He becomes completely brain dead, thinking the Russian snails are aliens from space. Sure, that could have worked to some extent, but surely he's not completely ignorant to the fact that he was at the launch site, hence explaining the spacesuits, and the fact that other nationalities exist. Common knowledge. But he's too obsessed with aliens to care. It's annoying, but admittedly it's a bit funny. Still annoying though. Let's see. I guess I can comment on the new characters. Well, mainly Tycho. He's a bit obnoxious, but I like his voice because I'm nostalgic. And because I think it fits his character well. His character's a bit weird. He's not really subtle in his insanity, but he seemingly flips like a switch from being perfectly normal to being insane. Weird characterization, but maybe it's realistic, I don't know. I've never met someone who's gone to space, believe it or not. Edwin the fish is kinda a funny bit, surprisingly underutilized. I expected the writers to pound the joke into the ground. Thankfully they didn't. Lastly, the human captain pretty much disappears for most of the episode, and that's a bit lame. But I guess animal shenanigans are more funny without the humans involved. Fair enough. That's all I can squeeze out of this episode. Interesting idea, pretty good execution, definitely needed to be double length. The pacing was good and the animation was mostly pleasant. Let's move on. Oh yay, so this is a pair of mini episodes that I actually really like, from memory anyway. Hopefully I won't be disappointed by the sad, cynical state of my older self. Crowpox starts with Byrne, Skidmark, and Turbo running into some crow roadkill. They agree to use it to prank Chet, as revenge for when Chet bested them all with his pranks from several previous episodes. The crow scares him so much that he freezes in fear, being diagnosed by a doctor as being so scared that he will need time to recover. They feel regretful and also itchy. The doctor then diagnoses them with the lethal crowpox disease, which is picked up from dead crows. To cure it, they must find a rare crow egg on the top of a very tall tree. The three go to find the egg and get into many troubles on the tree. When they make it to the top, they realize the rare crow, the egg, and crow pox are all fake, and Chet was behind it all. But apparently the rare crow is actually real, and I guess Chet dies. Oh well, he had a good run. This episode is quite entertaining, so I'm glad my memory didn't fail me. The callbacks to previous episodes were cute, though I was disappointed when one of the callbacks wasn't even a real callback. It was just made up for this episode. Either way, I'll take anything. I like that Chet was willing to go through a bunch of his fears just for the sake of freaking out the three snails. He's really dedicated himself fully to pranking now, and it feels pretty good to see Chet get back at them ever since that pranking episode, and all the other things they put him through. We love that character depth. Also, I like that the solution was a lot easier than the three thought, all because they neglected Chet. Another nice bite back from episode 4 of the season. It's just satisfying. I don't hate Chet for this, which means the writers did their jobs well. But then he gets killed, supposedly, and that kind of ruins it. The whole prank feels realistic, though I'm surprised Chet was so prepared for any prank the Fast Crew planned. Frankly, I wouldn't expect that level of planning, especially from some snail who seems to be so preoccupied with more important things. But it could still work. Maybe Chet anticipated a prank, improvised being scared, and while alone managed to orchestrate something with the puppeteer doctor. Though to be fair, this is a cartoon. You can't expect everything to work out logically. Insane improvisation, though. The pacing of this episode is nice, as it constantly feels like new things are happening with very little empty air. The humor is pretty good, besides the repetitious fart jokes that Burn is victim to. The animation is pretty good too, and the setting is unique. Last notes on the characters. Skidmark is getting smarter again. Burn and Turbo actually feel sad about Chet being unwell, which I've missed about these characters. I think that's all I've got. I don't know how on earth Chet survived past the end of this episode, and I'm a little disappointed the other characters didn't even bother seeing if he was in danger. But I guess we need flaws to balance every good episode. This gets a big thumbs up from me. Now, Faking Immense is about Burn searching on the internet and discovering one of her sisters is thinking of visiting Burn, which makes her very anxious. Burn explains to the Fast Crew that she's anxious because she always remembers her sister Ember would always taunt and tease her with some rather aggressive pranks. The other Fast Crew members abandon her, but Burn manages to keep Whiplash, White Shadow, and Chet around to help. Ember arrives, seemingly a changed snail who is full of forgiveness and zen energy. She insists that Burn apologize to her about their past, which Burn is very confused about. Ember and the other snails go to a forgiveness festival, where Burn and Ember separate from the others to go on their own journey. Burn and Ember struggle as Chet encourages them, while White Shadow and Whiplash slowly learn to move past their own problems. The latter two forgive each other, while the former two finally realize who was actually in the wrong after Ember snaps. It turns out that Burn was the one who tormented herself, and tormented Ember too. Burn admits fault, and the two forgive each other. Quite a fascinating episode, I think. This episode lays down subtle hints, though you could probably predict the twist if you guess enough, that Burn is actually the evil sister, which makes the ending make more sense in hindsight. I think my only issue is at the beginning, when Ember says she's completely changed as if she was angry in childhood. But given the footage we see, it seems like Burn was relatively calm in childhood. Otherwise, it could imply she never learned how to forgive Burn, which makes more sense as to why she decided to visit Burn to seek an apology. Unfortunately, that's not made too clear in this episode, and is only based on speculation. Plus, if she completely changed, she would be able to forgive Burn. Clearly, deep down, she still can't. It's weird. Maybe I'm looking into it too deep. Burn being the mean one is totally expected, and I love how this entire episode was foreshadowed in the last season. Burn really gaslight herself into thinking she was nice, eventually forgetting she was mean at all just so she can feel self-righteous. It feels very right for her character. And although it's very malicious on her part, she ends up apologizing to Ember, so it all works out in the end. And she seems to feel genuinely bad about it, not just saying sorry to get Ember off her back. It shows despite her being a mean pest now, she learned tormenting those in her own circle is wrong. It's some nice character development, even if it was introduced in this very episode. The subplot with Whiplash and White Shadow is very cute. White Shadow expresses that he feels insulted by Whiplash, and he wants to get an apology. Eventually, after a lot of therapy, Whiplash breaks down and admits he's envious of White Shadow's childlike approach on life, and acts annoyed because of his envy. Depth galore. And White Shadow is ignorant in a childlike way the whole time, giving the audience a clear impression as to what Whiplash is referring to. It's wonderful and it's adorable. I want to see more of their dynamic, especially since we're seeing a softer side of Whiplash slowly opening up. Also, I like the callback to his anxiety around eye contact, as shown 2 episodes ago. He was nervous to look in the baby's eyes, only to break upon realizing how precious she was. Now Whiplash breaks as he realizes how much he envies White Shadow and his for the sake of the metaphor, baby-like attitude on life. It's so clever. When the writers want to be good, they can really be good. It's disappointing they often seemingly don't want to be this good. Besides the characters, this episode is pretty dang funny. There were a lot of good bits that cracked me up, and thankfully there was no gross-out humor in this episode. The pacing is very good. I feel like we got a good balance of everything here. The aesthetic of this episode is a bit lame, but it's not ugly or anything. It's just plain. The animation is okay, not spectacular nor terrible. Lastly, the world building here is pretty neat. There's a group of therapeutic bugs who encourage peace. It's cool that it's just a little camp, compared to the more urban disorder among animals. It's like real life, only with bugs. Wow. This episode gets a second big thumbs up for me, so now both of my hands are up. Very convenient. Let's move on to some probably less good episodes. Deuce's Wild starts with Deuce celebrating his birthday all by himself, as his parents have left to watch a race. Deuce finds out that Turbo is preoccupied with Ticula and Edvard. Out of frustration from being alone, Deuce freaks out, but is discovered by Edvard, who encourages Deuce to become emo. The peer pressure leads Deuce to play pranks on all of Starlight City. Turbo and Ticula discover Deuce and Edvard are up to no good, so they get Whiplash to knock them straight. After being made fun of enough, Whiplash breaks down and joins their team. Now the three of them cause more chaos. Whiplash has an idea so disturbing that it freaks out Edvard and Deuce, revealing that Whiplash had actually been faking his turn to the dark side to try and pull Deuce out of the act. And so they end the episode all on good terms. Another pretty interesting episode. I suppose the moral here is meant to be not to cause too much chaos and trouble to those around you, similar to Pranked, but then again, it could also be that you shouldn't fold to peer pressure. It could be both. Regardless, the message is portrayed a bit weird. Firstly, the harmless pranks are presented as bad, and obviously Whiplash's suggestion to cause actual harm is presented as bad too. But if the intention is to indicate it's okay to go somewhere in the middle, being not to be a stickler but also not to cause harm to others, then it's a bit weird to present the harmless pranks as bad. They cause inconveniences, which reasonably would have them labeled as bad, but it's a little backhanded to go and say that kind of stuff is okay after all. I guess the point was just to set limits for Edvard and Deuce, but it's not like their pranks ever got harmful either way. They're clearly very disturbed by Whiplash's prank idea. Yeah, this is the part where I start getting confused and just conclude, I don't know. Secondly, I think the latter message is presented a bit better, with Whiplash seemingly falling victim to the duo just as Deuce had to Edvard, though I am a bit confused on why Deuce suddenly changed his mind. Edvard and he had never done the kinds of pranks Whiplash suggested, but when Whiplash does suggest it, then Deuce realizes he's not happy with what he's doing. But he didn't do any harmful pranks. He clearly enjoyed the harmless pranks, and although they caused issues for others, he and Edvard were seemingly never at the point where they wanted to start delving into harmful pranks. Not even close. But Deuce gives up altogether because he doesn't want to go that way, I guess. I don't really know. Is this episode well written? I wish it was easier to tell sometimes. Without getting myself into more knots, I'll talk about the characters. It's funny to see Deuce be miserable because I'm a sadist. Not really. Thankfully, he's not as annoying in this episode. Well, considering most of the annoying things he does is because of Edvard anyway. At least he has empathy, I guess. Edvard is about the same as before. He's a moody teenager who causes issues just to irritate others. Not much to say. Turbo continues to be a role model until he hands the job over to Whiplash. Frankly, I anticipated Turbo taking the role hook, line, and sinker, but I suppose Whiplash's plan started from before he even started bossing the two around. If so, then that makes more sense. And Turbo being a troublemaker instead of Whiplash would probably be too unbelievable to Deuce. If not, then it doesn't make much sense. Weird that Turbo even passed it on to Whiplash, likely before knowing the plan at all. Dang, I'm getting myself into more knots. I should stop while I can. To Fire Esquire starts with the Fast Crew finishing a large domino line, which is rudely interrupted by Buster, Smooth's brother. Apparently his toy store is being fumigated, so he has to move in with the Fast Crew. While filming the dominoes falling, Buster blocks the camera the entire time, which makes the Fast Crew livid. Turbo and Smooth assign Buster to guard a rotten tomato, which leads to him getting saved by Turbo when he nearly gets run over. Buster insists he is now Turbo's indentured servant, which eventually starts to irritate Turbo. Smooth explains the solution is to make Buster think he saved Turbo's life so that they can be even. Turbo and Smooth fake Turbo's peril, but after Buster saves him, then a real snake appears and attacks Turbo. Buster saves him again and now insists Turbo is his servant. I guess Turbo is his servant forever now. This episode is pretty simple, and so I don't have much to say about it. There's not really any moral here, it's just to follow the rules of those who work in weird ways, I guess. That's a lot of W's. This isn't nearly as good as Buster's first episode, as it has no lesson about accepting Buster despite his differences to the rest of the crew. Now Smooth just has more tolerance as the others never learn to cope with him, besides Turbo, I guess. I think all of the characters are portrayed well in this episode. I find it interesting that Chet is willing to participate in the stupid domino trick and the other world records shenanigans, especially considering he acknowledges that they will cause a mess and likely waste time. It's not unbelievable for his character, but it is a weensy bit weird. Either way, we don't see the other characters for most of the episode, so there's nothing really to say about them in the way of consistency or development or anything. The humor in this episode is pretty lackluster, but the pacing is pretty good. Things move at a comprehensible speed and all that. I really just don't have much to say. I guess let's move on then. Magatron begins with the establishment of a maggot adoption center. One of the maggots gets hurt, and because of Skidmark's neglect on the project, he's assigned to help the maggot heal. Skidmark is too distracted by a mythical being, so he just gives the maggot a big mech suit to walk around in. The maggot's mech suit has evil programming, so now the maggot is loose, destroying Starlight City. The fast crew become enslaved, and Chet becomes very dedicated to serving the maggot, despite his distress in doing so. The rest of the fast crew determine a way to stop the maggot's mech suit, and eventually find a way to get Skidmark to shut down the suit. It works, but the maggot gets hurt again, and now Skidmark has to actually help it this time. The end. Meh. Not a very good episode in all honesty. The action was pretty good, but it felt like there was a bit of dead air here and there. The pacing also felt a little off. The setup was very quick and the rest felt rather slow. I got a bit bored. The animation is pretty good and the aesthetic was pretty cool looking. As for the characters, I can't say much. Chet is a coward who forces himself to work for Magatron. Skidmark is an obnoxious, conspiracy-obsessed idiot, and the rest of the fast crew just work along with Skid's plan with very few objections. Everyone feels a bit stupid today, and as you should know by now, I never like when that happens. Besides all that, I have nothing to add, so let's move on. Love Hurts starts with Chet and Burn on a date, which Turbo is third wheeling. Turbo admits he feels lonely. Turbo finds a mantis princess who is in peril, and he saves her, which starts the two's new blooming relationship. A male mantis appears who wants to win over the princess mantis, named Thora. Thora wants to marry Turbo, and the rest of the fast crew, Whiplash, Burn, and Chet, realize that Thora is planning on decapitating Turbo during the wedding, as mantises do. Turbo finally realizes, and ends up objecting to the wedding. The two agree to be friends, while the male mantis breaks in and ends up freely taking up the wedding for himself, and then he gets his head eaten. Off-screen, fortunately. I don't have much to say about this episode either. The lesson is probably meant to be similar to Disney's Frozen, where you shouldn't jump to marry someone without learning more about them. In this case, it's learning about their culture. Certainly an exaggerated example, and one that might be hard to relate to. But the general moral is still pretty valuable. And it's nice that the two ended up being friends upon realizing they weren't right for each other. Yes, it's still possible to have a friend after a breakup. It's portrayed well, and it certainly will scare kids straight. So it does its job. Turbo is as gullible as ever, and the others are there to try and help before realizing he has to figure it out himself. All pretty in character. Thora is a pretty lame character so far, but she seems to basically be a princess who seeks adventure. Her life seemingly isn't all that strict, but it can be implied that she's been kept away from the outside, and hence has very little experience on how to defend herself, hence why Turbo needs to save her. So it all makes sense, it's just a bit tropey. Not an awful thing, I guess. Lastly, I found the spider's delivery to be a little awkward. Unlike the spiders in the Deuce introduction episode, these spiders have different voices, and they're way more obnoxious and weird. No offense to the voice actor, you just didn't play your role all that well. It's a nitpick though. Let's move on to something more interesting. Ransom of White Shadow starts with Skidmark creating a tomato-peach hybrid that White Shadow volunteers to try. The fruit gives White Shadow hair that helps him resemble a famous snail actor named Aiden Hardshell, with the exact same build and color scheme as White Shadow. He goes around pretending to be Hardshell, getting all kinds of benefits along the way. Eventually he visits Hollywood, and Flipping Clip and Clap run into him. They decide to try and kidnap White Shadow, thinking he is a celebrity, and hold him for ransom to get money. The whole time White Shadow just thinks it's the spa treatment, irritating the crabs the whole time. The ransom ends up helping Turbo, Skidmark, and Whiplash find White Shadow and free him, and then his hair falls out and he gives up on celebrity life for good. About as good as any Clip and Clap episode has been. The same tired old gimmick of Clip and Clap being cartoonishly incompetent as they beat each other up constantly is effectively worn out by this point. They're not funny, they're not threatening, they're not even generally entertaining. What more is there to get out of them? Nothing, that's what. Besides hating on the crabs, the other characters here are pretty consistent. White Shadow is a helpless buffoon with a non-functioning brain, though admittedly, I appreciate the consistency with White Shadow being willing to ditch his friends when he's offered a greater lifestyle, only to quickly return when the universe forces him to. Unlike Smooth, it doesn't make me hate White Shadow. He's still willing to listen to his friends, He just prefers the positive attention he doesn't get from his friends. So he's not hateable for that. As for the other three, Skidmark is a bit stupid, but he's not as bad as in some other episodes. Whiplash is also a bit dumb, and seemingly as gullible as both Turbo and Skidmark, probably the worst case of consistency in the episode. Speaking of, Turbo is gullible as usual. Not much else to be said. The animation is a bit lame, honestly. It's not bad, it just has some notable consistency issues. The main example I noticed is that clip and clap often look off model. Also, the animation is a bit stiff and doesn't have any special aesthetics or anything, so kinda boring to look at. But again, not awful. Besides that, I have nothing to add. It's a very mid-episode. Kicked Off begins with Tito introducing a foosball table that he managed to get for a cheap price because one of the players is missing. The Fast Crew are invited to play on the table with Tito. Meanwhile, Skidmark is deeply disturbed by the missing player. While Tito is busy, the Fast Crew are approached by a group of British crickets who want to play with them to win the table. But then a bunch of other groups of bugs appear who also want to compete for the table. And so it just becomes a classic game of football between all the groups. Meanwhile, Skidmark is trying to find a replacement player. As the final pair, the Fast Crew and the crickets, are playing, Skidmark miraculously saves the match by using his diver girlfriend as the missing player. But unfortunately, Tito has to get rid of the table due to the health hazard all the bugs caused. Nothing really happened in the way of development or anything in this episode. We learn that Skidmark also seemingly has OCD, or something resembling it. Also, apparently Chet really likes organizing sport events, and the Fast Crew really likes sports. I guess that could have been assumed from the Dung Ball Derby episode. So yeah, not much. The callback to Skidmark's girlfriend was unexpected on first watch, but pretty funny. The animation is surprisingly pretty mid in this episode too. You'd think a sports episode, all about action, would have more intense animation. Nope, not this episode. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just passable. Pretty expected at this point. The humor was okay in this episode. Surprisingly, actually not that surprising. The show makes fun of British people a bit. I don't know if it was my half Brit side or my half American side, but I found the jabs kinda funny. Probably my American side. That's all I have to comment on. The Day Mel Fell is a secondary character-focused episode for a change. During a race, Mel Shellman, the announcer, complains very openly about how awful his boss is, and it gets him fired. He's completely miserable, and has to move in with his brother, who happens to be the puppeteer doctor from the Crow Box episode. He gets kicked out and moves in with his girlfriend, and has to take care of Deuce, who is sick. After Deuce sets her home on fire, he's kicked out again. He tries other jobs, but keeps failing. And we meet Carney the koala mascot. That's my nickname, and that's the only reason I pointed him out. After many failures, Mel becomes utterly depressed, and Turbo decides to try and help him get back on his tail. Finally, the Fast Crew become annoyed by Mel and try to help him get his old job back. He succeeds because it turns out he was his own boss. He had fired himself, and now he's Barack. Honestly, I'm confused on what the point of this episode was. We learn more about Mel Shellman, who has consistently appeared in episodes. But honestly, who was curious about him? I sure wasn't, personally. Not to say I disliked this episode. I just find a lot of things confusing about it. Also, why did he fire himself in the first place? As in, why did he talk bad about himself in the beginning? The twist makes sense, I guess, but not the reason as to why this episode even happened at all. Mel is very strange. I don't know what to make of this episode. What's the moral? To try again after you fail? It was his fault he got fired for being a loudmouth. And with his boss being himself, it's not like that mattered. Is it that you should have higher self-esteem? That's very unclear until the end. And Mel failed countless times in the episode as he tried to provide himself dignity. Very weird. As for the characters, they're pretty consistent as usual. Turbo has his limits and just wants to help as best he can. Skidmark is hypocritical, claiming Mel to be strange when he did a personality experiment many episodes ago. I guess that's the joke, but it's not all that funny. White Shadow likes food, Whiplash gets annoyed by Mel's antics, and I don't think Smooth, Chet, or Burn are in this episode much, if at all. Mel is a somewhat interesting character, but frankly there wasn't enough development for me to see him in a different light from now on, or anything. Now he's insane along with being somewhat dumb and annoying. Cool. No comments on the animation or humor, so let's proceed. Burn's ex-boo is about Chet preparing to become online official with Burn, which is like a proposal, I guess. Right as he tries to propose, a snail named Torker, who brings back the iconic introduction stats screen, bursts into the Fast Crew's home, introducing himself as Burn's old boyfriend. Chet is distraught and tries to fight his jealousy by winning back Burn's attention. Chet spies on Torker and finds out he is supposedly planning a big stunt to propose to Burn. Chet consults Skidmark to try and sabotage Torker's stunt, and afterwards it's revealed Torker actually has another girlfriend who isn't Burn. Chet feels instant regret and tries to go to save Torker before his stunt. He succeeds and puts himself himself in immense danger to do so. Chet confesses he wants to be online official with Byrne, and she accepts, admitting she was impatient about it. And she has no comments regarding what Chet was planning to do to Torker, apparently. This episode feels a bit open-ended, but not in a good way. It feels like something was missing at the end. What happens to Torker, and what does Byrne now think of Chet given what he was planning to do? Though admittedly this episode had a pretty good progression to it otherwise. Clearly establishes Chet's motives, he fulfills his motivations, and then he goes back on it after learning something new. Classic show story progression. And I had completely forgotten what the twist was, so it was an actual surprise, and one that made sense. Also, Chet goes out of his way to save Torker, which puts him in a lot of pain, but meanwhile he's receiving consequences for his actions. He risked himself to save someone he didn't even know all that well, likely just for the sake of maintaining his reputation with Byrne. Well, my main issue comes with the lack of closure on that part. He admits he wanted to kill Torker, but Byrne has no reaction to it. I feel like she should have had some reaction, even if it was positive, but she just completely ignores that part. I guess it's implied she doesn't care, but I don't know. That in and of itself doesn't sit right with me. She should care a little, right? Anyway, some nice development for Chet's character, and some more lore building around Byrne. The writers really like giving Byrne a backstory for some reason. Can't complain, I enjoy these episodes. Byrne miraculously managed to break up with someone without hating him forever. Unexpected from Byrne, and unfortunately unexplored in this episode. Something else that feels unexplored is that Turbo once got upset when Turbo suggested Chet had a girlfriend before Byrne, but Byrne had a boyfriend before Chet. Seems hypocritical. And it's not acknowledged by this episode. Frankly, I don't see this as much of a consistency issue as much as it is character building. She's very selfish, as shown in other episodes, and so she probably sees the possibility of her getting any less attention, from Chet specifically, to be a bad thing. But of course, if it means Byrne gets attention from an ex-boyfriend of hers, she'll happily take it with no issues. See, it can still make sense. Anyway, a very character-heavy episode. The animation is slightly improved over the last, and the aesthetics are lacking once again. The humor is okay, the new characters aren't all that interesting, they're mostly just plot devices, but Torker is pretty entertaining at times, and seems to have some relatively simple layers to his character, but we probably won't see him again anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Speaking of, let's continue. Tough as Snails is about Whiplash running out of his favorite lavender lotion. Smooth directs him to his lotion guy, who explains there's a similar brand that he can get for Whiplash if he participates in a commercial out of country. By coincidence, the Fast Crew and the rest of Starlight City have watched the commercial Whiplash participated in, which gets him made fun of by all the city's children. Feeling he's lost all of his respect, he participates in a competition to fight a champion crab, Brick Ironclaw, to make himself look tough again. He keeps getting beat up throughout most of the fight, and after he coats himself with lotion to embrace his softer side, he manages to get the upper hand. While Ironclaw is down, Whiplash discovers Ironclaw literally has a soft interior, which he uses to his advantage, and alas, he wins. But then he gets offered to do another commercial which now represents both his softer side and harsher side, and all is well. The grand culmination of Whiplash's softening arc has come, and it's pretty good. Not great, though. I interpret the moral here being that, as the very last line of this episode states, everyone's got a sensitive side. And for that reason, you should still be granted respect while being able to embrace who you are on the inside. And likewise, being able to take that weakness to grant yourself the upper hand, assuming the situation calls for it anyway. Simple, mostly broad, and useful. Maybe not the last part as much, though it's undeniably true that a lot of us who have a hard exterior are all trying to hide back a softer side. That can be sensitivity or trauma, or even a whole other nature entirely. Either way, everyone is hiding something, and everyone can find a way to allow them to coexist. Or if the hard exterior is risky to keep around, just evade it altogether. Whiplash is implied to have his respect back despite having gone through an embarrassing event, all thanks to his willingness to embrace his softer side, alongside his tougher side. And of course, Ironclaw completely dies thanks to having a literal soft interior, all because his hard exterior was too risky to get through on its own. The writers feel the need to point out that this is a potential metaphor because, yes, it is rather obvious when you turn the non-literal message into a literal event. But I'm a writer, and these things will never slip past me. Never. Besides all that, I like the role Turbo plays in this episode. He's almost playing as Whiplash's mentor in this episode, as opposed to the norm where their roles are swapped. It's almost like a subtle way to show Turbo's development, as he's grown less ignorant and more strategic, thanks to Whiplash, although it wasn't highlighted much in the other episodes, while also using his own skills to help Whiplash push through the fight, and without just jumping in and cheating the fight to help Whiplash not die. Very nice, but I wish it had been explored a little more before now. Now for my non-character comments. The animation is another step up from the last episode. It feels a bit less stiff and has more of an aesthetic to it, which is good considering it's yet another fighting episode. It's almost like the animators know when an episode episode script is good, so they go harder on the animation. Very nice. Humor is okay, pacing is good, all that. Not much to say outside of characters this time around. Conspiracy. I don't really want to watch this episode because I remember it being really boring, but I'll push through it for the sake of this video. Alright. Conspiracy starts with the Fast Crew suddenly being sucked out of their home, and Skidmark comes back to figure out what has happened. He discovers Secret may be involved, so he decides to consult his pals from a conspiracy club. They're all supposedly mysterious creatures, and Smooth's gum guy will have the common goal to stop Secret from taking over the world. Most of the episode is waffling about conspiracies around Secret. They finally agree to help Skidmark save the Fast Crew after literal minutes of empty air, as Skidmark angrily explains to them that they can work together as a team using a metaphor. Before they go out though, the Fast Crew returns safe and sound after having done an off-screen escape from Secret. It's implied the conspiracy club will return in the future. I really hope they don't. Boring episode. It feels like it was meant to be more of a complete episode, but they realized they had to fill 11 minutes, so they filled half of the episode with empty air. Like, literally, the club waffles on about who they think Secret is for minutes, all the while Skidmark is complaining about them not going out to save his friends. The stakes in this episode are killed very quickly, and they never return. The club is full of a bunch of boring characters. The jackalope is paranoid about people discovering he's a jackalope, and when he finally turns around, it feels very underwhelming. The tinfoil ball guy has a funny voice, but that's all I can really remember about him. The gum guy is well prepared but easily distracted. He's probably the least annoying of the group. Lastly, the mystery bug on the phone is mysterious, and his bit is that he constantly gets distracted by other things. So they just did the gum guy thing twice, except the phone bug bugs me a lot more. Skidmark all the while complains about how he's the most level-headed of the group, and he finally loses his temper when none of his fellow conspirators are willing to help him. I don't know what on earth he expected, considering he clearly knew about them in the past. He could have just done it on his own and not killed the entire point of this episode with the Fast Crew returning on their own. Boring, boring, boring. Come on. It was so easy to make this episode good. I just wanted to be funny but completely forgot to be entertaining. And I guess on that note, there were some funny visuals here and there that made me laugh, but like only a few times. I had to entertain myself while listening in the background otherwise. Though the animation wasn't too bad, and the aesthetic is at least present. Just a very lame episode writing-wise. I don't recommend it if you want to watch the show for yourself. What's this? We're at the end of the season already? Huh, that felt pretty quick. Probably because this season is shorter. Anyway, let's see how climactic this finale will be. Groundhog's Day starts with Chet assigning the Fast Crew to do spring cleaning. Skidmark and White Shadow, of course, are pulled to do the cleaning. They're utterly miserable, and after a moment of careless cleaning, they think of a way to delay spring permanently so that they can never clean. They go to the groundhog Paul, who is planning to come out and see whose dreams he can ruin with his prediction. They try a number of ways to stop Paul, and finally capture him, only for him to break down and quit on his own accord. And therefore winter is forever. Until the next episode, that is. Another episode that I don't have much to say about. Skidmark breaks the fourth wall again. The two are complete psychos, and Chet is tone deaf. That's all there is of note to say here. Paul the Groundhog has an open and close arc where he likes causing misery for those who anticipate one season by instead enabling the opposite. He does the same to Skidmark and White Shadow, but when he gets a taste of his own misery, he realizes he doesn't want to work in the position anymore. Though he's still so insistent on making Skidmark and White Shadow miserable that he won't bend backwards and say, "Sure, you can have winter." He just quits. But that works. And supposedly another groundhog takes his place the following year, considering everything is miraculously fine now. Fine, entertaining, but pretty lame in the grand scheme of things. I guess to waffle a bit more, I've noticed there have been pretty much 0 Slug episodes since the beginning. They packed all of the Slug episodes there and then forgot about them forever. Very strange. I guess after episode 3 everyone got past their issues and now slugs are not really an issue. Miraculous. Instead we're seeing a whole bunch of other animals. Not a bad thing really, it just feels like an odd episode placement. Waffling over, we can continue now. Gone Guys Gone starts with Smooth meeting up with all of his guys. As he consults Skidmark, his speaker guy, he learns about a guy convention. All of his guys are leaving for a week, leaving Smooth on his own. As Turbo and Smooth eat Turbo-branded cereal, nice callback, Turbo learns that Smooth is very ignorant on how to live normally. Smooth insists he's fine on his own, but he's very helpless without his guys. Turbo tries to encourage him, along with the help of the rest of the Fast Crew. He graduates his smartening test and insists he's no longer dependent on his guys. But when the guys return and insist on serving Smooth for eternity, he becomes immediately dependent on them again. In this episode we learn Smooth is a complete, retard. That's right, I'm not censoring myself. That's how idiotic he is. I thought White Shadow was bad, but this is a new level. He doesn't know how to read, apparently. He doesn't know how to go shopping. He doesn't know how to make a bed. He doesn't know how to recycle or distinguish colors for that matter. He doesn't know how to order food or how to pick it up. Jeez, it's a wonder we've hardly seen any of Smooth's guys before this episode. The show likes to do disfavors to Smooth, and hence he's probably my least favorite in the group. This episode probably could have worked if it had any kind of consistency in previous episodes, or if it at least offered Smooth some kind of intelligence. He has read before. Just look at episode 12 of season 1. It can be assumed he has made his bed before, considering, again, we never see any of his guys, besides 2, in the series until now. He can definitely order food if he can make orders with his guys. He can definitely pick it up if he and the rest of the fast crew have used maps to get to a set location before. Why would you devolve yet another character to make them completely brain dead? I don't get it. It's not funny. It's not worthwhile development. Why? Besides all that, this episode has some good animation and good pacing. His entertaining and Smooth's learning arc was done well. If we put this episode in a vacuum, I think it would actually be pretty good. But as is, it's not very great. At least the other characters are friendly to Smooth and are relatively consistent. It's okay, just the destruction of Smooth's character is deterring me a lot. Lame finale, unfortunately. Probably not a good omen for the next season. Okay, now that we're done with that, let's review the season as a whole. A lot more mixed on this season. It had some very, very good episodes, but it also had some real stinkers too. I enjoyed learning more about the individual characters, as the season was happy to explore, but that was a bit of a double-edged sword. For one, it made me more attached to the characters, but for another, it often made episodes boring, unpleasant, or not worthwhile. I came out of this season feeling like it was an okay time. I certainly found it entertaining. I just thought it could have been a lot better had it been handled more competently. There were some rather easy fixes too, and like with the last season, there were some issues with morals. I was confused with a few of them, but others were quite clear. The show is quite confused on whether it wants to be a cynical and ironic take on kids' shows, or it actually wants to be an educational kids show, unironically. And frankly, I enjoy the episodes more when it's the latter. You can be more cynical and still teach a moral, like, to refer to a previous example, the relationship between Monsters University and Ratatouille. You can be whatever you want to be, but if that fails, and sometimes it just might because of who you are, you can still make do in other ways. The show doesn't know how to balance itself in that way, and it ends up being confusing. Besides the writing, the animation has been a lot more consistent compared to season 1. However, it is generally lamer in comparison. It's clear this show was headed towards the gutter, and it just wanted to make a couple of comebacks before it did. The aesthetics were about the same quality as season 1, but were less frequent, which was lame. The world building didn't develop much, but we did learn about a number of other animals. Slugs are the opposite race of snails, and they hate each other. Other insects or mollusks generally live peacefully among snails, but can be competitive if it's in their nature. Other animals are seemingly not interested in being predatory towards snails, with some exceptions. There's not as much social divide as I expected. It's just kind of like a bunch of humans who all look vastly different. Perhaps it is meant to be metaphorical in that way, but you had the slugs to do that. These are other animals. Use that to your advantage. Anyway, I think I've said my piece. I think this season will, unfortunately, have to go below the first season, but it's a very close second. They're both good. This one is just slightly worse. Hopefully the third and final season can match those kind of standards. I honestly don't remember. Let's find out together, huh? To start the season, Party Poopers starts with the fast crew all exhausted from excessive racing, as irresponsibly planned by Chet. The crew demand a vacation, and Chet has to improvise a stay at a vacation home. The rental agent just so happens to be Ace Gecko, who swindles him out of double the price for a vacation home in a toilet. They find out there's a group of toilet frogs partying right next to their home, and they approach them to try to get them to quiet down. After a number of misunderstandings and frustrations, they decide just to join the party and end up having a lot more fun. But then White Shadow accidentally flushes the party house down, and so the toilet frogs move out, and now the fast crew are bored again. This does not feel like the start of a new season. This just feels like another mid-season episode. Guess the writers were really getting sick of this property now. Either way, this episode is actually not all that bad. Writing-wise anyway. The moral here, rather clearly, is not to start rivalries with those who bother you, but to rather see if you could end up having more fun alongside them. As someone who is exceptionally socially inept, this is not a very personal message for me, because I would rather soak in loathing than interact with other human beings, but I'm pretty sure it's applicable to normal people. It's certainly a lot healthier to go out and hang out with others, especially if they're causing you issues, because you could form unexpected bonds with them. Certainly valuable, but a bit of an odd message considering what season 1 of this show has been so heavily pushing regarding forgiveness for villains, or lack thereof, that is. It worked for Hard Case, but that was for only one episode, and for no other villain. Frankly, I'm surprised they haven't done it fully with Hard Case yet. It seems so easy to make him and Turbo friends. maybe in the finale or something. Anyway, as for characters, they're pretty consistent. White Shadow and Skidmark inadvertently cause issues. Whiplash is the level-headed one. Chet coordinates everything and likes saving his skin by planning things out at the last moment. Turbo thinks of the ultimate solution of friendship at the end. Smooth and Burn hardly have personalities beyond chillaxing and violence respectively. The only issue I have is Chet going out of his way to overwhelm the fast crew at the beginning, which feels like something he would have gone out of his way to adamantly avoid. He's consistent otherwise. Final notes. The animation is a rather noticeable drop in quality compared to the premieres in the previous 2 seasons. The backgrounds are still very well drawn, but the animation seems to be continuing its downward slope. The humor is pretty much missing from this episode. I think that's it. I guess we can move on then. The League is about Turbo suggesting the fast crew start using an online racing game to win while not actually racing. All but Whiplash are in on the idea, as the crew lose real races in order to win their fantasy races. It causes the fast crew to start to turn against each other as they become obsessed with winning the fantasy races. The final tiebreaker is between a bunch of slow racers who all frustrate the fast crew to the point of them taking over the race. They remember how much they prefer real racing and end up quitting the online racing game for good, to the joy of Whiplash, and apparently Whiplash mysteriously appeared in the game and ends up winning for himself due to him doing all the races himself. Sure, I guess that's how the game works. Another pretty good moral in this episode. This one is a classic technology bad message, where getting glued to your screen and not participating in reality is detrimental to your enjoyment of life. A fascinating moral, one that thankfully actually communicates an important flaw of technology. As the younger generations, the ones most likely watching the show, get more and more adjusted to living with their computers or their TVs or their phones, they get used to participating in fantasy events, like reality shows and social media, and more often than not, you end up in a position where you feel involved with the lives of others, or even in your own fantastical life that you forget about the world around you and the people around you, and you end up accomplishing very little. It's certainly an ominous prospect, and I'm not going to act like I'm higher than thou because I'm literally reading out a script for a YouTube video right now. It's just something we should all keep in mind. We can't just neglect reality entirely. So good job, TurboFast. You did good with this episode. Though I must immediately backhand that with my comments about the animation. It's looking real bad now. Like the lower standards of animation for season 1 levels are bad. It's quite disappointing. Something I really appreciated from the show back when I first started watching it, about 6-ish years ago, was how unique the animation and art style were. Now the animation is underwhelming, and the art style seems to have very noticeable consistency issues. Just look at Hardcase in the scene. He looks uncannily off-model. Like, come on guys, go out with a bang, not a whimper. I'm making a video about how underrated you are. Anyway, maybe it'll improve. I doubt it at this point. If the premiere of the season looks bad, the rest of the season can't be much better. Oh lord, 2 long titles. Alright, TurboFast, the How to Train Your Titmouse is a very blatant parody of How to Train Your Dragon. It starts with Starlight City being invaded by a bunch of birds. I guess the owl statue doesn't work anymore suddenly. And while the fast crew try to capture them, Skidmark gets captured by a bird. Turbo uses Skidmark's contraption to shoot down the bird in a manner extremely similar to how Hiccup captures Toothless. Turbo goes to find the bird in a tomato farm, while the rest of the fast crew go to war with the birds. Turbo feels bad for the bird who is injured, and tries to hide him from the fast crew. He uses some supplies to tame the bird and fix his wing and tail, and he calls the bird Beakless. All the while, Beakless keeps trying to eat Turbo. Whiplash finally discovers Turbo with Beakless and threatens to use a cat to kill Beakless. Turbo flies with Beakless to escape, and when they get shot down, Beakless protects Turbo from the fall. The fast crew realize Beakless might be okay after all, until he attacks them all and the episode ends. So, just watch How to Train Your Dragon. You'll basically get the exact same experience as this episode. They basically copied the movie's plot beat for beat, and frankly, it's impressive how much they got away with. I guess it's meant to be the cynical version of the movie, though. You can't always tame a wild beast because sometimes they're too dumb and will just try to eat you. Even though other animals have been sentient in this world, I guess birds have consistently never counted. Frankly, the whole hierarchy of animals understanding each other is very confusing. Either way, Beakless attacks Turbo the entire time, and despite trying to push out the same message as the movie, this episode ends up trying to communicate to you, without words, that Beakless should not be trusted by the snails. Surprisingly, it keeps the characters relatively consistent to do so. I'm honestly impressed. So although I hate that they just ripped off the plot in the movie, with the only changes being the species and the cynical edge, this episode is honestly not terrible. It's just a bit boring at times. like the movie. But if I say that, I'll get slaughtered, so maybe I shouldn't. Usual comments, and that's all I really have to say about this episode. The Good, the Bad, and the Bugly is about Chet feeling once again like he lacks respect. Chet approaches the sheriff of Starlight City and asks that he get his help regarding the mild rule breakers in the city. Chet is very unhappy by the inaction of the sheriff and wants to engage in a political battle against him so that he can become the new sheriff. Chet wins and doubles down hard on the city. Suddenly a gang of rowdy potato bugs come to duel Sheriff Chet for control of the city. By hiding in his shell, Chet manages to accidentally defeat the potato bugs and gains respect from all the city folk, until he cowardly runs out of the position, and that's the end. What on earth were these 2 episodes? The show is getting really weird now. They just want to parody movies all of a sudden. I guess that's fine, but like, why? It's not like these are relevant to the show at all. The setting literally changes for this episode into a typical western town, and they introduce a sheriff that has never been seen previously. Do I consider these episodes non-canon? I guess I will. It helps me keep my sanity for a bit longer. Regardless, I must review this episode. The moral, don't try to force yourself into a position you're not fit for, I guess. But there's nothing more to that. It's just to give up on trying to help the city if you aren't worthy to be a leader. Not like try to help those who are actually capable leaders, or try to get the help from experienced leaders to gain power yourself, or like use the help of your friends to get into a position to help the greater populace. The moral is very strange, and frankly a bit harmful. We should definitely encourage people to spark change if they feel a society is in need of it. If you don't have leadership qualities, don't just give up forever. Find other ways to make it work. Unless you're a conservative, in which you'll just want everything to stay the exact same and stop those from making progress. Anyway, enough about politics. What about character development? Well, the only main character in this episode is Chet, so I guess we'll only talk about Chet. This feels like a retread of a previous episode, the one with the expired tomato can, and the Dr. Disorder episode too. Chet seeks respect from the other snails as he enforces strict rules, but the other snails refuse to grant him that respect, as they see him as just a weakling unwilling to double down on his assertiveness. In No Can Do, Chet hypnotizes the city and eventually learns to accept that silent respect is better than verbal respect. In the Dr. Disorder episode, he learns to loosen up a bit on the rules. So here we are, with this episode that is at odds with both of those development arcs for Chet. Chet is obsessing over the rules again and seeks verbal respect from the city's residents. And in the end, do we get any kind of repeated development from Chet? Nope. He doesn't learn like he did in the previous 2 episodes. He just doubles down, gets scared, quits, and that's it. He learned nothing, besides that being a sheriff is too dangerous for his liking, despite him seemingly being on an arc to face his cowardice and stand up for himself. Wow, this episode really hates Chet. Anyway, the animation is mid, but the aesthetics are pretty. The new characters are nothing special, and the weirdness just keeps ramping up. Hopefully things will pick up. Shell on Wheels starts with a Back to the Future reference as Skidmark introduces his new clock tower. Shellsworth appears with an expensive watch and uses it as the newer clock tower. Skidmark is pissed, and as Shellsworth boasts about his new project, being to build a railroad, Skidmark decides to try and compete against him. So we're referencing popular media again. The two engage in a race to build a railroad track, seeing who can finish faster to prove who is better or something. Skidmark uses his elbow grease while Shellsworth throws money at the project, clearly proving that Shellsworth is managing quality and speed at the same time. Meanwhile, Skidmark is waffling about with his DIY railroad track. He manages to catch up to Shellsworth and win the race just as he's running out of steam, and of course, the track is absolute junk. He gives up on his rivalry and accepts that Shellsworth was the real winner. I'm glad they ended up going in the direction they did with this episode, because I was worried they were gonna make it seem like Skidmark's track was better just because he got to the end first. Yeah, unlike the Disney John Henry story, this episode acknowledges that quantity is, in fact, less useful than quality. Although, to be fair, the actual John Henry story was more about freedom, but that's not the point right now. An extremely simple lesson, and one that stands strong no matter how you put it. Skidmark's rivalry is portrayed as completely arbitrary, as most rivalries tend to be, and he tries to outdo someone just to prove a point. But unfortunately, that means he ends up losing due to his low-quality creation, despite winning time-wise. Insert reference to AI art here. And in the end, Skidmark completely snaps out of his craze, and ends up realizing he was better off just not participating in the rivalry at all. A good message in an honestly pretty entertaining episode. Though there was a large amount of dead air in this episode that could have been replaced. The blatant cynical humor of this episode made up for it though. I guess that's really all I have to talk about here. Skidmark's character feels pretty pretty consistent, the animation is slightly better, and the pacing felt mostly well done. I should probably stop waffling and just move on. Keep On Truckin' is about Chet and Turbo's father, named Daryl, showing up at the Fast Crew's home. He came around to invite his sons on a road trip in his truck, which they accept with joy. The whole time the two are trying to compete for Daryl's attention, which starts to irritate him. The two end up causing issues for Daryl's job, and after expressing his frustrations, Chet and Turbo leave feeling distraught. The three talk it out and express they're all proud of each other. They end up running into a group of road pirates led by Slushbeard, who is Dirtbeard's brother. They all work together to fight the pirates off and reclaim their truck, and Daryl is very proud of him. And Turbo and Chet get left behind after the load is delivered. They probably die or something. So I guess the title is meant to reference the Deuce introductory episode, where Turbo referenced the phrase, but it turns out he actually has a family history around trucking. Can't say I expected that. Anyway, this is a pretty simple family tale about learning to be proud of your family members for achieving great deeds and trying to push past your frustrations as they try their best to understand you. So it's kind of like the first Buster episode, family and all. It's a nice moral and all, but I feel like the pacing of the episode kind of made it less enjoyable than the Buster episode. Some events happened a lot faster than others, and things that deserved more time didn't really get it. And frankly, in the Buster episode, it's meant to be unreasonable that Smooth is upset at Buster, but here it's very reasonable, as they mess up his drive several times. I feel like a better moral could have been to not try and best your other family members, and rather to just accept what you can get, while acknowledging the actual scale of your achievements. It's a bit of a hard truth, but it's what this episode felt like it was leading up to. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe the portrayal we did get, being to look at achievements equally, is better. Frankly, I think we need to be a bit more grounded about this topic. Just take what I said with a pinch of salt, I guess. Point is, this is less good than the Buster episode. Turbo and Chet seem relatively consistent. They both try to do good but end up causing harm, ignorant all the way. It's just that Chet is a weensy bit of an idiot this episode. He doesn't account for the organization of Daryl's truck, nor does he understand that Turbo is trying to give him a not-so-subtle hint. But at least he's not obsessed with safety in this episode, unlike others. That's something. I guess that's it. The animation is even better than the last, and the setting is pretty cool. Frankly, I'm amazed that this road trip episode managed to not be very boring. Very cool. Very, very cool. Deserted Island starts with the Fast Crew and Tito in the Dos Bros plane, on their way to Bermuda. Based on the title and the setting, you can probably guess what's gonna happen. Since Tito is flying the plane by himself, and White Shadow's an idiot, the plane crashes onto an island in the middle of the ocean. Tito, meanwhile, is floating in the ocean on a life raft. For unknown reasons, the island the Fast Crew are on happens to rain candy, and has flora made of candy. While the crew are happily enjoying the island, they come across a weird temple inhabited by yellow ants. The ants take Whiplash and sacrifice him to their fudge volcano. The rest of the Fast Crew try to help, but get captured, only for White Shadow to come around and eat the entire volcano to save them. But by the end they're still trapped out at sea. At least Tito is. So I guess this show is really having a phase with referencing movies now. This is meant to be Cast Away, right? Or maybe it's referencing any dang show that has a plot like this, because this is surprisingly common. Anyway, at least this one doesn't copy the plot or anything. And frankly, I think this episode is kinda cool. The setting is really neat, and it's explained well in universe. A cargo ship spilled candy in the ocean, and it became an island. And to bugs, it would just seem like a normal-sized island. If you're getting annoyed at me calling snails bugs, then get over it, because it's easier than saying mollusks and bugs. Anyway, the plot is pretty well paced and the animation is okay, but unfortunately now I have to complain. There's two plots in this episode. One is about the Fast Crew on the island, and one is about Tito. I praised the former, so what about the latter? Well, I don't really like it that much. It's entertaining and all, I just feel really bad for Tito the whole time. Every time he faces punishment like this, it feels unjustified. All he did was have the confidence to fly a private jet with a load of animals on it. Who knows what happens to the rest of the animals? He crashes and gets stuck on a raft with a lion and gazelle, and for some reason the animals bully Tito the entire time. Then when it seems like he's getting rescued, the captain of the cruise ship ends up bullying Tito too, and then he gets chased by sharks. What did he do to deserve this? It'd be more entertaining if it wasn't torture porn the whole time. Sorry, writers. As for the characters, they're okay. Whiplash feels a bit brainless in this episode. Chet has been entirely replaced by a robot, which looks very unsettling. Burn gets addicted to the sugar sand. White Shadow is addicted to food. Skidmark doesn't try to help at all. Turbo and Smooth don't really have anything unique around him in this episode. All of the characters, with the exception of Chet, I guess, feel flanderized. Oh yeah, and I guess I have to quickly define that. It's when a character exhibits only their most popular trait and noticeably loses dimensions along the way. It's usually a sign of too many writers in the kitchen. I guess at least they're not taking steps backwards or anything. Lastly, the humor is kinda lame. Notably, there was this one joke that played with your expectations. It was set up as if Skidmark was going to be his usual self, making conspiracy theories about what caused the island, but instead he says a completely reasonable theory, being that the map is outdated. That was funny on its own, but then Turbo slowly explains to the audience that the writers expertly subverted your expectations, and all the while the joke became less and less funny. You don't have to explain the joke, I get it. Skidmark did something unexpected. Besides all that, this episode is okay. Not really any moral to speak of, besides that overeating is bad, according to this episode. Thank you for justifying my comments in the last video, Turbofast. Let's proceed. The dry spell is about Byrne realizing she hasn't won any races lately, compared to the rest of the Fast Crew. She tries to participate in easy races to get herself back on track, no pun intended, but she loses. She becomes desperate to race, but no one wants to participate, so she has to find other hobbies. She ends up becoming infatuated with Chet, but Chet is unhappy with her being so nice because he prefers her more violent personality. The rest of the Fast Crew are also bothered by Byrne being nice, because they no longer have a reliable voice of reason. To get Byrne back, they have to get Byrne to win a race, and they succeed, and all is well again. So let's see, the moral here is, I guess, similar to schizophrenia, maybe? That you should try and help your friends be their best and normal selves. Fine, I guess. At least this episode does it better than Schizophrenia did. Byrne burns out on racing, and so she changes because of the lack of aggression and stress in her life. It's not because her friends complained about her personality, she just naturally changed. So far this feels more realistic and less mean. Then immediately it's apparent that her new personality is unfavorable among the group. They don't prefer the new her at any point, making it apparent that this new personality change is a bad thing. Then they try to help her get back on the right track, no pun intended again, and now she's getting fixed, showing that they are willing to help their friends fix themselves rather than just letting them figure it out on their own while criticizing them. Though I still have a problem with the general message. This show likes to discourage changes in personality. Snails get made fun of or disliked for being unlike themselves, and it's quite clear they need fixing. I get it, it's an episodic show, and they need things to revert to the status quo each time, but you can just ignore the topic altogether then. Or even just have some kind of mini arc in the background, like how Chet has swapped between being cowardly to braver, or how Turbo became less ignorant, or how Whiplash embraced his softer side. The other characters are relatively stationary, and even then the characters that are having mini arcs often revert back and forth when the episode's plot calls for it. To discourage change in people is to, well, be ignorant. People change and sometimes you need to adjust to it. It's not always a bad thing, it's not always a good thing, but it for sure is a natural part of life. Teach kids to understand it, not to reject it. You'll be holding back people who wish to grow and mature, and better themselves. Yes, they need the team dynamic, but they don't need Byrne to fill that role if she wants to change. Someone else can fill it, or they can adjust without it. It's just an unfavorable message is my point. Besides all of that waffling, let's talk about how this episode waffles. The plot is relatively simple, which unfortunately means there needs to be a lot of empty air. But there is a noticeable amount of empty air. I get it, Byrne's niceness is causing the crew issues, but you don't need to spend a whole minute explaining why for each person. Just show me briefly and I'll understand. They could have spent more time on bringing the old Byrne back instead. Lastly, the animation looks quite bad in this episode. Again, it has that amateurish flash animation look to it. It's quite ugly, and certainly not what I like to see from this professional show that has proven time and time again that it's capable of some truly competent animation. So it sucks. This season is kinda mid so far. I'm praying it picks up. He Got Game Night is about a couples-only party that Turbo is jealous about because he has no one to go with. This episode is exactly like Casino Night of The Office, in that Turbo tries to get Thora to come, she initially rejects, so he tries to get Hayaku instead, and they both end up coming to the party, so Turbo has to juggle them both. He consults the help of Chet and Byrne, who help keep them separated, but the two end up meeting and getting along very well, while getting upset at Turbo for lying to them, and then Turbo gets kicked out for causing an odd number of guests in the party, and now everyone hates Turbo. So the moral here is probably not to lie, but that's far too simple. I think the lesson here is to not be so flaky in relationships, because I know Thora isn't really Turbo's love interest anymore, but he sure treats her like a date, and either way he's constantly neglecting one for the other. It's all because he got jealous to the point of consulting two different women to go with him as a date. Like, come on man, have some level of loyalty. At least Thora doesn't hate Turbo. Well, she probably dislikes him now thanks to this episode. At least she didn't hate Turbo. This feels a bit un-Turbo of Turbo, quite honestly. He seems pretty committed to the people he has good bonds with, but thankfully he gets what he deserves in the end. So I guess that makes all of my criticism invalid or something. That's a joke. There's not really much to say. The animation is okay and the pacing feels fine here. I just find this kind of plot immensely boring and frustrating, as I wait for the two to finally meet and everything to be completely fine by the end, and Turbo getting his comeuppance. It's mostly boring in that we hardly get to see much of the party either. It's just a few things here and there, but most of the plot is about keeping Hayaku and Thora away from each other. Meh, boring. Let's move on. 73 apostrophe is about the mysterious victory of White Shadow, despite apparently being the slowest racer in the crew. Skidmark explains it's a matter of superstition, and White Shadow needs to study what he did during the day to recreate his success. Whiplash starts to get suspicious as White Shadow keeps beating him. He breaks believing the superstition is real, and so White Shadow becomes his new mentor. It turns out, through recreating his routine, that White Shadow has been using illegal fuel to do better in races by accident. Trying to beat an old record of 73 victories, White Shadow feels confident that he can use normal fuel and still win. He loses, but he still has his pride intact. This episode doesn't really seem to have much of a moral to it either. I guess superstition is a whole load of baloney. Yeah, I don't know if the smart people watching this needed to hear that, and I don't know if superstitious people wanted to hear that. Either way, I guess it works. And it's neat that it tries to subvert your expectations right at the end, making you think White Shadow wins, but in reality he got miserably in last place because he was so far back on laps. The show nearly bit, but it didn't, thankfully. Weirdly, I think the characters are pretty consistent here. I say weirdly because it seems as though they're acting unlike themselves, but it still feels natural to me. White Shadow's routine of bizarre activities has him think he's got some superstitious formula down, which makes sense given what we know about his plush bee on his racing shell, that it supposedly brings him good luck. And he also gets information from Skidmark, who has been shown to be one of his bestest friends. Whiplash is immediately unwilling to believe any superstition, but when White Shadow keeps winning, he feels as though there might be something behind it all. But it's not presented as if he necessarily believes the superstition, just that he wants to investigate the circumstances and see if anything might be causing the miraculous luck streak. And lo and behold, he quickly figures it out. And of course he's willing to just let White Shadow get a taste of the consequences for his gullibleness. It all seems in character, so good job, show. The characters have some more defined layers now. Besides that, I've got nothing to really say. Animation kinda stinks, the characters occasionally look off-model, humor is meh, aesthetics are lacking, pacing is good. Let's go. Crew Detective is about Whiplash seeking admission from one of the Fast Crew members regarding his broken pumice stone. We slowly find out that all of the Fast Crew members had some involvement with the stone, but none of them actually broke it. It turns out that Deuce was in the clubhouse the whole time and caused the pumice stone to break by using it on the toilet. Oh, that was a pretty short summary. Really, you just have to watch this episode, because what's implied to be dead air in my summary is actually a lot of entertaining subplots that I cut out. Yeah, this episode is really entertaining. I like all the different excuses each of the Fast Crew had to use the pumice stone, and all of them relatively make sense to each character. The episode doesn't have a moment of dead air, in fact, as it feels like each scene lasts as long as it should, and it looks pretty neat with the whole detective aesthetic and all. Now on characters, this episode is very central on them. Let's go one by one. Whiplash is upset about his pumice stone being broken and contaminated with disgusting materials, and he insists that he gets a replacement because he feels whoever caused the accident is obligated to make up for it. This feels in character considering Whiplash often lets snails face their own consequences when they're struggling with ignorance. He doesn't want to be the responsible one for others' actions, is my point. Byrne being as competitive as she is, while not caring about using something that doesn't belong to her, feels right too. She is competitive, we know that already, but her using something that both isn't hers and isn't actually what she's meant to use, but still using it despite that, feels like something Byrne would do. And the fact that she quivers to Whiplash is pretty neat too. White Shadow is dumb and uses the stone as a toothbrush. Enough said. Smooth uses the stone to help engage in a fantasy roleplay with his brother, Buster, but insists he wants no one to know about it. Of course, considering he's learned to appreciate his brother's interests and is willing to try funky activities, this only feels logical. Skidmark insisting he's unwilling to indulge in what he does all day, while very openly admitting to doing something as arbitrary as creating a bottle in a ship, not a ship in a bottle, is rather funny. And of course, in character. He's never been willing to indulge in his secrets, all of which have been shown to be, for the most part, completely arbitrary. Now, Chet is the most interesting case. Apparently he used the stone to try and scare away a bunch of flies like a psycho. Now that's a fun development. He cares for snails, not other animals. That's been quite well established in the past. And for him to chase away the flies using a pumice stone to get them to stop loitering is wild. Like, dang, that's the inner Byrne, the character Byrne I mean, that I was curious about in Chet. I like it. It's an interesting step forward with his character that doesn't feel unloyal or anything. Lastly, Turbo just uses it not realizing it was Whiplash's and apologizes a lot for it. Yep, a lot of consistency in this episode. Makes me happy to see it. Now besides that, I don't have much to add. They recycled the same joke from the season 2 finale with Skidmark. It's not funny anymore, guys, come on now. The animation is pretty decent, probably because it's a simple episode. The visual gags are quite funny. That's it. Let's continue now. The Whiplash effect starts with Whiplash, once again, putting the crew under heavy stress to try to train them. By mistake, Whiplash gets hit violently with a baseball and ends up getting amnesia. Yeah, you know where we're going with this. They want to change Whiplash so that he's nicer and a slave and all that. Turbo doesn't like the idea, but the rest of them are into it and try to convince Turbo it's the right idea by gaslighting him. They all start neglecting practice, and all the while Whiplash is becoming utterly miserable. They try racing without practice, and a rock ends up hitting Whiplash that grants him his memory back, but then the rest of the Fast Crew get amnesia. Dang it. Another very simple lesson. Don't neglect things out of laziness. And, well, don't gaslight your friends when they get amnesia. I don't know how many of us have friends with amnesia, though. This is a rather cruel episode to Whiplash. All of his friends, besides Turbo, are willing to manipulate him in a way to make their lives easier. So yet another personality change episode. Hooray. Chet is mysteriously absent from this episode, besides giving Whiplash shocks to wake him up. You know they kept him out just to allow this plot to even happen, because you know that he would step up with Turbo and stop all the gaslighting from happening, and hence the plot would not happen. Yeah, I guess it's in character for the others, but having that voice of reason mysteriously absent is certainly suspicious. Turbo makes sense, because he's gullible, but they could have at least found an excuse for Chet to be missing. Nope, he's just gone. Alright, man. I feel bad for Whiplash and Turbo alike, but the Fast Crew definitely got what they deserved by the end. Not amnesia specifically, but getting wounded because they were ill-prepared. We just don't really get an opportunity to see them admit they were wrong, which I thought was a bit annoying. At least Whiplash gets sweet vengeance at the end. Even if, again, I don't think Turbo really deserved it as much. Also, it's weird that Whiplash is so hard on the crew once again, like all the way at the beginning of season 1. I thought we got past that conflict. No, apparently not. Besides all that, the animation's good, humor's okay, blah blah. Kinda want to speed through this now. Dial M for Mystery is about Chet renting a mansion for a roleplay party with the Fast Crew, besides Whiplash who wasn't invited. Whiplash shows up anyway, and declares vengeance on the crew for neglecting practice and being uninvited. Suddenly the lights click off and back on, and Whiplash passes out with a tranquilizer dart in his neck. The crew start searching for clues and all accuse each other, clearing one another with alibis. The end was suspecting Chet, who has no alibi, and before he's banished from the mansion, Whiplash reveals he's framed the whole thing himself, and everyone praises him for successfully proving he can be fun, until they all want to murder him when he wants them all to practice anyway. So ignoring the blatant Onision reference in this episode, this one is pretty good, and also ignoring that it's basically beat for beat the same as Crew Detective. But I like mysteries, so I don't mind it too much. And it had a different ending anyway. The mystery was certainly intriguing, even if my ultimate guess was that it was fake, probably because I've seen the show before. I was still curious about how the others would clear their names. And again, it's sensible. I would say they're all pretty in character too. Yeah, that's right, I'm delving into the characters again. Let's go one by one again. Skidmark filming the whole thing to cheat, obviously. Even more like him to have the camera facing the wrong way, given he's done many sensible things in the wrong ways in the past. White Shadow sneaking away to eat the food, all the while gaslighting himself into thinking he had actually done it. Of course. He's dumb and he likes food. And he gaslit Turbo in the last episode. Smooth sneaking away to commit the crime himself but being beaten to it. Seems about right, considering he's expressed frustration around Whiplash and the others bossing him around. And while it feels in his nature to go out of his way to knock Whiplash out, even though they're friends, as shown by previous episodes, Byrne is too scared of the dark to have done it. Again, given that we know she has some deep fears that halt her aggressive nature, this fits logically. I'm just hoping the show was consistent with that fear. Maybe I'll put examples on screen if it didn't. Turbo's only proof being physical evidence, rather than any kind of alibi, probably makes the most sense for him. It's not like he has any kind of excuse like the other characters, and he certainly wouldn't have shot Whiplash. Funny that the crew act like this is solid evidence there was no bushy mustache hair around Whiplash, despite the fact that he was knocked out with a blow dart, and hence he wouldn't need to be around Whiplash to knock him out. But maybe they just want any evidence that they could get because they knew in their hearts Turbo would never do it. Or the writers just kind of foregore. Lastly, Chet seemingly having no alibi or evidence in his favor at all the while refusing to invite Whiplash, tormenting Byrne but staying loyal to her, and him pressing down hard on an organization. I would say most of that is in his character. Refusing to invite Whiplash to the party, not as much, honestly. Yeah, he probably doesn't want him ruining their party, but considering the two are all about sensibility around practice and whatnot, I'm surprised they couldn't reach some kind of compromise. And really it just seems mean. It's more like a Byrne or even Skidmark or Smooth thing. We can't be having 4 characters who dislike Whiplash, come on now. Anyway, the characters are good. But you know what else is good? The humor. I was quite surprised by how funny this episode was. It was mostly slapstick that got me. I like slapstick, so of course it did. But generally the humor got me more than usual. Applause for that. As for the rest of the writing, it was good. The pacing felt right, nothing really hung around too long. Maybe my only complaint was spending more time than necessary on characters like Smooth and Byrne, rather than Turbo or Chet. Could have had slightly better balance there, but it wasn't too bad. Overall a good episode. How about the next one? Turbo Real is about Turbo starting a reality show around him and the Fast Crew. They all feel awkward and as though their personal lives are being over-dramatized and overshared. A bunch of silly drama starts between them, and when they get past their issues, which were fake all along, the reality show crew leave out of boredom. And nothing really came out of it. Meh. This episode was pretty boring. And, well, like I said, there wasn't really anything major from this episode. It tries to establish Skidmark and Smooth as being best friends who accept each other for their uniqueness, but this was hardly shown in the show before this point. Besides maybe Skid being one of Smooth's guys, but he has a lot of other guys who he seemingly isn't as close with. The rest of the Fast Crew are as surprised as me, so I don't know. Weird development. Wish there was something else hinting to it besides them faking the whole drama, but I guess the two work well enough together. They're both quirky and like slacking off. I think that's it. I guess they both like fictional mumbo-jumbo. Skidmark likes conspiracies, Smooth likes Buster's role-playing. Didn't ever seem like they were all that interested in each other's hobbies though. Anyway, enough waffling about that. I really only have minor comments. We learned that Whiplash really likes reality shows, which feels somewhat in character. I kinda expected that development more out of Burn, but maybe I've got it all wrong. The animation is pretty mid and the humor isn't all that great. The fake drama between Smooth and Skid isn't that interesting. Turbo's VA line reading at the beginning feels a little awkward. Also, Turbo's obsessed with brand deals and getting money, which feels quite in character, and it's pretty funny. Yeah, it's okay I guess, that's all. Best Frenemies is about White Shadow feeling neglected by Skidmark, so Turbo offers to spend time with him instead. They end up having a lot of fun and become best friends, which makes Skidmark jealous. He decides to try and make White Shadow feel jealous to try and get his attention back. He tries to make friends with Whiplash instead, but Whiplash feels distressed that he isn't liked for being himself, so Skid ditches him. He tries making other friends, but it keeps failing. He finally snaps and tries to set up a fake scenario to win White Shadow over. Things go awry, but White Shadow helps out and admits he was Skidmark's best friend all along. The episode ends with Turbo probably dying. Alas, an episode with a moral. So this one is seemingly about not letting jealousy overwhelm you, and instead understanding that some people just have phases. Well, that feels a bit familiar. Insert footage of Chet gets burned here. Though this one is related to friendship, so it feels a lot more real. Personally, I struggled with feeling like friends are neglecting me in favor of others, and it stings. In fact, it's happened so much that it's caused me considerable trauma, and I no longer try making new friends. Sorry, I got a bit too personal. Anyway, it's possible that a friend is simply moving away from you, as you both mature and grow up. But it's also possible to have fun with multiple friends at different times. It's not necessarily because you did anything wrong. It's just because you might not provide something that the person could instead get out of someone else. For instance, Skidmark likes playing video games with White Shadow, but in this instance, White Shadow preferred to do physical stunts with Turbo. It's just how they feel at the time, and it's certainly nothing besides harmful to that person to take away that friend and try to keep all of their attention to yourself. It's why that person has multiple friends in the first place. Something this episode didn't explore too deeply, probably because that would be too much at once. Regardless, a good surface level look, and portrayed quite well in this episode, as Skidmark slowly breaks down with jealousy, taking more and more drastic measures. Good stuff. Now besides all that, the character development is surprisingly lacking. We learn Skidmark has jealousy issues, something I didn't really expect from him. We also learn Whiplash feels distressed when people don't like him for who he is, and instead expect something different of him. It's a one-off joke, but I'm gonna take it seriously anyway. This is something I expected more out of his character. He's often neglected by the Fast Crew because they find him unlikable, and to see him finally break down and admit, on 2 occasions, that he just wants to be appreciated by the Fast Crew is quite sad. I kinda wish it would get fully explored in a full episode, but it probably won't. It's still got some nice tasty layers, and you know how I like those. Besides writing, I have nothing to add. The animation quality keeps going up and down in the season. Humor was meh, you get it by now. The Jamaican Jerk Chickens, least weird title ever, is about a bobsledding competition taking place with a Starlight City team participating. For some reason, they're European. The team ends up severely injured and they have to be replaced by the Fast Crew, of course. They all train and get ready to compete against a team of Jamaican chickens who keep trying to sabotage them. Chet, the coach, has to take over as the driver, using his knowledge of the track. They end up victorious and everything works out. Man, this show likes sudden conclusions. I expected more at the end, but it just ended. Like the Rudy episode. Not like we really missed as much this time, I guess. Anyway, this was a pretty action-oriented episode, so I don't have much to say writing-wise. Interesting to see that Whiplash is starting to gain gullibility and lose the sharp wit he used to have in the earlier seasons. It's almost like Turbo is learning from Whiplash and Whiplash is learning from Turbo. And, well, it can work, but it doesn't really work here. Whiplash just feels stupid every time it happens. What happened to the snail who knew about pirate rules and mall rules and whatnot? Now he falls for what Chet refers to as the oldest trick in the book. That just feels wrong. Besides that, the animation is back to mid, the humor is okay, the pacing was a bit rough, but it wasn't egregious. The original bobsled team being European, I honestly can't tell what accent that is, haha Americans, am I right, was for some reason odd continuity, given the rather obvious ignorance the other snails had about other cultures, or at least that was the case for Skidmark anyway. I guess this is another shorter review. Sorry, sometimes I don't always have a lot to say. Let's continue our trek to the end. Oh, I remember both of these episodes quite well. Interesting. The Ants and the Grasshoppers is, quite obviously, based on the fable of a similar name. The episode starts with Shadow, Turbo, and Smooth being approached by a couple of ants who want their help. They explain they collect food all year but have these lazy grasshoppers stealing from them. They agree to help test their defense systems, managing to get all the way to the end, but by the end it's revealed the ants actually wanted help with breaking into the grasshoppers' home to steal their food. The snail trio try to make things right, setting up a situation to gain the ants' trust and get them trapped in an ant farm. And presumably the grasshoppers steal their food back. This episode was surprisingly well paced given how much was packed into it, and the story itself, thanks to having plenty to work with, was quite entertaining. And the twist was unexpected. Even though I knew about it already, I just suspect first watchers wouldn't have seen it coming. The ants successfully gaslit me into believing they were genuine and all, without the stupid fake voices that the snails put on when they're faking a plan. Yeah, get the kitties to understand they're lying, but like, come on. Don't insult their intelligence that hard. We heard them say they were going to take the food back from the ants. Before I ramble any more about the condescending nature of the show, I'm exaggerating for comedic effect, let me find something else to talk about. The characters chosen for this plot make sense. Turbo is gullible, White Shadow is dumb, and Smooth is not particularly witty. And they all seem like the type to want to laze about on occasion and only do things out of obligation. So it makes sense they'd be the central characters here, and that Turbo has to encourage the other two to help out just to be kind. And thankfully they don't gaslight him out of it this time. The rest of the characters, again, being missing feels weird. Like, where are they? If this was season 1, we'd have an intervention with Whiplash feeling suspicious, but somehow being excluded from the plot, likely just unwilling to help. Here in season 3, there's no Whiplash to be found. Rather tragic. But again, the episode had a tight plot, so I guess it needed to cut that setup out. I'm not devastated. That's, all I have to say. Let's move on now. Don't Feed the Troll is about Turbo finding a Turbo hater on his forums. Turbo wants to meet him to change his mind, but Chet discourages it. Skidmark helps Turbo anyway, and they locate his house out in a dumpster. The whole time, Skidmark thinks he's a fictional monster, and he does nothing else to help Turbo. Turbo tries and fails many times to get the troll to like him because trolls dislike popular things. Turbo finally snaps, but realizes after he's lost respect among his fans, he can finally get the troll to like him, until Skidmark ruins everything, and Turbo immediately goes back on the lesson he supposedly learned. Though despite Turbo going back on it, I think the lesson is quite good. It's to not expect everyone to like you. Indeed, as we've learned in this series, not everyone will like you. Some people will hate you for the most arbitrary or silly reasons. It's just human nature to hate things. And unfortunately, if you waste too much time on those people, you'll only be neglecting those who do like you. And it's more important to appreciate those people, because they'll actually give you the time of day, and the people who hate you will probably try to hurt you anyway, so just don't bother with them. Let them wallow in loathing, all alone, if that's what they want. And geez, this episode really doubles down on making fun of trolls. They gave the troll a lisp, made him a miserable homeless guy, and he's literally a fly. He outright states he hates things that are popular, even hating his own parents who are lovely to him. Like, dang, this is about as harsh as I've seen the show get towards internet culture. But not in the cringy, blatantly wrong way, because there are absolutely people like this on the internet. Twitter. And they are about as unbearable as this fly is. So it makes this episode frustrating on purpose, and therefore I am obligated not to hate it. Though I'm surprised he seems to have so much patience with Turbo constantly bugging him, no pun intended. Even Turbo seems to get angrier than the troll. I guess that's a bit more realistic though, maybe. Anyway, with all that said, I have nothing to add. Skidmark is annoying, Tito shows up for some reason. Yeah, we're nearing the end now, so I'm allowed to start rushing. Worst in Show is kind of a parody of Best in Show. The Fast Crew discover a baby moth who is in poor condition, so they decide to take it in. Whiplash is impressed by how pretty the moth is, so he wants to take it into a moth competition show. Apparently Whiplash has a history in moth shows, in which he got disqualified for cheating. One of his old competitors is unhappy he has returned to steal her victories, and now wants to compete against him again. Obviously she cheats, and obviously Whiplash wins despite that, but he has to quit moth shows because his moth finds its actual owner and takes it back. At least he got a satisfying close on that chapter, I guess. I tried to watch Best in Show, the movie, but I got really bored of it and didn't finish it. Thankfully this episode isn't a feature-length film, so I didn't stop watching it, but I was very bored the whole time. Maybe it's just not the kind of thing I'm interested in, but I do not care for dogs or moths being judged as a plotline, especially if the ending is very predictable. And unlike an episode with this plotline that I do enjoy, that one Mr. Bean episode, this one isn't really a parody of any kind. It's just a completely normal moth show, besides the sabotage, I suppose. So it's not funny enough to make up for the boring nature of it. And I can't really look to the characters for support either. Remember the Whiplash that insisted the tomato games in season 1 were worthless and dumb, only putting effort in to compete against his old mentor that he hates? Well, here we have a similar setup, except Whiplash apparently does enjoy moth shows. And he didn't even remember his old competitor Enemy, so it's not like he's motivated to beat her. It feels drastically out of character for Whiplash. Like, yeah, I can maybe accept Whiplash enjoying lavender lotion and watching reality shows, but something like this has been contradicted in the show. I guess unless Whiplash just has a certain appreciation for certain sports. Frankly, those are both competitions involving stunts, one where you train an animal and one where you do them yourself, so it's more like appreciating tennis versus table tennis. Weird to hate one but not the other is my point. Anyway, I'm kinda spiraling into a stupidity hole again, so I guess the animation is okay. The humor is lackluster, the pacing is pretty bad, with a lot of empty air dotted in the episode. The moths are cute. I am a dog person, thanks for asking. Let's carry on. Belle of the Gumball is about the fast crew discovering Chet is the handsomest snail alive, according to a magazine. Chet gets a lot of unneeded female attention, including some from a rich woman snail named Donatella. She asks him out to a gala, and to bribe Bern out of the picture, she shows Bern her private gumball machine, and of course this entices her. Chet feels betrayed, going along with Donatella to make Bern feel bad. Bern gets haunted by her guilt, and comes to the gala to approach Chet and apologize, and the two exchange romantic gestures while ditching Donatella, and then Bern eats Chet at the end. I think I mentioned this earlier, but I do indeed have a comprehension of romantic love, and I think thanks to that, this episode comes off a little sweeter to me. The moral here is not to betray your beloved in favor of something else that you happen to love. I suppose that can count other people, but well, that's not really explored here as much. Reasonably, when Chet starts to suspect that Bern only appreciates him for what he provides her, all kinds of gifts that she gets from the attention Chet receives, he feels betrayed, as if she didn't really love Chet, but all the things surrounding Chet. And when it comes down to Bern being offered to take a gumball machine over Chet, Bern proves, in Chet's mind, that he was right. Bern gets to appreciate the thrill the gum gives her, but when she realizes she hurt Chet's feelings and dropped him off on some rich woman he hardly knows, she feels guilt and admits she made a mistake. That's what true love is all about. You can make mistakes, no couple is perfect obviously, but atoning for those mistakes and fixing yourself to never let it happen again is what really makes you an ideal partner. And considering we only have 3 episodes left, I'm assuming Bern will indeed never do this again, so I can forgive what she's done here. And Chet can too, which is good. Besides all that, I do unfortunately have to lay down a couple of criticisms. The animation here is quite rough. Like, oftentimes characters' lip sync will be delayed, and they'll move in very scuffed ways. This is probably among the worst the show's gotten in the way of animation, only being beaten by The Great Shell Robbery. And as usual, the humor here kinda sucks. I guess it's nice that they pulled back a bit here, considering it was more of a serious, character-centric episode, but this was particularly unfunny. I guess I thought it was funny when Bern tried eating Chet right at the end. Meh. The writing was good, but the rest was just okay. On to the next one. Hawaii 5-No is about Bern getting 2 tickets to Hawaii. She tempts the rest of the fast crew to start competing for the extra ticket, considering that Bern is too anxious to go with her. They bite and start outdoing each other to win Bern over. She says she'll decide by the end of the day, but ends up delaying the choice as she realizes how nice it is to have everyone serving her every whim. The fast crew realize they've been swindled out of free labor, and after expressing their frustrations, Bern calls and realizes her vacation was actually a scam, and then the fast crew just go on their own vacation to Hawaii. Another episode I'm a bit mixed on. I guess I'll start with the positives, which unfortunately means I'm not talking about the character writing first. The humor in this episode is consistently good. Like, this is a rather stark contrast to the last episode. The slapstick was funny, and the rest of the jokes often got me laughing. Surprising for this show. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that if I'm trying to make this show look good, though. I've said worse things. Anyway, the animation also looks quite nice. Well, in Season 3 standards anyway. Compared to Season 1, this would be pretty average quality. But you get it. Also, as usual, the pacing is pretty good in this episode, even if some sections are a little boring. And with that transition established, let's get to the bad stuff. The character writing is quite poor in this episode. What's the moral? Well, I think it wants to be about not letting your friends compete for your attention, and instead giving them all the fair chance they deserve, as your friends. But, well, there's 2 issues actually. One, this moral is very specific. I don't know how often this will apply in your real life. My friends are kind of on an invisible hierarchy in my brain, so logically some would get different treatment from me compared to the others. But if I was unfortunate enough to be approached by choosing from several friends on the same level, I would just Like, not bother. I'll just bring it up to one person I personally think would fit best and just not tell the others. This isn't too applicable of a scenario in real life. And 2, the show fails to portray this message. This is just like the Smoove nail painting episode. If Smoove hadn't lost his popularity, or in this case, if Byrne hadn't realized the tickets were a scam, then they would have continued being selfish jerks. And then they try to fist in the moral at the end, but it's so disingenuous when they have gone through no learning arc of any kind. They just kind of realize they lost their position of power and turn back to their friends whom they betrayed, gaslighting them into thinking they learned from their mistakes. This really sucks considering the last episode did favors for Byrne's character, but this one staggers her arc of learning not to be selfish. Before you say, but it's a fundamental part of her character, so they can't fix that considering this is an episodic show, then why did you even bring up the moral at all? At the very least, make it seem like she learned nothing, full stop. Anyway, angry ranting over. As for the other characters, Whiplash seems weirdly willing to be subservient to Byrne, despite him realistically probably not caring about this vacation at all, or at the very least suspecting that it might be a scam. The rest of the characters seem fine though. That's all I've got. The story of Jeff is an episode that I remember kinda sucked, but let's continue anyway. The episode starts with Turbo feeling disappointed that his fans are excited about an elusive Jeff, rather than him in his race against Hardcase. Hardcase also feels jealous, so the two work together to find out who Jeff is. They realize it's a group of kids who race in a junkyard, including Deuce, Edvard, Singe, Hubert, and some random maggot. Turbo forgives the group, but Hardcase is still hard-set on trying to steal his attention back, so he joins Jeff and leaves the rest of the group in the dust. He basks in the attention while the rest of Jeff start feeling like the fun of their group is starting to go away. Deuce goes to Turbo for help, and Turbo helps by motivating him. Deuce initially does well, but when he gets knocked off course, Turbo does an ironic turn of events by painting himself to look like Deuce to win. And now that everyone supports Deuce, Hardcase feels distraught and leaves the group. What? Okay. At least this episode acknowledges the extremely backwards moral. Because, like Deuce says, basically what we've learned here is to rely on other people to solve, i.e. cheat at, your problems. That's not very positive. Like, not in the ironic Monsters University kind of way. This is just a straight up terrible message. No, I won't go into depth why. If you have empathy and any kind of self-confidence, you should be able to figure out what's wrong here. The self-loathing psychopaths watching my videos can go look in the comments. It was a rather easy fix too. Just have the entire group work together in some way. Sure, it might be a bit stupid, but it's better than this at least. Besides that, this episode is pretty boring. Nothing major really happens throughout this entire episode, starting from Hardcase joining the group until the race of Deuce against Hardcase. It's just a montage of Jeff getting progressively more upset and eventually breaking. But even their breaking point is more of a gentle slope rather than something actually breaking. Their characters are fine, I suppose, but I don't really understand what Turbo and Hardcase's dynamic is meant to be at this point. Are they frenemies? Worst enemies? Just people who dislike each other in a casual manner? I have no clue. Kinda completely undermines the interest around Hardcase, considering he was meant to be Turbo's true enemy. Besides that, I don't have much to add, so yeah. This episode did indeed suck. We're nearing the end though, so hopefully things will get better from here. So this is kind of a double-length episode. The space episode was also a two-parter, but for some reason that fact didn't show up in the episode title. But now it's showing up here, so this is a bit awkward. It's basically a double episode, I guess, just structured a little more like a two-parter. This episode is about, well, take a dang guess. It's kind of like 22 short films about Springfield and The Simpsons, or Slice of Life and My Little Pony, i.e. it tells short tales of a bunch of random secondary characters, and some main characters here and there. There's not really much to describe in the summary, so I'll just highlight anything worth mentioning right now. Okay, so we see the rich slugs again. At least the show hasn't forgotten about them. Rudy also returns, and I feel just as bad for him as I did before. Hardcase is in this, and apparently he and Turbo are implied to be friends now. I don't know when that happened, but fair enough. There's a lot of random characters that don't get any kind of development or anything. We just see them in their random shenanigans. There's a lot of pop references. Ferris Bueller's Day Out, Jerry Seinfeld, sitcoms, probably some other stuff. The humor is pretty decent, I guess. The animation was kinda lame though, besides the thorough and silent but deadly fight. That was pretty good. I don't know, what else can you say? It's just something you have to watch for yourself, so watch it for yourself. If you care for these kinds of episodes anyway. Personally, I don't, but I'm obligated to watch and review the entirety of the show, so... Here it is, the finale. Even though the last episode kind of felt like a final close-off to all of the characters we met along the way, this is the proper end. Let's see how exciting these last 2 episodes are. 137 Hours starts with the Fast crew going on a charity trip, but as usual, Skidmark and White Shadow don't want to participate. But Smooth is ahead of the game this time and beats them to it. He pretends to have a broken tail, and now he has the whole place to himself for a week. He orders a large speaker, but it falls on him and crushes his tail, and now he's stuck there for the whole time. And of course he goes a bit crazy. Eventually he gets free, but ends up missing out on an actually exciting event because he decided to miss out on one that wasn't even useful. So I don't know why the show felt Smooth deserved that, but whatever. Speaking of, the show set Smooth's character back again. I'm serious, this show does not like Smooth. Remember the one time I mentioned that Smooth went to secretly roleplay with his brother and seemed really into it? Yeah, not anymore I guess. When he calls Buster, and when Buster eventually shows up, he seems absolutely distraught at the thought of roleplaying with him this time. Like, what happened? Does he not like this particular activity? Because he could have just said no thanks and suggested something else instead. Also, Buster suggested coming to his home, which gives Smooth the opportunity to be freed, but he says no, and never acknowledges how stupid rejecting it was. He's his brother who always felt obligated to save others from danger, especially him, and he missed on the opportunity to get saved by him because all of a sudden he hates Buster's roleplay? Huh? Okay, well, despite that, I guess this episode is okay. It's a little boring here and there, some empty air. The animation is pretty decent, the pacing feels good. It's not an awful episode, I guess. Just a really lame penultimate episode, considering it set back Smooth's character anyway. Yeah, I know he's not bright, but he has something between his eye stalks. Surely a potential life or death situation would turn his brain on a little bit, as it has in the past. Whatever, maybe the actual finale is good. Stalks on a Plane is about the Fast crew and some other bugs engaging in a contest to win a toy plane. They have to keep a family-friendly part of their body on the plane for the longest, like a Silver Age Mr. Beast challenge basically. Sombrero Fly wins. That's all you need to know. Rather poetically, Turbo scoots off the screen and says, "That's it for me" at the end. Because, yeah, that's it for Turbo. Forever. Unless DreamWorks decides to make another arbitrary low-budget sequel that ignores the lore of the first film. Man, really? That was the finale? Oh, I feel kinda sad. Like, that's it. It wasn't even anything that special like the season 1 finale, or even the 12th episode. Well, I guess I have to review it anyway. Again, this episode isn't awful, I suppose. It's just not great either. The whole episode is about the snails trying to eliminate each other by being jerks. For some reason, Whiplash does not die due to Skidmark's prank. Trust me, I have snails near my home. If they're in the sun for a few seconds too long, they will fry into nothing besides their empty shells. The fact that Whiplash even cares about this competition is weird. The fact that this episode doesn't even consider the crew could share the plane is even more weird. This is a show about teamwork, yeah? And it ends on the crew not considering that prospect for a second. Even if Sombrero Fly wins, at least they could have thought of the idea and nobly agreed to allow each other to share the plane. Nope. Even Byrne goes out of her way to sabotage Chet because she doesn't like that Chet just wants to put it in a hangar. What? Why is he even here? Oh my lord. If you wanted a final competition between the Fast crew, make it make sense. This isn't it. Well, the animation is okay. The grotesque Skidmark is utterly disgusting. The humor was pretty lame, the plot itself was pretty boring, but I didn't hate watching it. I just hated that this was the finale of the show. Unfortunately, I don't have much to say about this episode, so let's just continue with the final season review. So, Season 3. It was about on par with Season 2, I would say. Generally, the animation was lower quality than usual, with no notable improvements or anything like that. Thankfully, there were less instances of animation inconsistency, or at least less jarring instances. And the show has managed to maintain a consistent art style throughout. I always thought the show had a nice style. It's just unfortunate that it becomes a little more obvious that they use flash animation. At least I'm pretty sure they do. It certainly doesn't look totally frame by frame. The writing for the episodes was generally okay. Some morals were quite well written and actually useful to be teaching to its watchers, but some were, at best, confused and at worst, downright harmful. But they were few and far between. If there weren't morals, there were relatively entertaining plots with a few exceptions here and there. Particularly stories that doubled down on action, or set up a mystery plot, which were fun watches. But the movie parodies were not as enjoyable, mostly because it felt as though the writers more or less recreated the media they were basing on, rather than making any kind of meaningful commentary on it. And in turn, just making a worse product than the original. However, I felt this season improved a bit in humor, as I found myself laughing at jokes more frequently, and they felt less like the low-hanging fruit of gross-out jokes, and more like actual thought-out jokes. And, well, it had good slapstick too. The characters were spared a little more in this season, hence protecting them from backtracking, but I felt there were more frequent cases of flanderization or just straight up ignoring previous developments, or previous traits that were established in other seasons, for the sake of moving the plot along. This was particularly the case with Whiplash, who started meddling with the other Fast Crew members to the point where it felt like his only contribution was making witty comments. Generally, the whole Fast Crew blends together to the point where they feel less like dynamic crewmates working together to a bunch of similar people who are in a team because they're all very similar. They all engage in the same kind of activities, oftentimes arbitrary, without contributing any of their own insight or anything. And with the characters remaining relatively stagnant, that means they don't develop much either. The exceptions were mainly Burn and Turbo, but, well, it wasn't particularly interesting development. As for my final comments, I believe this season was a relatively enjoyable watch. If you're just binging the whole show while doing something else in the background, I think you'll enjoy it. But when you sit down and properly understand what's happening in each episode, some pretty obvious flaws stand out. I can't exactly expect a perfect show, especially not one based on Turbo of all things, but I still feel there are standards that need to be set, and hence why I even review media in the first place. And, well, I guess that leads me on to my final conclusive thoughts on the show. I guess I'll format this like a bit of a Q&A, since I've pretty much said all of my conclusive thoughts in the season reviews. So let's start with the burning question. Is this show worth watching? It depends. Did you enjoy Turbo? Then you'll probably enjoy this. Even if you didn't, you'll probably enjoy it if you appreciate the slice of life mixed with occasional action. And, well, obviously I do, for both things. Otherwise, it probably won't be your thing. And even if the show does appeal to you, it won't be some kind of spectacular watch where you gain enlightenment and ascend to another plane just for viewing it. Nah, you'll just have a nice time. Whether that be through tearing the show to pieces because of its flaws, or just honestly sitting down and enjoying it because it's a fun show. Once again, I think I apply to both. It's fun just to watch this show, but it's also fun to sit down and analyze the issues with it. Because it's not like there's major destruction being done on people's childhoods. It's just a movie about snails who go fast, all the while teaching a rather poor message about not giving up no matter who you are. I would say it's more worthwhile to get some genuine messages about teamwork and accepting others through this show. If you're watching this video, that probably means you're old enough to understand which lessons you should and should not take to heart. As for whether this show is underrated, absolutely yes. I have seen no one talk about this show. I searched and no one else has reviewed it. That I could find anyway. I've never met anyone else who's known this show, but clearly there are fans if some of the official Turbo Fandom Wiki articles are filled in. Not by a huge extent, but clearly there are some Turbo Fast fans out there. And if you are one of them, hi, thank God I found you. I never thought I'd see the day. Anyway. I think the show has a lot of flaws, perhaps apparent in how much I talked about the show's problems, but it doesn't really make it bad. It feels like a pretty average children's show. All children's shows have bad episodes, and some more often than others. This one has a rather staggering ratio, but it still has some good ones that, I think, make this show worth it. Even if you just watch those handful of episodes I marked as especially good, that'll make me happy. I got someone new to check out this niche show, and I think given how good some of the episodes are, how average this seems to be in terms of children's shows, even if it can get pretty weird sometimes, and how charming its characters and animation is, that yes, this show is pretty underrated. No show this average deserves to be in the shadows as much as this show was. So that's it. Just give it a watch if this video got you interested. As for me, I'm very happy to be done with this. The script is 76 pages long. That's probably longer than anything else I've written so far. So please, I beg you, give this video a like if you got this far. I'm not trying to be annoying, I just frankly want to know if people gave me the time of day all the way through. Thank you so much if you did. This is not going to be the longest video on my channel, I can guarantee you. I have much more devious plans in mind in the future. And yes, like I said in my first video, I plan on reviewing yet another niche topic next time. I guess I can be generous enough to give you a hint, considering you watched all the way through. It's about a particular franchise where the main character wields a crowbar. And yes, this is niche, I swear. Good luck. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm sorry this video took so long. The next one will definitely take just as long as this one did. Good day, night, or whatever limbo state you may be in. I'll see you next time.